At the very edge of victory, Ian hears that the war is over and he is finally being called to receive the crown. That dream shatters instantly when the Duke drives a blade through Ian's chest from behind. Ian can barely believe it, because the man who stabbed him was the loyal supporter who raised a nameless bastard toward the throne. The Duke only whispers that if they had met earlier, things might have changed, and that now it is too late. Ian dies as the forgotten seventh son of King Tenon, betrayed just before his coronation and left with only one burning question. Then Ian opens his eyes in front of a mirror and sees a thin little boy staring back at him. The festival sounds outside and the shabby room confirm the impossible truth. He has returned to age 12, before the Duke's knights ever found him. What truly shakes him is the scar on his chest, because this child body should never have had the wound the Duke gave him. Ian's confusion turns into cold resentment as he keeps asking why the Duke betrayed him when the throne was already in reach. He swears he will make the Duke pay this time and seize the throne without letting it slip away again. Before the Duke's knights arrive, Ian decides he needs to gather his things, secure money, and recover his mother's belongings first. His planning is cut off when someone pounds on the door and drags him back to the ugly reality he had briefly forgotten. The shouting outside reminds Ian that at this age he is not a prince at all, but a serf who gets beaten if he is late to work. Out in the fields, the other serfs pile on the moment Ian arrives late and shove him back into harvest festival work. Ian forces himself to work, but his mind stays on clearing his mother's grave and finding the relic before he is taken away. The old farm tool feels strangely awkward in his hands now, and Ian realizes this work is wasting time he cannot afford to lose. Before Ian can slip away, Supervisor Johnson kicks him to the ground and starts enjoying the chance to humiliate him again. Johnson's abuse is not new at all, and Ian remembers how this man tormented him for being too handsome and too easy to pick on. Back then Ian even dirted his own face to avoid the supervisor, and that ugly first impression later made the Duke's knights look down on him too. This time Ian is clean, and Johnson sneers that the boy must be trying to catch the Lord's eye. When Ian quietly meets his gaze instead of shrinking, Johnson suddenly feels a pressure that does not fit a serf child at all. Years of royal training are still in Ian's head, and even one simple noble posture is enough to make Johnson instinctively flinch. Humiliated by his own hesitation, Johnson immediately calls over his gang and turns the moment into a public lesson. Ian recognizes the day at once and realizes these fools are picking a fight just days before the Duke's knights are supposed to come for him. Since he is leaving this place soon anyway, Ian stops pretending to endure it, and decides he has no reason to fear Johnson anymore. He openly challenges Johnson to fight one-on-one and mocks him for hiding behind underlings. Johnson takes the bait, furious that this skinny little serf dares to speak to him like an equal. Ian grabs a long stick from the field and calmly says he is glad he never gave up the sword after all. He lowers into a real sword stance, and the entire field bursts into laughter because no one can imagine this half-starved boy winning. The mockery only sharpens the contrast, because Johnson is huge, well-fed, and proud of his past as a soldier who learned from a knight. Johnson sneers that if Ian lands even one hit, he will excuse him from serf work for the day. Before Ian can even answer, Johnson lunges with a vicious surprise punch meant to crush him in one shot. To Ian, the attack suddenly looks slow, and his battlefield training tells him exactly how to avoid it. Ian slips around the punch and whips the stick into Johnson's leg, using the brute's own momentum against him. Before anyone can process it, Ian follows with a second overhead blow that slams Johnson's head into the ground. The whole field freezes in shock because the village bully just got dropped by the one boy everyone thought was helpless. Ian walks over, pins Johnson's throat with the stick, and asks with icy calm if he is done. Johnson cannot even answer, and his silent panic tells Ian this level of force was already more than enough. So Ian coolly claims the promise Johnson made and announces that he is taking the rest of the day off. The other serfs start to protest, but Ian cuts through the noise by reminding them the Lord will be here soon. That practical warning works immediately, and the crowd scrambles back to work while Ian simply walks off. As he heads back, Ian almost scoffs at himself for ever being afraid of Johnson when the man is really just a loud brute. What matters now is the relic, because his mother's keepsake has to be in his hands before the Duke's knights reach the village. Ian knows that in the future the relic somehow ends up with other nobles, and its absence will poison his first dealings with both the knights and the Duke. So he rushes into Johnson's room and starts tearing through the place, convinced the supervisor must have stolen it. At the same time outside, Johnson wakes up dazed and seethes over the humiliation of losing to Ian in front of everyone. Johnson decides he cannot let that insult stand, because if Ian gets away with it the other serfs will stop fearing him too. When one of his men reports that Ian is searching Johnson's room, Johnson immediately realizes the boy is after his mother's keepsake. The reason is simple: Johnson himself stole Ian's things, and now he sees a better way to ruin him than another direct fight. He heads off toward the Lord, planning to use soldiers and authority against a boy who dared to act like a knight. Back in the room, Ian still cannot find the relic and starts to suspect Johnson is either carrying it or already sold it. The thought hits harder because in his first life he cried over losing it, and the knights dragged him away before he could keep searching. Now that he understands the relic's true value, Ian knows he has only a short window left to recover it before the knights arrive again. He gives up on the room and prepares to trace where Johnson might have sold the keepsake instead. Just as Ian moves, the door creaks open and bright light spills into the room. An unfamiliar man stands there holding Ian's mother's familiar pocket and calmly asks if this is what he has been looking for. One of Johnson's lackeys suddenly appears with Ian's leather pocket and asks if this is what he wants. The second Ian sees his mother's relic bag, his mood flips cold and he demands it back. When the man hesitates, Ian grabs a stick and warns him again in a voice that sounds far too dangerous for a child. The lackey backs down and tosses the pocket over, claiming Johnson was kind enough to return it. Ian checks the pocket on the spot and realizes the necklace inside is gone. He raises the stick again and flatly threatens to break the man's legs if he lies about where the relic went. The lackey insists he is only delivering Johnson's message. If Ian wants the rest of his belongings back, he has to come to the plaza. Ian immediately reads it as a trap, but instead of panicking, he decides to walk into it. Because Johnson touched his mother's relic again, Ian tells the man to lead the way and quietly prepares to settle this. Elsewhere, Johnson sucks up to the local lord and presents Ian's stolen necklace as a bribe for soldiers. The lord accepts the gift and tells Johnson to take whatever soldiers he needs. Inside, Johnson fumes that he had to surrender such an expensive item just to save face as supervisor. When the lord asks why he needs armed men for one serf, Johnson paints Ian as a dangerous problem who changed overnight. Johnson pushes the lie further, claiming Ian may be tied to a forest witch and black magic that could ruin the harvest festival. That rumor hooks the lord at once, because turning in a black magic user could earn him a reward from the capital. Then the lord reveals an uglier plan. Slave traders are in his castle, and Ian's looks could bring in a fine price. Johnson eagerly plays along, and the lord laughs that he enjoys breaking children's bones, making their alliance openly monstrous. Behind the laughter, the lord is already deciding that Johnson should be disposed of once this is over. When Ian reaches the plaza, he sees the trap fully prepared with villagers gathered and soldiers sealing every exit with spears. Ian expected Johnson, but seeing the lord himself beside him makes the setup even clearer. He remembers exactly what kind of man this lord is, a fake good ruler who sells serfs and exploits women in a backwater territory. Johnson proudly declares that Ian has insulted both supervisor and lord and that this plaza will be his grave. Ian ignores the threat and asks only for his mother's keepsake back. Before anyone answers, Ian spots the necklace already glittering in the lord's hand and knows Johnson traded it for military backing. The sight steadies Ian instead of rattling him, because the relic is still within reach and this time he means to change the future around it. He politely asks for the keepsake back, but he still refuses to kneel, because even as a serf he will not bow when he knows his true blood. Johnson explodes at the disrespect and orders Ian to kneel immediately. The local lord studies Ian with amused interest, unconvinced that this clear-eyed child is really using black magic. Johnson pushes for violence, insisting they attack first so everyone can see that Ian's swordsmanship is unnatural for a serf. The local lord decides he does not even need the black magic charge, because Ian's rare looks alone would sell for a high price. Reading the lord's intent, the guard captain gives the order and soldiers rush Ian from all sides with bladed spears. Ian clicks his tongue at the sight of armed adults attacking a child, but he still snaps into motion before they can box him in. He starts parrying their spears cleanly, dodging where he must and striking only where it counts. Watching Ian outfight them, Johnson shouts triumphantly that no normal serf could possibly use swordsmanship like that. Even the guard captain panics, realizing Ian is beyond what these rural soldiers can handle. Afraid of being humiliated in front of the lord, the guard captain freezes instead of stepping in himself. Johnson loses patience, pulls a knife, and orders the soldiers to stab Ian in the stomach even if it kills him. Then the lord grips the necklace too hard, and a hidden compartment twists open in his hand. One look at the writing inside leaves the lord stunned, because a mere serf should never possess something like this. His panicked outburst makes everyone turn toward him, and the soldiers stop attacking for one opening. Ian uses that single gap to dash straight in front of the lord and snatch the necklace back. With his real goal achieved, Ian pockets the relic and prepares to leave without caring about the rest. Johnson completely snaps when he sees a serf take something from the lord right in front of him. The lord tries to stop him, but Johnson ignores the warning and charges anyway. To force an opening, Johnson grabs a nearby serf and shoves him straight into Ian. As Ian scrambles under the impact, Johnson goes for a murderous stab that would kill both boys if it lands. Ian shoves the innocent serf away and tries to catch the weapon, but for once Johnson is faster, and the blade reaches his eyes. At that exact instant, a slash cuts through the plaza and Johnson's attacking arm flies into the air. A sharp new voice warns that anyone who takes one more step will lose both arms. Ian recognizes exactly who saved him and lets out an almost relieved complaint that Galen is late. A little earlier on the road, Galen had been riding toward the village under the Duke's secret order to escort a prince who had been living as a serf. Because the mission must stay quiet, Galen warns everyone to keep their guard up even in the seemingly harmless countryside. The centurion and mercenary captain grumble behind his back, thinking the job is just picking up a child from the countryside. Nathan suddenly appears beside them and cheerfully scares them into behaving by reminding them how favored Galen is by the Duke. Once the gossiping stops, Nathan reports that the village looks peaceful except for a suspicious disturbance gathering around the plaza. That hint is enough for Galen to worry someone may have moved on the royal bloodline first, so he spurs ahead, with only Nathan following. Nathan is excited to witness Galen's skill up close, but Galen shuts that down and reminds him the mission comes first. When they reach the plaza, both men stop short at the sight of a child holding off armed adults. Nathan is impressed enough to guess Ian learned from some retired knight, because his movement is far beyond a normal child. Galen sees something deeper at once. Ian is using royal swordsmanship. That realization locks Galen's interest in place, because the child he came to fetch must be the prince himself. Nathan is even more shaken when Galen points out that Ian is turning ceremonial swordsmanship into something practical and lethal. Galen notes that Ian shows no hesitation at all in life or death thrusts, the kind of confidence that should never belong to a sheltered child. Their observation ends the moment Johnson uses another serf as a shield and creates a killing strike Galen can no longer watch. Nathan reaches for his sword, only to realize Galen has already vanished from beside him. Back in the plaza after the slash, the whole crowd falls silent around the stranger who just cut off Johnson's arm and stood over Ian. What rattles the crowd most is not just the knight's arrival, but Ian casually addressing him as if he has every right to. Instead of taking offense, Galen bows his head and apologizes to Ian for arriving late. Even Ian is caught off guard, because in his past life Galen was a proud knight who had once looked down on him before his rise. Johnson, bleeding and furious, still cannot read the room and starts screaming that he serves the Lord and will make them pay. The soldiers panic because everyone here knows a knight is not just a swordsman, but a monster empowered by a lifelong oath. Johnson keeps ranting anyway, ignorant enough to dismiss knights as titleless swordsmen. Nathan finally arrives, draws his sword, and cheerfully asks Galen if he should deal with the fool himself. Desperate now, Johnson twists toward the Lord for help and demands that the knight be punished instead. But the Lord is trapped too, because even he knows there are nowhere near enough soldiers here to challenge a real knight. All he can do is bark at the knights to leave before he reports them to the capital and their master. Galen ignores the threat completely and turns back to the person who actually matters to him here. Then Galen kneels on one knee before Ian and formally apologizes again for being late. Johnson loses his mind at the sight of a knight kneeling to a serf and starts screaming insults through the pain. Galen finally lets some emotion show and silences Johnson with a beast-like glare that promises punishment later. To make it undeniable, Nathan kneels too and announces that the Duke sent them for Ian, the seventh prince of the royal family. The words hit like a hammer, and both Johnson and the Lord freeze at the revelation that the serf child they tried to crush is actually a prince. Johnson goes pale when Ian's royal blood is mentioned, and even the Lord can barely speak through the shock. The Lord keeps insulting Ian's dead mother as lowly, until Ian lifts his eyes and cuts him off with one cold word. Nathan meant to kneel mockingly, but Ian's calm gaze unsettles him enough to make him reconsider the boy for a moment. Ian recognizes Nathan at once as the dangerous knight who will one day abandon the Duke and nearly destroy Ian's side in the succession war. Instead of just fearing Nathan and Galen, Ian decides he wants both powerful knights on his own side someday. Nathan tests him by asking what to do with the offenders, expecting the serf-born child to freeze when real authority is handed to him. Ian answers instantly and points straight at the Lord and Johnson, ordering the sinners captured. Someone off-panel erupts at being judged by a boy in serf clothes, but Nathan rises and accepts Ian's order without hesitation. As the Lord tries to signal for help, Johnson suddenly breaks first and bolts in blind panic. The Lord curses and runs after Johnson toward his castle, abandoning dignity in front of everyone. Before Nathan can chase them with his oath, heavy horns sound and the Duke's troops burst in to surround the plaza. The Lord and Johnson are caught almost immediately when soldiers press blue spear points against their necks. The centurion arrives, reports to Galen and Nathan, and makes it clear he already moved to lock down the village. Even pinned down, the Lord and Johnson keep screaming that Ian is only a filthy serf and his mother was worse. Galen ends Johnson's rant in one brutal hit, smashing a scabbard across his face hard enough to shatter teeth. Nathan snaps at the soldiers to stop letting the criminals talk, and they force both men to their knees and gag them. Now that the shouting stops, the Duke's men finally get a good look at Ian and start whispering that this supposed serf boy looks far too striking to be ordinary. Nathan brings the prisoners before Ian and asks how the prince wants them punished. A nearby officer is baffled that Nathan is really leaving royal punishment to a child everyone still thinks lived as a serf. Ian stands and calmly asks the law for anyone who raised a sword against the royal family. When he hears the answer is summary execution regardless of status, Ian gives the order at once. The plaza goes still because the soldiers expected childish cruelty or childish mercy, not a clean legal death sentence. Ian doubles down and looks past the criminals to the officer line, making it clear he knows exactly who should obey him here. Realizing the command is serious, the officers signal the soldiers to carry out the execution. With death now real, the prisoners break completely and beg Ian for mercy in tears and snot. Johnson slams his forehead to the ground and begs Ian by name, but Ian's expression does not soften at all. Ian gives the final thumbs down signal, and the soldiers swing their long swords toward the prisoners' necks. At the last possible instant, Ian suddenly orders them to stop. Nathan is startled, but Ian calmly says this public terror is enough and the rest should go to formal trial. One prisoner nearly collapses from fear after staring death in the face, too shaken even to hold himself together. Inside, Ian is not showing mercy at all. He wants them alive because a trial and what can be stripped from them will hurt far more. Ian also hides his edge on purpose, deciding it is better if the Duke still sees him as a child who looks easy to handle. He orders the prisoners taken away, and the officer accepts with a smile, mistaking Ian's restraint for simple fear of seeing blood. As Ian heads for the carriage, he calls Galen and Nathan along, and both knights quietly follow because they understood exactly what he just did. To Galen and Nathan, Ian no longer looks like a clueless country brat at all, but like a lion cub already thinking like royalty. On the way out, the confused villagers keep calling toward Ian, still thinking the Lord had summoned him for punishment. The shouting dies the moment Galen steps behind Ian in full knight gear, because everyone suddenly realizes a real knight is treating the serf boy as someone important. Then Galen takes off his cape and drapes it over Ian, openly shielding the prince from the villagers' gaze and insults. Word races through the crowd that the Lord and Johnson were taken away and that Ian is actually a prince, turning the whole village speechless. Ian notices Galen's public courtesy and realizes the knight's first impression of him may already be changing. Once Ian gets into the carriage, Galen tells him fresh clothes were prepared by the Duke's household and leaves him privacy to change. Alone at last, Ian pulls out the outfit and immediately recognizes the same gaudy old-fashioned aristocratic clothes that once made him a laughingstock. He remembers how happy he was the first time, before learning the Duke's people had dressed him up to humiliate him in front of the nobles. Certain this was a trap from the Duke's side and likely tolerated by the Duke himself, Ian decides it will not work on him again. Outside the carriage, Nathan quietly orders an officer to send word about the Lord's arrest without mentioning the prince at all. Nathan has started wondering whether Ian stopped the execution from fear at all, because the boy looked more like someone choosing the better move. The officer catches Nathan's interest immediately, and both men agree it is safer for the other nobles not to hear about Ian yet. When they return to the carriage, the soldiers are in a stir because Ian is still outside in his dirty clothes. Nathan looks inside and finds the prepared clothes ripped to pieces in the bag. Ian blandly claims a wild animal must have gotten into the carriage, and Nathan instantly realizes someone tore the clothes on purpose. The moment Nathan studies the outfit, he understands these were outdated joke clothes meant to make Ian look ridiculous, and that Ian neatly broke the trap. That only makes Ian more interesting to Nathan, because a boy raised as a serf should not have recognized this kind of noble insult so quickly. Then Galen returns, sees the clothes, and is openly shocked that someone sent such an ugly, insulting outfit for the prince. Nathan brushes past the culprit question for the moment, while an officer beside them starts sweating. Galen immediately says they need proper clothes instead, and the nearby officer looks even worse as the prank starts backfiring. Ian quietly enjoys the result, because whatever they replace those clothes with will be better than walking into the Duke's castle wearing the original trap. He also reads the nearby officer's embarrassed face and correctly pegs him as part of the same group that tried to make a fool of him before he even reached the castle. But Ian's real focus is bigger than one prank, because winning over Galen and Nathan matters far more for everything ahead. He knows the coming raid is dangerous, but the first day in the Duke's castle is even more important, because that is when people decide what kind of prince he is. After tearing up the fake gift and sidestepping their first insult, Ian makes up his mind that this time he will decide who he becomes. On the road, the Duke's centurion is already in a foul mood because this whole escort mission feels like a degrading chore. What makes it worse for him is Ian himself, a prince still dressed in shabby serf clothes instead of anything noble. When Nathan hands over Ian's ruined clothes and asks for new ones, the centurion is forced into a servant's job he clearly hates. Nathan twists the knife by saying soldiers have no eye for a prince's wardrobe and mocking the centurion's awful taste. The centurion immediately realizes Nathan noticed he tampered with the clothing bag, and that this polite order is really a warning. Even while the centurion seethes, Ian is off chatting comfortably with rough mercenaries instead of acting like a sheltered royal. Ian leans into the lesson with real interest, asking about the herbs the mercenaries use for bruises and sword wounds. When Ian notices the herbs come in different colors, the mercenary is genuinely impressed that a prince caught that detail. The mercenary explains the color code for medicine and poison, but the rule is tricky enough to fool anyone at a glance. Ian guesses the purple herb must be poison, only to learn the real danger is the bright red herb that makes people vomit blood and collapse. Ian even asks for the poison's name, and the mercenary tells him it is called Lorland's Tears. Watching a prince mix so naturally with people he sees as beneath him makes the centurion's expression turn even uglier. Nathan does nothing to stop it, just lying back on a wooden board with his hat over his face like he has all the time in the world. Finally unable to stand it, the centurion marches over and presses Nathan to move, claiming they need to hurry if they are stopping at Yond Castle. Nathan casually asks why they would even go to Yond Castle, making the centurion expose his real excuse about buying proper clothes for Ian. Nathan sees straight through him and says that if clothes are all he wants, he can go to the castle alone while the rest of them sleep here. The centurion blurts out in protest, but Nathan has already turned the pressure back on him. Nathan quietly notes the man has been anxious for a while, and admits he also dislikes seeing royal blood get too friendly with lowly mercenaries. So Nathan finally gives a small nod and says the mercenaries can manage on their own. Relieved, the centurion thanks him, and Nathan finishes the exchange with a pointed order. The centurion will buy the prince's clothes by himself. At the roadside camp, the centurion glances at Nathan, decides he will deal with Galen later, and abruptly kills the rest break instead of letting the mercenaries relax. The order lands badly, and even the soldiers look thrown as hungry mercenaries protest that they have not even finished eating yet. But the centurion controls the schedule, so the whole group reluctantly obeys and starts packing up with bitter faces. Once they are back on the road, Ian immediately notices how strange this is, because the centurion is clearly trying to erase every bit of rest time and rush everyone toward the Duke's castle. The forced march hits hardest for the men on foot, and the mercenaries dragging luggage and armor start to look completely spent. Before long the complaints spill out, with exhausted mercenaries groaning that they cannot keep this up and begging their captain to say something. The mercenary captain finally steps forward and asks the centurion for even a short break because the men are close to collapsing. The centurion snaps that the schedule is already delayed and cruelly throws the risk back on the captain by asking if he will personally take responsibility for it. That threat shuts the captain down, because the job pays well but not enough to cover a ruined schedule, and one wrong answer could wreck his whole group. Grinding his teeth, the mercenary captain backs off and rips off his helmet in frustration before slamming it down onto the road. That is the moment Ian finally gets a clear look at him, and the face hits him like a shock of recognition. Ian quietly tests the idea in his head by covering part of the man's face with a finger from his viewpoint, trying to match him to a memory from the future. The answer bursts out of Ian before he can stop it, and he blurts that this man is One-Eyed Gerard. Galen immediately moves in at Ian's outburst, and Ian hurriedly waves him off before he says too much. Inside, Ian is rattled because he almost exposed knowledge he should not have, but the real shock is that the future mercenary king is marching right here in front of him. Ian realizes this is Gerard before the famous injury, because the man he knows as One-Eyed Gerard still has both eyes at this point. What throws Ian even more is the personality gap, because the feared legend he remembers seems unexpectedly friendly right now. Watching the escort, Ian suddenly realizes this Gerard is the same future mercenary king from his memories, back when he was still just an obscure captain. That makes Ian respect the Duke's eye for talent even more, because he somehow picked out a future legend before anyone else noticed. Ian's thoughts jump again when he wonders if Gerard's future right-hand strategist might be here too. He finds him almost immediately, a sweaty blonde young man named Line, being barked at by seniors while he runs camp chores like a nobody. Ian recognizes the humble errand boy as Line, the future devil's strategist whose genius had not been discovered yet. Remembering that Gerard and Line will one day build a mercenary kingdom together, Ian can barely believe both of them are standing in this remote place. The idea thrills Ian. If he can win over men like Gerard and Line, their strength could become his best weapon against the Duke. But Ian reins himself in and decides to handle the immediate problem first, the centurion who keeps trying to control the march. A little later on the road, another stop is called, and this time the mercenaries light up while the soldiers break formation to rest. The centurion finally snaps and storms up to Ian's carriage, furious that these constant rests are wrecking their schedule. He complains that if Ian had not kept stopping them over and over, they would already be at the castle by now. Ian stays hidden behind the carriage wall and just smiles, because the delays are exactly what he has been creating all along. The centurion keeps listing the excuses Ian has used all day, from needing to pee to feeling dizzy, and demands to know what it is this time. Ian finally peeks his face out the carriage window, and the furious officer has to switch from barking at him to pleading upward. Swallowing his pride, the centurion begs Ian to make this the last stop and warns that they could lose their shelter if they keep falling behind. Even while he begs, the centurion inwardly fumes that the mercenaries are loving these breaks and this prince keeps sabotaging him. Ian answers with a cheerful face and the most infuriating reason possible. His butt hurts, so they are resting again. That answer almost breaks the centurion's patience on the spot, but Ian is a prince, so the officer still cannot openly defy him. Nathan, lounging nearby through all of it, casually twists the knife by reminding the officer that a prince's order is still an order. The centurion is left shaking in silence, and the mercenaries openly enjoy seeing the man who always lorded over them finally shut down. They talk about how badly mercenaries are usually treated, especially when knights are around, so Ian's kindness feels unusually generous. Instead of hiding in the carriage, Ian keeps stepping out to ask if the mercenaries are tired and whether they need anything. He even hands out water and soldier-only snacks himself, and nobody dares send a royal child back inside while he is helping them. With Ian forcing the pace to slow, the centurion can only swallow his rage while the mercenaries finally get real rest. That is enough to win them over fast, and the mercenaries start saying they hope the journey keeps going like this. The mercenary captain joins in too, clearly pleased with Ian and telling the others to thank the prince for his grace. The mercenaries' banter turns almost absurdly fond, with one joking that after this mission he wants to go home, confess to Jaina, and father a son who looks like Ian. Off to the side, Nathan watches Ian with real suspicion because this much extra rest makes no sense if the goal is simply protecting the mercenaries. The soldiers shrugged it off as childish softness and laughed that the prince must just be a pampered little kid with a sore backside. But inside the carriage, Ian is grimly focused because winning the mercenaries over is only part of what he is doing tonight. He looks out at the moon and counts the timing. This is the second night after leaving the village, the exact night the massacre should happen. Ian knows that in the future he remembers, every mercenary dies tonight except for 2, even if recent changes might have shifted the outcome. Then Ian catches the familiar fruity scent drifting from the forest, and that confirms the ambush has really begun. He immediately shouts for everyone to watch their surroundings, snapping the whole camp out of its relaxed mood. The men tense up in confusion, and even Nathan only has a split second to wonder what Ian sensed. Then Nathan's expression changes instantly, which tells Ian the threat is real and already on top of them. Ian stops shouting politely and roars at the mercenaries to raise their shields right now. The mercenaries finally obey and throw their shields up just as the camp lights suddenly go out. In the next instant, arrows pour down from the black sky, and Ian's eyes flash in the dark as the ambush begins. In the middle of the night, arrows suddenly pour out of the trees and drop a mercenary on the spot. The arrow storm keeps coming so fast that the mercenaries can barely shout warnings over the noise. But the mercenaries do not collapse the way Ian remembers, because many of them got their shields up in time. The survivors immediately realize the warning saved them, and Ian quietly feels a wave of relief. Ian notes that the only ones hit were the men who ignored him or could not reach a shield before the volley landed. That matters to Ian because in his past life this same ambush killed more than half the mercenaries. Back then, the real killer was not just surprise but exhaustion, because the men had been marched so hard they could barely react. Ian bitterly remembers that Galen and Nathan pushed the schedule so hard that the mercenaries were left helpless. Then Ian catches another clue from the air and realizes the strange fruit-like smell is actually a familiar paralyzing poison. That makes the raid feel wrong, because ordinary bandits should not be using assassin poison against a force this large. The story he heard later never fit either, since the Duke blamed bandits even though bandits should have fled the moment they saw this escort's strength. Ian cannot ignore that 2 knights are with them, including Galen, a famous one-man army who should have scared off any normal raiders. Ian knows why this survival matters, because in the old timeline almost every mercenary died and only Lion and Gerard were left standing. That massacre poisoned Ian's future too, because the mercenary guild later blamed him and treated him like bad luck. So as the ambush rages, Ian is genuinely glad more of them survived, because he will need allies when he finally faces the Duke. Then the Centurion suddenly yanks open the carriage and orders the prince to come out at once. Before Ian can react, the Centurion grabs his wrist and drags him out into the chaos. He takes Ian straight to the soldier's shield square and tells him this formation will be safe. But even while pretending to protect him, the Centurion shoves Ian down with enough force to make his contempt obvious. Even after being yanked out into the ambush, Ian stays on his feet and looks at the Centurion with amused calm instead of panic. Because he is thinking clearly this time, Ian immediately notices how wrong the Centurion's choice was. Ian quickly realizes the escort is not helpless at all, because knights, soldiers, and mercenaries still have the roadside defense under control. What really stands out to Ian is the Duke's carriage, because its magic protection left it completely unmarked under the arrow rain. That makes Ian suspicious, because a Centurion should already know the magic carriage was safer than dragging him out into the open. Before Ian can think further, the soldier guarding him suddenly shoves him forward and shouts that it is dangerous. An arrow flashes past Ian's face so close that it slices his cheek and draws fresh blood. The Centurion erupts at the guard in front of Ian, loudly blaming him for failing to protect the prince after the arrow nearly hit. The guard hurriedly begs forgiveness, and the Centurion threatens punishment, while Ian quietly watches the performance. When the Centurion looks back, what throws him off is Ian's face, because the boy still shows no fear at all. Ian just wipes the blood from his cheek like this kind of danger is already familiar to him. Inside, Ian is disgusted, because he finally sees the whole setup as a deliberate attempt to scare and control him. Ian reconstructs the trick, pull a serf-raised child out of the safe carriage, and expose him to blades and arrows until panic takes over. From Ian's view, the whole point was to terrify a sheltered child so badly that he would panic and become easy to control afterward. He does not buy the soldier's blunder either, because that shield wall was too tight for a stray arrow to slip through by accident. That suspicion goes even deeper, and Ian starts doubting whether the Duke's so-called bandit attack is what it claims to be. The Centurion comes over sweating and delivers a polished apology, blaming bad training while pretending this is just normal battlefield danger. Ian hears the warning beneath the apology, because the Centurion's talk about stray arrows sounds less like remorse and more like a threat. With blood still on his cheek, Ian realizes the near miss was no accident to him at all. Because he did not cower this time, someone had to push the threat right up to his face. That thought hardens into suspicion. Ian silently blames the Duke for using dead mercenaries and even Ian himself as tools of control. Ian quietly warns Galen that an attack is coming and tells him to watch the surroundings first, catching both knights off guard. To Galen, Ian's timing is unsettling. The boy reacted like someone who already knows battle. Nathan pieces together something worse. Ian's earlier demands for rest may have saved the exhausted mercenaries from being wiped out in the first volley. That chills Nathan even more. On an escort meant to protect royal blood, Ian has been sharper than the knights watching over him. Before anyone can speak more, desperate shouting erupts from the mercenaries' side and yanks Ian's attention away. The mercenaries are desperately shielding a wounded man in the middle of the barrage, and one looks as he is in critical condition. An arrow has hit deep in a vital spot, and the man coughs blood while the others grimly accept that his lungs were probably pierced. Even Gerard, the mercenary captain, goes hard-faced at the sight, because this is the kind of injury men usually do not come back from. Then Ian sees who the victim is, and his whole body locks up. The dying mercenary is Lion, the future devil's strategist. That changes everything for Ian. However dangerous the ambush is, he decides Lion cannot be allowed to die here. Ian suddenly bolts toward the mercenaries, and the officer and soldiers behind him are too slow to stop him. Ian is not acting on panic alone. He knows arrow wounds become deadlier by the second, so speed matters more than fear. He reaches Lion at last, right in the middle of the mercenaries' desperate defense. Gerard stares at him in disbelief and calls out to the prince, clearly unable to understand why Ian ran straight into this kill zone. But Ian is thrown off for a different reason. The moment he looks up at Gerard, something about the captain's eyes shocks him. In the middle of the ambush aftermath, Ian sees Gerard clutching a fresh eye wound and realizes this is the exact day one-eyed Gerard was born. That thought hits harder when Ian realizes this night is why Gerard later turned his hatred on him and built his revenge around the mercenaries. Ian drops to Lion's side and sees how bad it is at once. One arrow in the leg, another buried in the chest. Ian remembers that the Lion he knew in the future limped, and he grimly wonders if this is the day that crippled him too. For a moment Ian hesitates over the timeline, but the spot is too dangerous and Lion will die if nobody acts now. Everyone knows a chest wound like this should be left to senior healers or priests, because pulling the arrow wrong could stop his breathing for good. Instead of backing off, Ian realizes he can handle it because his past life taught him battlefield first aid for exactly this kind of disaster. Ian steps forward and tells everyone to move, saying he will treat Lion himself. The mercenaries explode in anger, because trusting a child prince with their comrade's life sounds like madness. Ian fires back that waiting for a priest will just get Lion killed, and the standoff turns desperate. Then Gerard cuts through the chaos with one command and orders his men to back off. Gerard asks Ian if he truly can save Lion, and beneath the hard look there is plain fear for his comrade. Ian answers with complete certainty, and tells Gerard to trust him because he will save Lion. The others still protest, but Gerard bites his lip and lets Ian try, because even this desperate chance is better than standing there helpless. As soldiers in the distance start rushing toward the disturbance, Ian stops waiting for anyone's approval. Ian shoves a branch into Lion's mouth as a bite stick and braces him for the pain. Then Ian rips the chest arrow free in one clean motion, and Lion screams through the branch. The mercenaries instantly lose it, convinced Ian has just killed their friend by making the wound gush open. But the next second stops everyone cold, because the heavy bleeding they expected never comes. That impossible calm at the wound leaves the whole group staring as Ian's emergency treatment lands perfectly. The battlefield falls quiet when Lion does not start bleeding out after Ian yanks the chest arrow free. A few mercenaries still call it luck and insist pulling the arrow should have ruined Lion's breathing. Then Lion coughs up blood, and the crowd instantly swings back into panic as if Ian made everything worse. Before the mercenaries can shove Ian aside, the centurion and his soldiers force their way in and bark about disgracing the prince. Ian hates the timing, because the raid is not even over and a clash between soldiers and mercenaries would turn the ambush into chaos. That tension breaks when Lion finally wakes properly, and thanks Ian with his own voice. Ian explains that pulling the arrow let the pooled blood out, so Lion can finally breathe and talk again. Once they see Lion really can talk again, the mercenaries drop to apologies and gratitude almost on the spot. When they rush in to crowd around their friend, Ian stops them hard and says the treatment is nowhere near finished. He warns that if they interfere now, Lion could still be left with after effects, and that sobers everyone fast. Under that calm face, Ian is still tense, because if the wound touched the lung, even saving Lion now would not save his future. Then Ian realizes the arrow missed the lung after all, and his whole plan suddenly becomes much easier. With that settled, Ian pulls out the herb he prepared earlier and says he is using Lorland's tears. The mercenaries' hopes drop again, because to them Lorland's tears are cheap trash good for little more than bruises. One mercenary steps in politely but firmly, offering his own expensive emergency medicine instead of the prince's herb. Others quickly add their precious battlefield drugs too, proving how badly they want to save Lion. Ian knows those drugs are strong and useful for other wounds, but in Lion's state they would be too harsh to survive. So Ian thanks them, refuses the drugs, and decides to reveal knowledge from the future as naturally as he can. He is especially careful because the centurion is still watching him like a hawk from nearby. Gerard catches Ian's problem at once and orders his men back into the fight, pulling attention off the prince and the treatment. With the soldiers' eyes diverted, Ian finally starts crushing the herb in his hands. Gerard still looks nervous and asks if that herb can really save a wound like this. Ian shocks him by saying he is not applying it to the wound at all. He is going to make Lion swallow it. That sets off another wave of alarm, because everyone knows one side of Laurelin's tears is poisonous enough to paralyze and hallucinate. Ian ignores the panic, trusting knowledge that this so-called garbage herb will be famous later for exactly this kind of healing. He stuffs the crushed herb into Lion's mouth and firmly makes him keep it down. The mercenaries can only glare and wait now, already deciding they will never forgive Ian if Lion dies. Then Lion groans again, and everyone braces for the worst one more time. But this time the change is good, because the pain starts leaving Lion's face right in front of them. Ian explains that the herb works as a sedative with a light anesthetic effect and can quickly help internal injuries too. To cover where he learned something this advanced, Ian smoothly claims it was part of his mother's family teachings. That finally breaks the mercenaries' resistance, and they kneel fully to beg forgiveness for doubting him. Gerard kneels too, because he understands better than anyone how priceless this medical knowledge could become on a battlefield. When Gerard asks why Ian is so kind to mercenaries instead of the Duke's soldiers, Ian keeps the real answer to himself. Inside, Ian is blunt. The Duke's soldiers are future enemies, but Gerard and Lion are the kind of people he wants on his side. He even checks Lion's leg nervously, expecting the future strategist to become crippled here if he is too late. To his relief, the leg wound is still treatable, and Ian realizes Lion only lost that leg in the old future because treatment came too late. Around them, other wounded men cry for help, reminding Ian there are still many casualties to treat before the night is over. This time, though, they have enough herbs because Ian quietly had the party gather a large stock during the earlier break. With Lion's survival secured, Ian turns to the bigger threat and orders Galen to capture the leader behind the attack alive. Ian does not buy the official story that these are just bandits, and the Centurion reacts a little too quickly when the order is given. Galen ignores the protest and hands Ian's immediate protection over to Gerard so he can pursue the enemy. The Centurion turns pale at the idea of a mercenary guarding Ian, but Gerard accepts the duty without hesitation. Ian is relieved Gerard stays with him, because charging off for revenge now would have cost even more mercenary lives. Gerard bows deeply and swears a mercenary never forgets either grace or enemies, promising Ian he will remember this debt. Ian silently counts it as a huge win, because he has just started buying the future mercenary king's loyalty without alerting the Duke. Then Ian suddenly snaps to attention, spots something in the forest, and shouts for Galen to go that way at once. Even Nathan, who has been fighting nearby, is distracted because he still cannot believe Ian saved Lion with that herb at all. He knows enough medicine and war to understand how impossible that recovery should have been, especially after Lion swallowed known poison. A soldier's warning snaps him back just in time, and Nathan cuts down an attacker in one brutal stroke without even looking. That monstrous display sends the remaining raiders into a panic, but Nathan is no longer interested in them nearly as much as he is in Ian. For the first time, Nathan actually wants to speak to the prince and test the hidden effect of that poisonous herb for himself. But before he can reach him, Ian shouts again and points deeper into the dark trees, as if he is reading the battlefield himself. The soldiers stare at the apparently empty forest and think the prince has seen nothing but shadows. The Centurion openly pushes back, warning Ian not to toy with troop movements in the middle of an ambush. Some soldiers even hold up their enemy detection tool and mock Ian, saying it has not sensed a single enemy there. Then a scream rips out of the trees where Galen just entered, and the whole mood flips in 1 second. Nathan immediately calls it what it is, stealth strong enough to slip past the army's tracking tools. The men who laughed at Ian scramble to support Galen, while Nathan stares at the prince in shaken new suspicion. What rattles Nathan most is the flash he thought he saw in Ian's eyes, a brief golden glow tied to the legend of the first king. Nathan has no time to dwell on it, and rushes after Galen into the forest chase. Ahead of them, the masked raider leader flees through the forest with blood pouring from his head, raging that the ambush has gone badly wrong. He realizes he only survived Galen's strike because of a one-use amulet from the Duke, which makes the whole attack look even more suspicious. As he hesitates in the trees, he remembers the real order: kill the mercenaries around Ian, avoid hitting the soldiers, and vanish. Since the prince ruined that plan, the leader calls out one last escalation and hidden black-clad assassins burst into the fight with Katars drawn. Nathan instantly warns everyone these are real assassins, and even Duke troops are in danger against enemies this skilled. Before Nathan can fully join him, Galen explodes forward first, flooding sword and body with radiant oath power. Galen's oath is simple and terrifying. While it holds, poison and arrows cannot touch him, and he will not fall. He crashes straight through the assassins like a battering ram, sweeping them aside and freezing even allies withal. The masked leader actually wants Galen to kill him on the spot, because he planted a death curse on himself for whoever executes him. Instead of finishing him, Galen grabs the masked leader alive and says he is following Ian's order to capture him. That hits the leader even harder, because Galen is openly following the prince's order instead of the Duke's will. Nathan joins the cleanup without hesitation now, shredding the remaining assassins and proving the raid has fully collapsed. With the mission ruined, the captured leader quietly prepares one last escape move in Galen's grasp. In a burst of ash and shadow, he slips free and reappears behind Galen instead of fleeing into the woods. His real target is not Galen at all, but the Centurion standing behind him. The Centurion blurts out that they are on the same side, and the leader answers by saying that failure and loose knowledge both earn death. Just as the leader goes for the centurion's throat, a sword suddenly slams into his neck from the side. The one who threw it is Ian, who somehow arrived close enough to save the centurion himself. Galen and Nathan are thrown off by Ian's sudden presence, but the centurion is the one who truly freezes when their eyes meet. Ian says nothing openly, but his smile makes it clear he understood exactly why the assassin tried to silence the centurion. To stay alive, the centurion forces himself to play along and thanks the prince for saving him. Ian accepts that fake gratitude with an easy smile, already treating the silence between them like a weapon. With the assassin gurgling blood in front of them, Galen holds him up and asks Ian what to do with the dying prisoner. Ian leans in to inspect the dying assassin, then suddenly stops when he spots something hidden in the man's arms. Right after the ambush, Ian pulls open the masked leader's clothes and finds a cracked cross-shaped amulet that is far too valuable for an ordinary assassin. Nathan recognizes the shield and pickaxe emblem as Marquis Bellona's treasure, and the knights immediately jump to the conclusion that the Marquis sent the killers after Ian. Ian stays quiet because he knows better. This is the secret special force, and the amulet was planted to dump the blame on the Marquis while hiding the Duke's hand. When the centurion nervously asks to take the evidence, Ian smiles and quietly tells him that he is the one who should be investigated. Ian tweaks the amulet, the black jewel turns green, and he activates its hidden recording function. The amulet plays a recorded order to kill the mercenaries and leave the soldiers mostly untouched, proving this attack had a very specific target. Ian deliberately plays the last part out loud, and the centurion goes white when everyone hears his own voice tied to the ambush order. Nathan twists the knife by warning that the Duke will kill the centurion for this, and the terrified man collapses to the ground begging Ian to save him. Instead of mercy, Ian snaps a gold bracelet onto the centurion's wrist and says it is an assassin tool used to kill its wearer and keeps secrets buried. Ian shows the paired ring and cheerfully claims one press will make the bracelet explode, trapping the centurion with a lie that feels real enough to own him. The centurion gives in completely, and Ian keeps the ring for himself while deciding to use this frightened officer as a spy. As the convoy starts moving again, Ian keeps one question in mind: why did the Duke want every mercenary dead, as if that group was hiding something important? The others keep blaming Marquis Bellona for the attack, and Ian lets that rumor spread because a fight between the Marquis and the Duke could become useful to him. Nathan keeps trying to act friendly during the trip, but Ian shuts the carriage window on him and stays wary because he still does not trust him. Several days later, with the Duke's residence only a day away, Ian goes to the mercenaries to say goodbye before their contract ends. Gerard stops him with a grave expression, and Line, now standing on crutches, comes with him to speak face to face. Gerard kneels in front of Ian and offers a precious healing potion, a relic valuable enough to save someone who is nearly dead. Ian remembers that this miracle potion will become cheap in the future, but right now it is still a treasure worth a fortune. That thought also reminds Ian that the Duke will one day monopolize the ruins producing this potion, and Ian immediately decides he wants that advantage too. When Ian asks why Gerard would give away something so important, Gerard admits he had planned to use it on Line himself if Ian had not saved him. Then Gerard drops the real secret. Line is the last surviving descendant of Duke Audria, the destroyed third ducal family. Ian is stunned because Audria of Intellect was one of the original 3 dukes before the other 2 houses wiped that bloodline out. Gerard explains that Duke Audria entrusted him with protecting the last heir, and the healing potion in his hand was one of that fallen duke's final possessions. After laying all of that bare, Gerard and Line bow their heads and ask Ian to accept them as his people. Ian warns that he has not even been openly acknowledged as a prince and is heading straight into the Duke's hands, but Gerard answers that he still wants to follow him. As Gerard vows he will come back whenever Ian calls, only Ian notices oath light gathering around him and realizes this pledge is real. At last the convoy reaches the Duke's estate, and Ian stares at the distant castle knowing his first meeting with the Duke and the knight's real trial are about to begin. Before leaving, Gerard appears beside the carriage, and Ian sees that the eye Gerard almost lost in battle has been fully saved. Ian sends Gerard off with a light joke and a firm reminder to grow stronger until they meet again. They part because Ian warned Gerard and Line in private that the Duke and the Centurion were behind the ambush, so staying close to him now would only draw suspicion and danger. Just before riding away, Gerard gives Ian a mercenary guild plaque so he can find Gerard and Line again whenever he needs them. After they leave, Nathan breezily asks what they gave him, but the Centurion explodes the moment he recognizes the plaque's meaning. The Centurion bitterly explains that the plaque marks Ian as a mercenary benefactor, someone the mercenary guild would go out of its way to support, and that only makes him angrier. One glance from Ian at the control ring is enough to make the Centurion instantly fold and apologize for insulting the mercenaries. As the escort moves deeper into the estate, Ian suddenly realizes the route is wrong because they are being led toward a side gate instead of the main entrance. At the side gate, the escort soldiers get into a brief argument with the gatekeepers, and Ian realizes this humiliation is already unfolding differently from the past he remembers. The Centurion finally says it outright. Higher orders want Ian brought in through the back gate, and Nathan immediately snaps that the idea is insane. Ian remembers where this kind of insult leads, So when the Centurion smugly asks what he will do, Ian unexpectedly agrees. Then Ian breaks from the group and says only the Centurion and soldiers can use the back door because he is going to the front. Before anyone can stop him, Ian mounts up and rides straight for the Duke's main gate, choosing his own path this time. Ian ignores the Centurion's frantic shouting and rides straight ahead, refusing to be herded toward the humiliating back gate. Galen rides up beside him and warns that going alone is dangerous, but Ian cuts straight to the point and asks if he is supposed to accept their insult. Galen understands exactly what the back gate would mean, and after a tense pause he bows his head and yields to Ian's choice. Nathan joins them too, and Ian quietly notes how both knights are acting very differently now that he has shown backbone. The mood shifts when Galen and Nathan suddenly realize Ian is riding with unnervingly natural skill for a boy who should never have learned. Ian plays innocent, and claims he just copied what he saw on the road, which only makes the two knights more stunned. Galen is left wondering if Ian has the rare instinctive bond riders only talk about in legends, but Ian simply urges them onward to the front gate. Behind them, the Centurion watches Ian head for the main gate and nearly panics, because both the assassination plan and the back gate humiliation have now failed. A soldier presses him for orders, but the Centurion snaps that he cannot force Ian anymore because the boy's control ring has him terrified. Even so, the Centurion comforts himself that the Duke's family will crush Ian anyway, because a child with no allies should not be able to stand against them. He also orders his men to keep Ian out of the villagers' sight, because the Duke wants this prince hidden before other nobles hear about him. But the soldiers can only complain that Ian stands out too much to hide, which gives the Centurion an instant headache. Inside the Duke estate, the silver-haired second son Heinley gets the report that Ian has already entered through the main gate, and his mood turns icy. Heinley openly admits he wanted Ian shoved through the back gate, dismissing basic royal etiquette because he despises the low-born child entering his father's land. Once the servant is dismissed, Heinley questions a hidden agent in the shadows and learns their cleanup mission failed because Ian's whole village had already fled. The Centurion, reporting nearby, realizes Ian must have warned the village in advance, but he keeps his mouth shut because exposing that would get him killed. Heinley grows even more irritated when he hears Ian is not cowering in ugly clothes at all, but walking the castle market looking fine and handsome. That answer finally makes Heinley snap, and he crushes his cane in fury while ordering Ian dragged to him at once. Meanwhile, Ian calmly shops through the town with future knowledge guiding him towards something priceless. At the crowded main gate and drawbridge, Ian quietly takes in how grand and reassuring the entrance feels now that he arrived with his dignity intact. The gatekeeper suddenly clears the way for Ian, and the whole crowd parts and bows because they assume a young noble must be arriving with two knights. Galen quietly checks whether all that respect makes Ian uncomfortable, still expecting some trace of the serf boy he was supposed to escort. Ian answers with calm royal confidence that these are his people, and Galen is shaken by how naturally he carries that authority. Ian knows winning Galen over will take more than one moment, so he keeps acting every inch the Prince Galen might someday choose to follow. For the first time in their life, Ian casually stops at a street food stall and buys snacks like an ordinary child, while Galen watches with unexpected interest. Then a shabby old blacksmith calls out from a dagger stall, and one ugly little weapon immediately catches Ian's eye. Nathan tries to steer him away, scoffing that a third-rate street smith's work is not worth touching when proper weapons can be bought inside the castle. The blacksmith flares up at the insult, but Nathan keeps tearing the weapon apart for its bad balance, dull blade, and absurd price. Ian ignores the obvious defects because he recognizes the truth at once. This strange dagger is actually a rare magic sword that this kingdom cannot appreciate. So Ian calmly tells Nathan he wants this weapon, stunning him because the choice looks ridiculous to anyone without Ian's future knowledge. Before that deal can finish, Heinley's butler rushes into the square and immediately starts treating Ian like a nuisance he has been sent to collect. The butler sizes Ian up with open contempt, and, instead of greeting him, immediately relays Heinley's order to drag him back. That overreach instantly irritates Galen and Nathan, because a duke's son has no right to order around knights assigned by someone else. When the butler pushes too far, Nathan yanks out his sword and puts the tip to the man's neck, making it brutally clear that knights obey no one they do not serve. Ian uses the moment perfectly by holding out the dagger, and sweetly asking the terrified butler to pay for it, since he has no money. Ian sweetens the trap by promising Nathan will lower the sword if the butler pays, turning the insult into a tidy lesson for Heinley's side. Forced by fear and the growing crowd, the butler finally pays for the dagger, and can only swallow the humiliation. Even after that, Ian refuses to go straight to the castle and casually says there is still more to see, leaving the butler seething behind him. After making them wait, Ian finally enters the audience room, where Heinley explodes in anger over being kept standing by the prince he despises. Ian refuses to match Heinley's anger and simply asks who this loud man is, cutting down the status Heinley was trying to throw around. When Galen explains that Heinley is only the duke's second son and will inherit another title, Ian cuts him down with one blunt line, then he is nothing. Ian presses the point harder by saying that he is a prince while Heinley is merely a future count, and Heinley lunges forward, furious that an unrecognized child is talking down to him. Ian answers that challenge by pulling out his mother's necklace and revealing the royal crest inside, the proof Heinley was hoping he could not produce. Galen, Nathan, and the attendants instantly drop to their knees, because the crest is an absolute royal symbol no subject of Kai Stein can ignore. But Heinley, cornered and humiliated, still storms toward Ian and tries to grab the necklace while shouting that the crest must be forged. Before Heinley can touch him, a shout cuts across the hall. The Duke has entered. In the audience room, the Duke finally enters, and everyone bows except Ian, who meets him head on this time instead of trembling like he did in the past. Heinley jumps in at once, eager to win favor by claiming Ian's proof is fake and accusing him of insulting the Duke. Instead of backing his son, the Duke coldly calls Heinley useless and orders the head butler to drag him out. The Duke walks straight to Ian, studies the necklace, and confirms that the royal crest is real at a glance. Then the Duke coolly asks if Ian lied about losing it, and Ian keeps his nerve because hiding the necklace was exactly how he kept the Duke's side from stealing it. Even after seeing the royal crest, the Duke refuses to kneel, orders a room prepared for Ian, and acts as if the matter is already settled on his terms. Ian refuses to let that pass and calls the Duke back in front of everyone, stunning Nathan and Galen into trying to stop him. The Duke turns back amused, but Ian deliberately speaks to him without fear because he knows the Duke despises cowardice and still needs him alive for the succession war. When the Duke asks what he forgot, Ian answers without blinking that Heinley insulted a prince, so the Duke's son should apologize first. Ian adds that anyone who does wrong should be punished, throwing Heinley's own cruel rule back at the family, and the cold Duke suddenly bursts out laughing. Still laughing, the Duke orders Heinley brought back and prepares to make an example of him instead. The servants force Heinley to kneel before Ian, and his panic turns into raw disbelief. Then the Duke has Heinley's head slammed into the marble again and again, calling each blow punishment for insulting the crest, the prince, and the Duke's dignity. For the final blow, the Duke plants his own foot on Heinley's face and crushes him into the floor for staining the Garcia name. Ian understands the warning behind that cruelty and lets the matter drop with a smile, while the Duke coldly presents Heinley as Ian's future close aide. But Ian immediately pushes farther and says that if he is getting a close aide, he needs one more person for real protection. Ian openly brings up the assassins who attacked him on the road and says he wants a soldier, not useless nobles, because his life is in danger. The Duke pretends to indulge him and asks who he wants, expecting something small. Ian names Galen, and the entire room locks up because he just asked for one of the Duke's most valued knights. Ian twists the knife by asking plainly whether the Duke will give Galen to him. The Duke snaps back that Ian must be insane to demand a knight like Galen instead of an ordinary guard, and for a moment, he even thinks about killing the boy. But the Duke swallows that urge because the dead first prince has made Ian too valuable in the coming succession fight. When the Duke tries to refuse politely, Ian cuts him off by pointing out that Galen was wasted on a backwater errand to fetch him in the first place. That corner traps the Duke, because his own aides already treat Galen like expendable labor thanks to his commoner birth. Ian keeps a calm face, but inside he knows he is gambling hard to steal one of the Duke's future strongest pieces before the Duke ever uses him properly. After a long stare, the Duke finally agrees to give Galen to Ian, and Ian's plan pays off. Even then, the Duke quietly vows to take Galen back someday, because he still sees Ian as a piece to be managed, not an equal. Ian still is not done, and he stops the Duke one more time with the most dangerous question yet. Ian asks whether the Duke has paid him proper respect, forcing the entire room into stunned silence. After Ian leaves, the Duke finally drops the cold mask and laughs hard over the absurdity of being pushed into bowing inside his own castle. The head butler burns with anger over it, but the Duke brushes it off as a bow to the crest, not to Ian himself. What really interests the Duke is that Ian adapted to royal blood almost instantly, and even stole Galen from him with words alone. When the head butler offers to deal with Ian, the Duke refuses because a prince that sharp will be useful in the succession war. The Duke also decides Heinley is too immature to handle Ian after that humiliation, so he orders his third son Karen attached to Ian instead, not because Karen is gentle, but because he is dangerous enough to keep Ian under control. The head butler is shaken because Karen is a genius and a loose cannon who once nearly crossed the line into treason with royal blood. The Duke makes it clear that this is exactly the point. Ian has spirit, so he intends to keep that prince pinned under his thumb. On the way to Ian's room, Nathan starts loudly complaining that Ian asked for Galen and not him. Galen quietly stops Ian and asks if Ian will really be okay with him, as if he still cannot believe someone chose him on purpose. Galen says Nathan would be more helpful, because even his own skill means less than noble blood inside this castle. Ian shuts that down at once, saying he trusts what he has seen himself and that Galen is someone he can trust with his back. Ian softens it with one more truth. He was a serf even lower than a commoner, so Galen does not have to hide that wound from him. Nathan instantly breaks the mood by protesting again and begging Ian to ask for him too. Ian keeps that answer to himself, because pushing for 2 knights would have been open war with the Duke, and he is already surviving on a knife edge. He also stays wary of Nathan himself, because Nathan's friendliness does not match the past Ian remembers. A servant finally leads them to Ian's room, and Ian steels himself at the door because surviving his first day in this castle matters more than anything else. Ian opens the door to his assigned room, and the sight inside is bad enough that Galen and Nathan both turn serious on the spot. Ian is shown to a huge annex room that should look luxurious, but Galen and Nathan go stiff the moment they see how filthy and abandoned it is. Nathan blurts out that the place looks like a shabby barn, and Galen dryly corrects him that it is a proper reception room that has simply been left to rot. As Ian brushes dust off a desk, he recognizes this cold room from his past and remembers that tonight is the night someone will try to kill him here. Ian casually suggests the room might just be dirty because they arrived early, but Nathan and Galen react like he is missing something much worse. When Galen looks toward the portrait on the wall, Nathan snaps and grabs the servant by the collar, demanding to know who dared assign Ian to this cursed annex. Ian already knows the truth. This annex is infamous for driving people mad, and he guesses Heinley chose it on purpose to break him. Instead of rejecting the room, Ian quietly decides he needs this exact place because Karen once found a hidden power here that could help him fight back against the Duke. He also realizes the planned first night assassination is exactly why he cannot leave, because changing rooms might ruin the one path he remembers to survive. When an old floorboard creaks under Ian's deliberate step, Galen rushes in to shield him, and the annex's decay makes the danger feel even more real. Nathan tries to storm out and force a room change, but Ian stops him and insists this must be the right room from the Duke's point of view. Ian's bitter smile looks like silent humiliation to Nathan and Galen, so they immediately vow to confront the head butler, the Duke, or even Heinley for him. Ian finally gives his order, and it is not revenge at all. He cheerfully asks the two knights to help him clean the cursed annex. Elsewhere, the head butler staggers through the corridor after the Duke beat him, and the servant beside him reports that Heinley's face and teeth may never fully recover. The head butler's rage lands entirely on Ian, while the servant beside him quietly witnesses that twisted loyalty. Remembering the Duke's order to keep Ian under control, the head butler decides the curse room is perfect, while the servant hears every word. When the servant nervously mentions the annex's victims, and even the Duchess, the head butler snaps him shut at once because that topic is forbidden here. The head butler coldly says Ian only has to look proper until the legitimation ceremony, then walks off, leaving the servant behind with orders to send no cleaning supplies. Once the head butler turns his back, the servant drops the harmless act in his mind, because he is actually an assassin and the prince without knights looks like an easy job. Back in the annex, Nathan coughs through the dust and complains loudly that knights should not be reduced to housework. Galen, now wearing an apron over his gear, grimly points out that no servants will come here anyway, so this mess is theirs to handle. Even lunch feels like an insult to Nathan, but Ian eats calmly because compared with his old life and the battlefield, this meal is still more than enough. Nathan blames the head butler for the treatment, but Ian quietly suspects the Duke himself approved all of it. To Ian, the annex is still a treasure vault, because if he can uncover what Karen found here, he can start building power inside the Duke's own castle. While cleaning under the bed, Ian finally spots a hidden object and instantly realizes he may have found the secret he came for. Just as Ian reaches that breakthrough, someone knocks on the annex door and interrupts him. The visitor turns out to be the servant from earlier, and Ian immediately finds it suspicious that anyone was suddenly sent to help him now. Behind that polite smile, the servant is already sizing Ian up as his target, an assassin planted in the Garcia dukedom to erase this new royal bloodline before the king learns about him. The assassin is feeling confident because the castle's knights have been summoned away, leaving Ian with no attendant and, he assumes, no protection. His plan jolts sideways when Ian flatly says the cleaning is already finished, and he does not need any help. The assassin can barely believe Ian got knights to do housework, because that ruins the lonely, helpless picture he was counting on. Ian recognizes the servant at once as the man who killed him before and identifies him as an assassin tied to Duke Lavalter, but for now he only wants him out of the room fast. When Ian tries to dismiss him, the assassin scrambles for an excuse and claims he still needs to deliver something ordered by the Duke. Before the assassin can push further, Nathan storms in from behind, furious that a helper only shows up after the hard work is done. The assassin almost exposes himself when Nathan's grab makes him reflexively twist with real combat skill, and Nathan instantly notices something is off. Galen's voice cuts in from inside, and the assassin instantly drops back into a meek servant act before Nathan or the other knight can pin him down. Nathan lets him go for a second, then immediately punches him in the face and slams the annex door shut with savage satisfaction. Ian twists the knife one more time by reopening the door just long enough to hand the humiliated assassin his used food tray and tell him to clean that up too. Seething after the humiliation, the assassin vows he will definitely kill Ian tonight once the knights are gone for training. Outside the annex, a silver-haired young man watches the whole scene from a tree with cold amusement. At 9 that night, the servant finishes his duties, drops the disguise, changes into assassin gear, and slips out through a prepared emergency exit. He is confident because he personally watched Nathan and Galen leave the annex for the mandatory night training, with Ian smiling and telling them to hurry back. As he heads for the annex, a voice speaks through a communication tool in his hand and asks why he is moving already, but the assassin insists on handling it now. He reaches the remote annex roof space, uses the old ceiling passage he investigated in advance, and creeps closer with light, disciplined steps. From above, he spots Ian alone in bed hugging a pillow and sleeping so peacefully that the kill looks almost effortless. The assassin lowers a thread toward Ian's mouth and prepares to drip poison down it, using a quiet method that should leave almost no trace. Just as the poison starts to fall, something suddenly whips at his neck from the darkness and throws the whole attempt off balance. The rotten ceiling gives way under him, and he crashes into the room right where Nathan and Galen have been waiting with weapons ready. Nathan proudly admits he dragged Galen back because he knew something would happen, leaving the assassin reeling as his perfect chance collapses. Before the assassin can recover, Ian sits up fully awake and strikes him hard in the stomach, proving he was never asleep at all. A crystal communication ball drops from the assassin's hand, and a young man's voice spills out asking whether that unexpected younger brother has been dealt with. A fallen communication tool rolls to Ian's feet, and the voice coming from it makes him freeze for a different reason. Ian instantly recognizes the speaker as Alberto Kaistein, the second prince who has been trying to kill him from the shadows for a long time. Ian quickly pieces it together and suspects the assassin may belong to Alberto's private network, not Duke Lavalter's official will. That possibility excites Ian, because if Alberto dirted Lavalter's name behind his guardian's back, Ian might be able to wound the strongest successor candidate before the real succession fight begins. When the voice on the crystal calls for assassin number 23, Ian snatches it up before Nathan can stop him. Instead of hiding, Ian opens with a blunt insult and asks if Alberto is the one who sent this trash. The voice on the other end goes still, then asks if Ian killed number 23, clearly intrigued instead of rattled. Ian plays along and says the assassin is still alive, then asks if he should dispose of him instead. Alberto laughs and casually says failed trash does not deserve to live, exposing just how cold he is toward his own men. Ian pushes further and demands a name in return, baiting Alberto into the open. Before Alberto can dodge, Ian calmly names him outright as Alberto Kaistein, second prince of the kingdom. That lands hard enough to strip Alberto's lazy tone away, and he sharply demands to know who is speaking because the assassin was never supposed to know his identity. Ian refuses to give his name and mocks the saintly prince for sending assassins while hiding his own face. Alberto guesses he must be Heinle Garcia, and Ian quietly decides to use that mistake to his advantage. Keeping up the act, Ian copies Heinle's arrogant style and lectures Alberto about manners as if a duke's son is scolding an unworthy prince. Alberto bristles, but Ian keeps pressing because the prince cannot admit who he is without exposing the assassination attempt. Ian twists the knife by pretending a real crown prince candidate would never sound this vulgar, pushing Alberto deeper into the trap. Then Ian drops the fake voice, speaks in his own tone, and openly declares war. He promises that next time he will cut Alberto's head off himself, then adds that the Prince Ian serves as more fit to rule than this hidden coward. Before Alberto can answer, Ian crushes the crystal under his shoe and cuts the connection dead. Galen rushes over in alarm, but Ian just says he wore shoes to bed because he expected the assassin to come. Nathan is horrified that Ian just provoked the second prince, but Ian stays smug because Alberto cannot expose tonight's failure without ruining himself. Ian quietly calculates that if Alberto moves at all now, Duke Garcia will have to clash with him, which is exactly the hostility Ian wanted to force into the open. After that, Ian orders total secrecy about the assassination attempt and even treats the stolen gear around the room as part of the same secret. In a hidden dark room elsewhere, Alberto stares at his shattered crystal and replays the insult in disbelief. What enrages him most is hearing that some unknown younger brother was called more worthy of the throne than he is. With Duke Lavalter, the military, and even the Royal Knight Commander behind him, Alberto cannot stand being compared to a younger brother he still sees as a low-born serf. He decides on the spot to get rid of Ian at the legitimation ceremony, convinced one rush month cannot hide the stains of a serf's upbringing. Alberto orders Duke Lavalter to send him useful knights and decides to handle the legitimation ceremony personally, especially with Duke Garcia's direct heir also attending. Before any of that, Alberto decides he wants to see this praised younger brother's face for himself. The next day, Ian asks Nathan to teach him swordsmanship because Galen thinks Nathan's style suits him best. Galen's reason is simple. Ian has sharp reflexes and an instinct for spotting weakness, so a technique that turns the enemy's power back on them may fit him. Nathan still balks, because he thinks Ian should stay protected instead of trying to fight for himself. Ian answers that if he only relies on being protected, he will end up losing his own will, and he wants the strength to defend both himself and his beliefs. Nathan sees he is serious and finally agrees, warning that the training will be strict. Their first problem appears immediately when Nathan says Ian is too trapped in ceremonial royal swordsmanship to learn real killing techniques properly. Hearing that stings Ian, because in his past life he spent years forcing himself through that same style after being told he had no talent at all. Nathan tries to reassure him that the talent is real, but also says the process of stripping away his old habits is going to hurt like hell. 5 brutal hours later, Ian is drenched in sweat and utterly exhausted from running, tumbling, crawling, and rolling instead of swinging a blade. Galen thinks Nathan is overdoing it on a child, but Nathan argues Ian's frail body needs rebuilding first, and says he already arranged rich meals for recovery. Galen privately admits to himself that Ian's body is far too skinny for a royal contender, even if the boy has already shown surprising grit in fights. Then Galen leans in and quietly tells Nathan the real reason he passed Ian over. The boy may be showing signs of the rare talent called Third Eye. Nathan jerks back in disbelief at the mention of Third Eye, and Galen grimly says the person who taught Ian before must have completely misjudged him. Galen adds one more twist. Ceremonial royal swordsmanship is not worthless at all, because it traces back to the first king's original blade art that almost nobody could advance beyond the basics. That makes Ian's situation even more urgent in his own mind, because he only has a month before the legitimation ceremony, and soon other tutors will start taking away his time. Remembering how badly he lost sword matches in the past, Ian decides he needs the hidden power Karen once found in this annex before the ceremony begins. When Ian urgently asks where the third young master is, a servant tells him Karen is already on his way here. Nathan explains that Karen was assigned to Ian and that he himself is here because he serves as Karen's escort knight. That makes Ian even more anxious, because once Karen arrives, there is no chance he will hand over whatever hidden power is buried here. As if that pressure is not enough, another message arrives saying the second prince is also coming soon. Ian decides this is his chance and sprints straight to his room despite his aching body, desperate to reach the hidden power before anyone else does. Once inside, Ian yanks up the bedclothes and searches the spot he has been waiting for. Then the hidden mechanism finally clicks open and reveals a secret door beneath the bed. Ian presses the hidden groove in his bed, and the whole bed slides away to reveal the secret entrance Karen once used. He heads down alone into the foul, ancient tunnel, convinced that if he handles this right, Karen's future power can become his instead. At the bottom, Ian finds only an empty cave, and his plan nearly collapses on the spot. While searching in frustration, he spots ancient writing and patterns engraved into the floor, but he still cannot read them or sense any magic. With nothing else to gain, Ian gives up for now and starts climbing back out, thinking he may need books on ancient language instead. Then the entrance starts closing above him, and Ian looks up to see Karen standing there with a mocking grin. Ian rushes the stairs too late, and the door slams shut, leaving him trapped in total darkness with no way to reopen it. Stuck alone, Ian realizes Karen must have followed him and may already know this place better than anyone else. Just when the trap feels hopeless, the chamber starts glowing on its own, as if the complete darkness was the real trigger all along. As the room brightens, Ian finds ancient murals of a crowned ruler above 7 armed figures battling monsters, and he recognizes the old legend of the 7 virtues. New words carve themselves into the wall and demand proof of eligibility and conviction, and then the message turns blunt: prove it with blood. Drawn in by the command, Ian pulls out his dagger, ready to stake everything on whatever this test demands. Up above, Karen laughs to himself, sure he has buried Ian in a useless family relic that has frustrated generations of dukes. Karen steps out and runs straight into Nathan and Galen, then casually lies that he only came to greet Ian because he will be in charge of him now. Nathan reluctantly reveals that the second prince has arrived and insists on seeing Ian, while Galen quietly warns him not to say too much in front of Karen. Galen stares Karen down for Ian's whereabouts, but Karen stays cool because he thinks no one can hear a thing from underground. A loud disturbance at the annex entrance brings them outside, where the second prince arrives in person with armed men and demands to see his younger brother. Galen politely blocks him, but the second prince openly mocks Ian as a coward hiding behind a knight. Trying to push the insult further, Karen tells the prince that Ian disappeared the moment he heard of his arrival. Before anyone can press further, a blinding light erupts from Ian's annex room, and Karen goes pale when he realizes exactly where it is coming from. Karen instantly understands the light points straight to the hidden room, and he curses himself for locking Ian inside if the prince really solved the secret first. The second prince decides to walk straight to the glowing annex, sensing there may be something important there, and wanting to keep Ian under his control. Karen hurriedly blocks the way and insists that whatever is happening there belongs to Duke Garcia's family, not the royal visitor. The second prince explodes at being stopped, declares his royal authority, and turns vicious when Karen's men dare stand in his way. Karen calls the prince's behavior unlawful, but the prince twists it into concern for his dear younger brother, and keeps pressing forward anyway. Then Duke Garcia arrives, and one look from him is enough to make Karen flinch because his father clearly knows he caused this mess. The Duke smoothly urges the prince toward the drawing room instead, refusing to let him poke through the annex in public. The prince resists, but the Duke quietly warns him with the kind of pressure even a future king cannot ignore, and the prince finally yields for now. Right as the Duke says Ian will appear soon, Ian walks in clean and composed, shocking everyone who knows where he was supposed to be. In the drawing room, the silence turns ugly until Ian finally enters, making the prince snap that he took long enough just to wash himself. The second prince sneers that filth does not come off someone born low, and Ian answers with a smile that this lowly thing is still his brother. Ian even thanks the prince for coming all this way to see him, turning the insult back on him and making the prince's temper sharpen. While the room watches in disbelief, Ian quietly decides he no longer needs to hide his edge now that the hidden power from below has become his. The prince says keeping him waiting for 2 hours deserves punishment, so Ian suddenly changes tactics and claims he was too frightened to pull himself together. Karen tries to slip out and check the basement for himself, but Ian stops him cold and asks where he thinks he is going. Then Ian drops the trapdoor on him in front of everyone, saying Karen still has to explain why he locked him in the basement after hearing the second prince had arrived. In the drawing room, Ian suddenly turns the whole meeting upside down by accusing Karen of locking him in the annex basement to keep him from meeting the second prince. Ian keeps his act going, saying he only wanted to see his brother and was terrified when Karen shut him underground, pushing the room toward an attempted murder scandal. Karen protests that Ian is framing him, but Ian calmly pins him down with one fact he cannot deny: he did lock Ian in the basement, while knowing the prince was coming. When the Duke clicks his tongue in open irritation, Karen realizes his father is not angry about Ian's suffering at all, only about Karen creating a weakness the prince can exploit. The second prince immediately smells an opening and starts pressing Karen like prey, more interested in damaging Garcia and maybe stealing away a talented son than helping Ian. Playing along, Ian sweetly confirms that Karen called him a fool while shutting the door, and the prince seizes that insult to the royal family on the spot. The prince pushes harder and asks the Duke to follow the law, hinting that Karen deserves brutal punishment for insulting royalty. The Duke answers with a chilling line about cutting out his own son's tongue in his own castle, and for a second the room feels one breath away from violence. Backing off, the second prince pretends he only wants a sincere apology from the Duke, but the demand is really a bid to force Garcia into yielding both pride and leverage. Just when the two men are measuring each other, Ian cuts in and asks the obvious question: if he is the victim, why is his brother the one taking the apology and compensation? Ian flips the whole setup with clean logic. The prince can be apologized to for Ian being late, but the basement humiliation happened to Ian, so that compensation belongs to him. The Duke laughs because Ian's reasoning is airtight, and the second prince finally understands that Ian baited him into forcing the Duke to discuss compensation out loud. Choosing the useful tiger cub in front of him over the prince pressing for advantage, the Duke asks Ian what compensation he wants. Instead of money, Ian asks for the right to handle Karen's punishment and education himself, stunning everyone in the room. Karen barely has time to react before the Duke coolly approves it, reducing his gifted third son to Ian's personal problem. As the audience ends, Ian cheerfully says goodnight while Karen grits his teeth like a humiliated servant, and the second prince watches with the look of a man stabbed in the back. Trying to recover, the second prince sweetly tells Ian there will be a legitimation ceremony soon and offers to explain what he needs tomorrow as an older brother. Ian instantly reads the trap, because he remembers exactly what kind of older brother this prince was in his last life. The prince makes his real move by telling Ian to come alone without the knights, claiming he only wants private brotherly time. After the prince leaves, Ian hurries back to his room, already planning both to deal with Karen later and to survive the far more urgent problem waiting tomorrow morning. Ian knows the prince will try to cripple him in a sword lesson, but he also knows his own body is still just a weak beginner's body. His one hope is the new hidden power from the basement, because a whispering smoke has been calling to him ever since he came back. The voice keeps pressing Ian to call it once he is ready, and he realizes the smoke is becoming harder to contain the longer he stays away from this room. Remembering the underground chamber, Ian recalls how blood on the ancient pattern awakened a voice that named itself one of Keistein's 7 virtues, faith. Now back in his room, Ian studies the blood-red mark branded into his palm, and the matching flame-like pattern left on the floor. When Ian steps onto the floor pattern, blood seeps from his palm into the design, and a blinding light erupts from under him. The room vanishes into a pure white space, and at its center stands a giant armored figure made of light. Ian asks who he is, and the radiant warrior confirms it himself. He is Faith, one of the 7 virtues. Ian recognizes the name from legend and tests him with the title sword of the first emperor, only to be met with silent pressure and a demand for his name. When Ian gives his full royal name, his eyes adjust enough to reveal something startling. Faith's face looks exactly like a young Duke Garcia. Faith says Ian is not his descendant, and Ian immediately realizes this power must originally belong to the Garcia bloodline, which explains why Karen could obtain it. Then Faith unexpectedly says lineage does not matter, because Ian proved himself with blood and now has even better qualifications than the descendants. Faith grants Ian a contract, but warns that his body is still too young and weak to receive the full power all at once. Instead, Faith says Ian will grow stronger as his faith grows broader and deeper, and for now he will receive only the power matching what he has already earned. The light pours into Ian's body, leaving him dizzy and overwhelmed as the new power settles inside him. In the middle of the transfer, Ian suddenly hears the second prince's voice from somewhere else in the castle and realizes his senses have sharpened dramatically. Faith confirms the power is still weak but already useful, then dissolves into light and sinks into Ian's body. Before he vanishes completely, Faith leaves Ian with one last absolute promise: no one can defeat those who have faith. Elsewhere that night, the second prince stands on the terrace of the castle's best room with a wine glass, brushing off a worried Levolter knight, and saying handling Ian will be easy. He repeats the intelligence Karen gave him and mocks Ian as a weak child who is only doing body training because he cannot really use his sword yet. Even when the knight warns him not to lower his guard, The prince smiles and reveals he has prepared something extra for tomorrow. In the corner waits a clear black and red sword oozing sinister energy, a weapon he picked out specifically for Ian. Thinking about how Ian dared use him, the prince crushes his wine glass in his hand and imagines the blood that will spill tomorrow. The next morning in the training hall, the second prince waits impatiently and complains that the youngest prince is rude for making him stand there. A Garcia knight quietly reminds him not to forget the duke's words, and the prince answers with a smile that sounds far too comfortable with whatever happens in the match. The knight realizes the prince may be planning to cripple Ian, but all Garcia's side has been ordered to do is contain the area and not interfere. When Ian finally arrives, the second prince greets him with bright fake warmth and calls the session a special lesson before the legitimation ceremony. The prince immediately mocks Ian's current blade as too shabby and orders a knight to bring over the gift he prepared for his little brother. Ian is startled because the weapon is a royal treasured sword, famous for being something only the true Kai Stein successor can wield. The prince acts like he is teaching royal dignity, but his real trick is simple. Once unsheathed, this sacred blade becomes crushingly heavy for almost everyone. Without giving Ian real time to settle, the second prince steps in with a maddened grin and launches the first attack. But instead of collapsing under the sword's weight, Ian grips the hilt with calm certainty, because this is the very blade he used in his previous life. In the training hall, Ian calmly offers to show what he has learned, and the second prince smirks because he still thinks this is just weak ceremonial swordplay. The second prince plans to win instantly by rushing Ian before he can handle the cursed heavy sword, convinced the blade will crush him the moment it leaves the scabbard. But when the prince lunges, Ian blocks him himself, and the sound of steel hitting steel wipes the smug look off his brother's face. The second prince stares in disbelief as Ian actually lifts and balances the unsheathed black royal sword that no one else could freely wield. A childhood warning flashes through the second prince's mind. That sword was said to recognize the true successor of Kai Stein, and the idea rattles him badly. He forces himself to reject the omen, telling himself the sword's choice means nothing as long as he can still cut Ian down. He attacks again, and Ian blocks him a second time with the same plain royal swordsmanship the prince used to dismiss as ceremonial fluff. When the prince accuses Galen of secretly teaching him real combat, Ian coolly says no one trained him and that he learned this from a book. Ian remembers how a royal knight once called him talentless, so he shut himself away and drilled the outdated royal manual over and over until the motions became his own. That lonely practice paid off, because Ian knows the prince's habits and starts using those simple forms to turn his brother's attacks against him. Ian needles him on purpose, saying this only proves the prince's famous swordsmanship is not as great as he thinks. The insult works, and the second prince charges harder, now convinced Ian must have some hidden knightly support, or an oath boosting him. Ian answers with a bitter smile that no knight would swear an oath to someone who was a serf until recently, which only makes the prince angrier. Even so, Ian knows he cannot win with muscle alone, because the black sword is brutally heavy and his child body is already straining under it. Then the new power in Ian's heart stirs, and a quiet inner voice asks what he wants to do now. Ian answers from the bottom of his heart that he refuses to be used or forced along anymore, and his own faith sentence is born: my steps never stop. That power immediately changes the duel, making the heavy royal sword feel lighter in Ian's hands as long as he keeps moving forward. When their blades crash again, the second prince is the one who staggers, stunned that a child is suddenly overpowering him. Ian warns him to hold his sword straight or die, and each step forward makes his presence feel more dangerous. The power is not perfect though, and the second prince finally slips one attack through and slashes Ian across the body. The prince starts to gloat, but Ian keeps walking through the pain, and the pressure from his sword only keeps rising. Step by step, Ian drives him all the way back to the wall, and the second prince suddenly realizes this feels worse than facing a knight with an oath. Panicking, the second prince shouts for help, only to remember too late that he himself arranged the duel so no one could enter. Ian's face turns icy as he remembers this brother murdering their other siblings in his previous life, and any hesitation disappears. Desperate, the second prince pulls out poison like the assassin's poison he used before, but Ian attacks before he can turn the tables. With a savage answer to his brother's earlier threat, Ian cuts off the second prince's arm in one clean strike. Elsewhere in the Duke's office, Karen questions whether letting Ian face the second prince will ruin the legitimation ceremony. The Duke dismisses the concern and says the king will not care much about a weak prince born from humble blood. He explains that Ian's legitimation was already arranged as a small, almost hidden ceremony handled by the archbishop instead of the king himself. When Karen keeps pushing, the Duke snaps that Garcia cannot afford to challenge both the crown and Lavalter at once without a better plan. The Duke's desk reveals why he is yielding at all, a Lavalter letter backed by the king's own seal, ordering him not to interfere with this education arrangement. He reminds Karen that Kai Stein has 3 sons, and one ducal family already fell when the others joined forces against it. In truth, the Duke sees this as profitable. If he looks away for a moment, Lavalter will pay with thousands of priceless war horses. He also believes Ian will survive somehow, and privately decides a prince full of hatred could be more useful than a tame puppet. Then Nathan and Galen appear at the office door and beg to go to Ian, saying the boy should never have been left alone with the cruel second prince. The Duke brushes them off, but Nathan fires back that Garcia's watchers will wait far too long and might not move even if a prince loses an arm. Before anyone can settle it, an attendant bursts in shouting that a prince's arm has been cut off. For one awful second they all assume Ian was maimed, and even the Duke starts issuing orders on that assumption. Then the attendant blurts out the impossible truth: Ian was the one who cut off the second prince's arm. Back in the training hall, the wounded second prince calls Ian insane, but Ian answers by throwing his brother's own cruel lessons right back at him. Ian says this was exactly the kind of education the prince preached before, where the one who gets hit first is just a fool. He does not intend to stop at one arm either, and he raises the blade toward the prince's neck to finish him for good. The second prince panics and warns that the royal family and Lavalter will hunt Ian if he goes through with it, but Ian just says that was already his brother's plan for him. Ian tells him that anyone who swings a sword at another life should be ready to lose his own, and he brings the blade down. At the last second, a knight crashes in and blocks Ian's execution strike. Ian sharply points out the hypocrisy, because this knight stayed outside during the duel and only interfered now that his master might die. Chris admits the dishonor and begs forgiveness, saying only that the second prince cannot die here yet. To repay the interruption, Chris immediately draws his own sword and prepares to cut off his arm in exchange for his master's life. Ian is genuinely thrown by that level of loyalty, because in this age most knights put themselves before any lord. Then Ian twists the moment on purpose, mocking Chris for acting as if a mere knight's arm could ever equal the life of a prince. Chris panics and apologizes at once, realizing Ian is demanding a price worthy of royal blood instead. Ian finally names his price, not the knight's arm or life, but a face-to-face meeting with Duke Lavalter. Far away on his throne, King Eloin barely reacts when the chamberlain reports that the second prince met Ian. But the moment he hears that Ian cut off the second prince's arm, the king's dull eyes sharpen with real interest. When the chamberlain confirms no one helped and the brothers fought alone, the king openly enjoys the surprise and calls Ian interesting. That single report changes everything, because the king decides he will attend the legitimation after all and orders Ian brought before him in person. With the second prince bleeding out in the training hall, Ian calmly asks Chris to arrange a face-to-face meeting with Duke Lavalter. The request is brutal on purpose, because Ian knows Duke Lavalter hates any tie to Garcia and would normally refuse to even look his way. The second prince, barely conscious and furious, demands to know what Ian is planning with Lavalter. Still bleeding and furious, the second prince insists Lavalter would never betray him, because the Duke is supposed to become his father-in-law. Ian realizes the prince still does not understand the real threat. Lavalter would never forgive the crimes he has been hiding from him. Instead of arguing, Ian pushes the sword back toward the prince's throat and bluntly asks if he should just cut his neck next. That finally breaks the standoff, and Chris hurriedly agrees to send word to Duke Lavalter if Ian will lower the blade. Chris gives in because Ian's eyes look like someone who has killed before, even though Ian is mostly bluffing underneath. Inside, Ian is relieved, because he never meant to kill the second prince here before forcing Lavalter to abandon him first. He knows killing the prince now would only make Lavalter see him as a murderer, so Ian decides to strip away the prince's support first and end him later. Ian also decides he cannot trust Garcia forever, so Lavalter could become the safer shield he needs to survive. To seal it, Ian hands Chris proof for Lavalter and warns that the second prince's safety during treatment depends on the Duke keeping his promise. The moment the threat settles, Galen bursts in first and anxiously checks whether Ian is hurt. Nathan and the rest of Garcia's side arrive right after, and Duke Garcia takes one look at the blood in the severed arm before his usual poker face finally cracks. When Garcia demands an explanation, Ian instantly puts on a fearful face and claims his hand just slipped because he is still inexperienced with swords. The second prince explodes and shouts that Ian targeted his arm on purpose, but Ian keeps up the act and says he only knows ceremonial swordsmanship. Ian's lie turns into a deeper insult, and the second prince can feel everyone silently thinking he lost to a child who only learned ceremonial swordsmanship. The second prince is carried away grinding his teeth, while Nathan dryly jokes to Galen that ceremonial swordsmanship must be unstoppable after all. For the next few days, Garcia's castle buzzes with gossip, and everyone talks about the serf-born prince who somehow beat the second prince. Garcia ignores the gossip and privately calls in the masked watcher he had hidden in Ian's shadow, wanting every detail for himself. The report hits hardest when Garcia learns the second prince handed Ian that special royal sword, and Ian not only lifted it but used it properly. That makes Garcia wonder if the old legend about Kaistein's true successor is actually real, and his unease around Ian suddenly deepens. Instead of backing off, Garcia decides he has to tighten Ian's leash now and turn him into a controllable puppet before the boy grows any stronger. Then an urgent royal letter arrives and ruins his timing by ordering him to bring the seventh prince to the palace immediately. Several days later, Ian has been enjoying a fake sickbed vacation, because the real problem is that his body is wrecked after forcing out Faith. He knows the palace summon will also drag him toward the weapon selection for the legitimation ceremony, so he keeps pretending to be too sore to move. Once the healer says he has improved, the Duke's summons reaches him again, and Ian can no longer stay hidden in bed. In Garcia's office, the Duke hands Ian a royal order and tells him to read it for himself. Ian is startled to see the king's own name on the letter, not just a routine message from the royal family. The new order changes everything. The legitimation ceremony is being moved to the royal palace, all the central nobles are being called in, and the king will attend personally. Garcia adds that Ian must enter the palace early and reserve a room there, making it clear this is no minor summons anymore. Before Ian can process that, Chris suddenly arrives at the office again carrying a message from Duke Lavalter. Garcia tries to brush him off, assuming Lavalter only wants to complain about the second prince, but Chris insists the message cannot wait. Chris delivers the real message. Lavalter wants a meeting in the capital before the ceremony, at the First Night Order headquarters inside the royal palace. Garcia snaps that Lavalter should come himself if he wants a meeting, and then Chris lands the real blow. Chris calmly clarifies that Lavalter does not want Duke Garcia at all, he wants to see Ian. Garcia repeats the line in disbelief, while Ian smoothly accepts the meeting as if this was already expected. When Garcia demands to know if Ian planned this, Ian flatly admits that he did ask for the meeting himself. Ian gives a harmless excuse about apologizing over the second prince's injury, but Garcia can hear the real message underneath. Ian can choose another patron if he wants. That thought makes Garcia panic, because if Ian slips from his hands to Lavalter, it would damage both his plans and his pride. Chris only twists the knife deeper by offering Lavalter's knights as Ian's personal escort once he leaves Garcia territory. Garcia dismisses Chris so he can talk to Ian alone, no longer pretending this is a simple courtesy call. The moment the door closes, Garcia drops the formal mask and asks the real question: what will it take to stop Ian from meeting Lavalter? Ian needles him by complaining about the missing tea first, making Garcia call the head butler while swallowing his temper. Garcia's first offer is Nathan, promising to hand over the swordsman Ian wanted as a way to keep him tied down. Ian says nothing and just drinks his tea, so Garcia raises the stakes and offers him all the soldiers who came to bring him here too. When even that fails, Garcia turns threatening and warns that Lavalter might kill Ian for hurting the second prince. Ian answers with a more dangerous option of his own, saying he could simply declare support for the second prince and give up the throne. Garcia is rattled, but he does not believe Ian's act about not wanting the throne, because those are not the eyes of someone who has given up. So Garcia asks the only useful question left: what can Garcia give him that Lavalter cannot? When Ian steps back out, the answer is obvious from the noise behind him, because Garcia has already smashed something in frustration after paying the price. Ian immediately starts spending his winnings by sending word that Nathan now belongs under his command instead of Karen's. He also claims command of the 100 soldiers who came with him, and tells Galen to send the centurion to him first. Chris carefully asks what he should tell Lavalter now, realizing Ian may have just used the Duke's name as leverage. Ian reassures him that the meeting will still happen, but he casually adds that he will be traveling with Garcia instead of Lavalter's escort. Privately, Ian is pleased because Garcia bought exactly what he wanted most, a promise that Ian would not openly take Lavalter's hand. But Ian's real reason for meeting Lavalter goes deeper, because the king's sudden personal involvement means the coming ceremony is now a test that could destroy him if he missteps. Soon after, the Duke sends over a second payment for the deal, a Garcia family heirloom once used by the first Duke himself. The instant Ian touches the relic, his awakened faith reacts to it, confirming this object matters far more than a simple gift. With everything prepared, Ian heads for the royal palace in Duke Garcia's large procession, traveling with the family's core members, including Karen and Nathan. As the convoy reaches the heart of Kaistein, Ian lightly touches the heirloom and finally sees the royal road and castle spread out before him. At a nearby vassal estate, the second prince explodes when he hears Ian's legitimation ceremony has been moved to the royal palace. The news gets worse when he learns the order came directly from the king, which leaves him stunned for a beat. The princess on the other end mocks him for losing his arm, and the insult cuts deeper because she is clearly enjoying his humiliation. When she says only 4 ceremonial outfits need preparing because he cannot appear like this, he finally smashes the crystal ball in rage. Meanwhile, Ian approaches the capital and quietly stares at the royal castle in the distance, knowing this place once marked the start of his ruined future. Nathan mistakes that look for excitement, and jokes that even he still gets stunned every time he sees the capital. But what really has Ian's attention is the bracelet on his wrist, which starts resonating harder the closer they get to the royal road. Ian realizes the bracelet is tied to faith and may reveal its secret inside the palace, so he decides no one, especially the Duke, can learn what it is doing. Karen notices Ian watching the bracelet and asks if it came from Duke Garcia's office, instantly making Ian play the harmless master again. Ian teases Karen about making a fine attendant, and Karen nearly loses his temper under that calm golden stare. Nathan frowns toward the capital and says there is still no welcoming crowd, a glaring slight for a prince's first entry into the castle. Karen bluntly warns Ian not to expect a warm welcome from the king and reminds him that being a bastard still matters in this palace. Ian secretly checks the mood with Faith and hears a very different rumor spreading through the soldiers. The prince who cut off the second prince's arm is already being taken seriously. He answers Karen that Kaistein values strength more than pure legitimacy, and that sharp reply lands because everyone knows his victory changed the rules. Even so, Ian stays wary because stronger brothers and poison schemes may be waiting in the palace, so he starts thinking about securing allies before the ceremony. Just as Ian decides to move first, the procession lurches to a stop when guards shout at a shabby peddler blocking the royal road. The filthy peddler keeps smiling and begs for one moment with the seventh prince, insisting he has something to deliver. Nathan instantly reads it as a setup, and the soldiers move to drag the man away by force. Then the fake peddler suddenly throws off the soldiers with absurd strength, exposing that he is no ordinary beggar at all. He leaps high enough to look like he is flying, and the road erupts in alarm as the escort realizes a real fighter has slipped into their path. Galen cuts in immediately and pins the intruder's movement, forcing the dangerous stranger back under control. When the dragged-in beggar is brought before the carriages, both Ian and Duke Garcia go pale because they recognize him at once. The Duke recognizes the man as Louis Kai Stein, the genius third prince, and instantly understands how dangerous this roadside visit could become. As the Duke weighs whether this is bait for a political trap, the third prince casually asks for a penny and acts like getting beaten was all part of the joke. The Duke decides he cannot risk attacking a prince who may have come specifically to lure him into making a mistake. He finally starts to reveal the beggar's identity, but Ian cuts across him with a loud order to treat the man as a fraud and throw him out. Galen obeys Ian first, and the third prince's smug act cracks when he realizes the attack about to hit him is real. Nathan jumps in too, eager not to lose the lead to Galen, and the disguised prince is suddenly boxed in by two elite knights. The third prince tries to stop them by speaking up, but Ian coldly pushes the pressure higher and refuses to let him talk his way out. At Ian's prompting, Nathan uses his oath, exploding into blinding speed that even Ian has to respect. Nathan's strike slices the third prince's leg and drops him hard to the ground before he can fully reveal himself. When the prince still tries to talk, Galen plants his sword in front of him with enough killing intent to shut him up instantly. The Duke urgently orders everyone to stop, only to find that Galen is waiting for Ian's word instead of his. Ian calmly admits he knew this was the third prince all along, then orders Galen to stand down on his own terms. He greets the battered man as Big Brother Louis, and the third prince can only laugh in disbelief at how badly his surprise entrance backfired. Soon after, Louis rides in Ian's carriage and calls him the strangest of his younger brothers, turning the first meeting into a private test instead of a fight. Ian keeps his guard up because this is still the same brother who once used Nathan to threaten Duke Garcia in the future, he remembers. When Louis asks about the second prince, Ian bluntly tells him his arm was cut off and he is probably still being treated. Louis openly enjoys that answer, admitting he learned swordsmanship partly because he wanted to punch the second prince back after years of abuse. He also reveals he refused Duke Lavalter as a master simply because he never liked the man, which gives Ian a new piece of the board. Then Louis asks the real question, wanting to know how Ian recognized him through that filthy disguise. Ian says it was his eyes, claiming the golden color gave him away as a royal, and that answer leaves Louis half convinced and half more intrigued. Louis shifts to what he really wants and praises Nathan and Galen, hinting that he would gladly trade for knights that useful. Ian shuts that down immediately and makes it clear Nathan and Galen are not up for bargaining. Louis just laughs and warns that others, even the king, will try to snatch valuable knights away sooner or later. As they arrive, Louis suddenly tosses Ian a silver pendant with a green gem, and says Ian has things he needs to do because everyone is waiting for him. Before Ian can press him, Louis opens the moving carriage door, wishes him luck, and hints that Ian has to get through something else first. A chamberlain formally receives the seventh prince at the royal castle, and Ian steps into the place where his life as a true royal heir will now begin. He is led to the room assigned to him, far better than what he once had, but the moment he enters he spots something waiting there. On display in his room is a letter from King Eloin himself, laid out beside two items as if the palace had already prepared the next move for him. Alone in his room, Ian opens the king's box and freezes when he sees two plaques he never received in his past life. Ian immediately recognizes that the lion plaque is a royal seal, proof he is already acknowledged as true royal blood before the ceremony. Ian quickly realizes this is no ordinary seal because it carries the king's own authority, the kind only a few personally favored people ever received. The second plaque is the Seal of Trials, a one-time key to the royal treasury where a prince has to survive the danger and bring out one treasure. That hits Ian hard because in his first life he was denied this trial completely and treated like a prince who never even got a chance. Ian learns the king is making him choose, keep the royal seal for instant recognition, or risk his life with the trial seal. Ian does not hesitate for long and reaches for the Seal of Trials, choosing the dangerous path he was once denied. Ian calmly sticks with the Seal of Trials, and the room hangs in tense silence around his dangerous choice. When he looks from the sealed royal letter back to the room, Ian catches the hidden trap behind the false courtesy around him. Ian's golden-eyed glare turns icy as he openly identifies the hidden spying behind the king's letter. Ian threatens the spy with the king's name and seizes control of the room without flinching. Once he is alone, Ian decides not to expose the spy yet because that weakness will be more useful later as leverage against the first princess's side. The king's letter itself is brutally short, just one cold line saying he is looking forward to the ceremony. Instead of sulking, Ian quietly promises he will answer that expectation with something the king cannot ignore. Right then, the pendant the third prince gave him suddenly glows, and Ian's awakened faith stirs with it. Elsewhere in a dark palace room, a hidden woman asks an old subordinate whether their move against Ian is in place. The old man reveals they planted a scented candle in Ian's room, and it is not just poison but the start of a much nastier curse. He explains that if Ian breathes in the incense, the curse will quietly eat away his talent for swordsmanship, while looking like ordinary illness. Because Ian is still young and has no protective maternal family, they are sure the curse will ruin him before anyone notices. They end the meeting laughing, convinced the legitimation ceremony will crush Ian before it even truly begins. A few days later, the legitimation ceremony fills with nobles who arrive eager to mock the seventh prince, not celebrate him. Their gossip paints Ian as a rough little nobody from a low background, and they assume he will embarrass himself in front of the whole court. But their mocking turns wary when they remember the king himself moved this ceremony into the palace, which means his intentions are still unclear. Duke Garcia arrives with his sons, and the room immediately stiffens under his overwhelming presence. Then the attendant announces Prince Ian, and everyone turns expecting a humiliating sight. Instead, Ian walks in flawlessly dressed and perfectly composed, moving with cleaner royal etiquette than any of them expected. The bigger shock lands a beat later when the man beside him is revealed as Duke Lavalter, Garcia's hated rival. Garcia's side is thrown off balance at once, because Ian was supposed to look like their prince, not Lavalter's guest. The hall buzzes with wild guesses that Lavalter might be switching sides, especially because the missing second prince makes the whole scene feel even stranger. Ian enjoys Garcia's anger, because making this entrance with Lavalter was a deliberate move to show the court he is not Garcia's puppet. Just before entering, Ian had gone straight to Lavalter and politely asked to walk in together so he would have a ducal escort other than Garcia. Lavalter himself resists, but his eldest son steps in and accepts, clearly seeing some use in helping Ian now. As they walk, Lavalter's son quietly reminds Ian to visit them after the ceremony to repay the debt tied to the second prince's life. For Ian, this one entrance does two jobs at once. It opens room with other nobles and forces Garcia into the kind of open conflict that may expose hidden secrets. When Ian reaches Garcia, the Duke masks his fury behind polite words and starts probing him about Lavalter. Ian calmly praises Lavalter as the kingdom's finest knight, and the air turns cold the instant those words land. Hindley snaps at Ian for disrespect, but Ian slices back that he only admired a knight every child would think was cool. Garcia shuts his son down and admits Lavalter's greatness out loud, but the smile he gives Ian says he has already marked this boy as trouble. The whole hall falls into place for the real test when the attendant finally announces King Eloin's arrival. King Eloin enters like a bored lion, radiating enough force that the room changes the moment he appears. Ian kneels before him, and the king gives only a curt order to begin, as cold and distant as ever. As the blood test begins, the hall finally sees the resemblance for itself. Ian looks strikingly like the king, especially in those golden eyes. The blood identifier glows blue, proving Ian is truly Eloin Keistein's son and wiping out any doubt in the hall. Most nobles immediately assume the ceremony is basically over, because now Ian should just receive his seal and be done. Instead, the chamberlain pauses, and the room tenses again when the king suddenly speaks for himself. Eloin asks whether Ian will prove his blood through the trial, turning a routine legitimation into a public royal challenge. The princes and nobles are stunned because that trial leads to the royal treasury, a right even older princes had to wait years to earn. For the royal heirs, the real sting is that what Ian brings back from that treasury will shape how his worth is judged from this day on. Eloin looks at the seal of trials in Ian's hand and asks one last time if Ian Keistein will prove his qualifications. With the whole court holding its breath, Ian answers without backing down, he will prove it. When Ian declares that he will prove himself, the whole ceremony hall falls into a stunned hush, and even King Eloin finally turns his full attention to the boy. At the king's order, attendants carry out 6 box treasures meant for the trial, and Ian immediately realizes this is no ordinary favor. The chamberlain presents the trial tools one by one, showing Ian a body-hardening bracelet, a small subspace ring, windwalk boots, a magic nullifying shield, protective earrings, and finally the invisibility cloak. The chamberlain gently warns Ian that the cloak matters most because, unlike the other royals, he has no one who can bail him out if the trial turns deadly. Then the real restriction hits. Ian may choose only one magic tool, and the easy answer is obviously the invisibility cloak. Ian knows the treasury trial is guarded by a monster strong enough to kill even royals, so every bit of common sense tells him to take the cloak and survive. But Ian also knows the cloak only buys a few minutes, nowhere near enough to reach the one item he truly needs to challenge the Duke and the other heirs. After a long, dangerous pause, Ian makes his choice, and the king's expression tightens the instant he sees what the boy picked. Among the royal seats, jealousy flares fast because Ian has drawn the king's personal attention, something most of Eloin's children never received. The invisibility cloak stings the most, since it is a rare treasure that the royal children usually had to secure with money and family backing of their own. Louis, the third prince, knows better than the others. Taking the cloak once helped him pass, but ever since then the king's gaze on him has turned cold, so he silently hopes Ian refuses the trap. The other royals keep debating what the king really values from the treasury, but they all agree on one thing: without the cloak, Ian should be doomed. Then Ian shocks the room by choosing the small subspace ring instead, and the laughter starts immediately. To everyone else, Ian has just thrown away his one real chance, because a storage ring can carry supplies but cannot smuggle in extra magic tools. King Eloin ends the debate by raising the Sword of Dawn and unlocking the trial itself. A huge iron gate bursts into existence in the center of the hall, and the crowd can only wonder what Ian could possibly bring back now. Ian hands over his other gear, keeps only the ring, and walks toward the gate with the quiet focus of someone stepping into a regret from his past life. Before the gate fully opens, the Chamberlain gives Ian one last chance to take the safer royal seal instead of risking everything in the trial. Ian refuses without wavering, because he knows accepting royal protection now would keep him alive but quietly cut him off from the throne forever. He names himself Ian Kaistein and promises he will carry that name now and in the future, turning his refusal into an open claim on destiny. The gate opens onto a crossroads between the Tomb of Swords and Pandemonium, and Ian heads in already knowing one wrong choice here could end his future with the king. Ignoring the path every Kaistein would be expected to choose, Ian walks straight toward Pandemonium. He is betting everything on an old theory that the first king's true relics were never in the sword vault at all, but hidden here with the rest of the non-sword treasures. That theory also fits Ian's own scars, because in his past life he once grabbed a flashy sword just because Kaistein tradition said he should, and the Duke humiliated him for wasting the chance. This time he has no intention of repeating that mistake, especially because he already came armed with the sword he actually needs. From the ring, Ian pulls out the stolen royal treasure sword, revealing the real reason he chose storage over every other magic tool. To everyone else it is just a sword, but Ian knows it is the ego sword, a treasure stronger than ordinary magic tools even if its true power is still sleeping. He steps into Pandemonium and finds a cavernous treasury like an underground city, full of glowing grass, towering displays, and treasures scattered in every direction. Then Ian spots the gatekeeper, a giant three-headed hound sleeping in the dark, and immediately drops into cover. He quickly judges the layout. The cheap, ordinary items lie near the entrance, while the truly valuable treasures should be hidden farther up in the massive tower-like display. Just as he starts moving, Ian triggers a hidden trap, and a black arrow shoots from the darkness straight at him. Ian snaps up the sword in time, knocking the arrow aside and proving that his battlefield instincts still work even in this smaller body. But the sleeping gatekeeper lashes out on instinct, and its thorn tail cuts Ian across the shoulder even though he manages to catch most of the blow with his sword. Bleeding and annoyed, Ian uses herbs from the ring to steady himself, but he realizes climbing farther with this injury will only get worse. He cannot touch any treasure here for healing because the trial would count that as his final choice on the spot. Then Ian notices something far more interesting. When the beast shifted, a hidden door appeared underneath its body. That hidden basement instantly looks like the hardest place in all of Pandemonium to reach, which makes Ian suspect it may hold exactly what he came for. To move the gatekeeper, Ian changes tactics and starts taking food out of the ring instead of trying to fight or sneak past it. The beast ignores noise and danger, but the smell of food finally wakes it, proving hunger works where force would not. Ian throws the food to lure the monster away, and the gatekeeper charges after it in a single greedy rush. The second the path clears, Ian drops the heavy sword onto the hidden door and smashes it open with the weapon's sheer weight. He dives into the basement at once, choosing the unknown below over the enraged monster behind him. At the bottom, Ian finds more than he dared hope for, a hidden display holding the first king's relics in full, not one item but a complete set. The sight confirms Ian's research, but it creates a new problem immediately, because he is still only allowed to leave the trial with one chosen item. Before he can think it through, the gatekeeper's furious howl shakes the basement, and warns Ian that he has only seconds left. With no time to weigh every option, Ian snatches one relic from the first king's set and prepares to get out before the beast reaches him. Inside Pandemonium, Ian finally makes his choice and grabs the cloak that always appeared beside the first king in old records. The cloak immediately wraps around him, shrinks to fit his small body, and reveals that it was much more than ordinary clothing. Ian tests the cloak at once and realizes it gives off warmth and shrugs off his blade, making it far better than ordinary clothing. He still regrets leaving the other treasures behind, but the armoire rejects his touch and refuses to enter the small subspace ring. Before he can think longer, the entrance behind him is smashed open and the enraged three-headed hound charges into the chamber. Ian braces for a desperate fight, because the monster now stands between him and the only path out. Then Ian's gamble pays off when the ancient monster suddenly flinches away from his blade instead of rushing him. He realizes the sword's starstone metal is exactly what this old gatekeeper fears, so he starts using the blade like a torch to hurt it back. For a long, grinding moment, child and monster circle each other until Ian almost reaches the exit. Just before Ian slips out, the hound smashes the stairs with its tail and destroys his easy escape route. The hound lunges for the opening, and Ian manages to cut its tail, but the force of the clash sends his sword spinning across the chamber. Before Ian can recover the blade, the hound switches tactics and floods the chamber with deadly fire. Ian shields himself with the cloak and is stunned when the flames fail to touch anything the fabric covers. As both Ian and the beast freeze at that result, the lost sword suddenly begins to glow where it struck the relic cabinet. That light triggers the first king's relics, and the armor unleashes chains of light that lock the gatekeeper in place. Ian snatches his sword back, but with the stairs gone he still has no safe way out. Then the cloak answers him again, kicking up wind and lifting his body into the air as if it understands his will. Ian flies up through the opening and escapes the pit while the furious hound screams below him. Even while escaping, Ian can't shake the feeling that the relics and the cloak are somehow connected to him, and that he will get another chance at them. That hope turns ugly when the hound breaks free, smashes the armoire, and literally devours the remaining relics of the first king. Ian rushes for the door, but the monster leaps ahead of him and blocks the only exit from Pandemonium. Cornered again, Ian draws on the power of faith and commits himself to one rule: his steps will never stop. He meets the hound head-on, and at the instant they collide a new sentence blazes across his sword like an answer. Back in the ceremony hall, the nobles start muttering that Ian must be dead because the trial should already be over. Most of the royal family quietly mocks his choice, but third Prince Louis is the only one who suspects something serious happened inside. When the chamberlain says it is time to close the trial, King Eloin finally sheathes the Sword of Dawn and ends the wait. Duke Garcia swallows his protest and starts thinking Ian may already be a lost card. Then the hall jolts with a violent quake, and everyone snaps back toward the trial entrance. Ian suddenly crashes out alive, blood at his mouth and a stained sword in hand, stunning the entire hall. The others still can't believe he brought back anything worthwhile, but Louis takes one look and says Ian definitely got something good. When the chamberlain runs toward him, Ian shouts for everyone to move because the thing chasing him is still coming. A heartbeat later, the wounded three-headed hound bursts out of the gate and throws the hall into panic. The royals instantly understand what this means. Ian was fighting one of the first king's contracted gatekeepers and actually injured it. King Eloin is the only one who looks pleased, because he knows the Sword of Dawn was supposed to keep these monsters obedient. When the berserk hound even lunges at the king, Eloin sidesteps it and gives a simple order that freezes the room: kill it. That command lights a fire under the princes and princesses, who all draw weapons and start eyeing the monster as a prize. Duke Garcia tries to cut through the chaos by ordering the knights to pull Ian to safety first. King Eloin slams his sword down and stops everyone cold, refusing to let anyone interfere. Eloin declares that the trial is not over and that whoever brought the monster out must deal with it personally. Ian catches the opening instantly and asks to offer the hound's head to the king while claiming everything else for himself. The king instantly sees Ian's real aim, realizes he wants whatever is still inside the monster, and amusedly gives him permission. The other royals are furious, because this freak accident could have turned into a treasure haul beyond anything the trial normally allows. As Ian steps toward the beast again, the second princess mocks him for not asking for help, and Louis coldly shames her for forgetting what it means to be a Kai-Stein. Ian ignores the shouting and keeps moving, because faith will vanish the moment he betrays its vow and stops advancing. The knights beg him to fall back, but Ian knows the cloak blocks the hound's claws and fire, making this his one real chance to win. Step by step, Ian closes the distance, and finally drives his sword deep through the monster's belly. The gatekeeper crashes to the floor, and the entire ceremony hall falls into shocked silence around the child who brought it down. That one victory changes the room, and the nobles start seeing Ian as a real force in the coming succession fight. Duke Garcia notices that other powerful eyes have already turned toward Ian and decides he needs to move before rivals do. Ian, meanwhile, pushes through his exhaustion and crawls straight to the split stomach, because this is the moment he came for. But when he searches inside, the relics are gone, and for once Ian looks genuinely devastated. Then a strange red orb rises from the hound's body, and Ian realizes no one else in the hall can even see it. When Ian reaches for the orb, it is sucked straight into the small subspace ring as if the ring recognizes its owner. At that point King Eloin stands and abruptly declares the legitimation ceremony finished. Ian protests that the court has not even inspected what he brought, but the king coolly points out that the answer has been in front of them the whole time. Only now does the hall truly notice the cloak on Ian, restored neatly around his body and moving with a faint life of its own. The nobles and royal siblings scoff at Ian for bringing a cloak instead of a sword, but the room goes still when they notice the king smiling. With obvious pride, King Eloin formally recognizes Ian as the seventh prince at last. But the moment should have been sealed there. The first princess steps forward and demands one more judgment before anyone can celebrate. She insists Ian still has to prove the cloak's value against the other treasures brought from the trial, dragging the room back into open competition. Right in the middle of the legitimation ceremony, the first princess suddenly steps forward and begs King Eloin to judge which royal candidate truly brought the best treasure. The king allows her to speak, but he coldly warns that she will be punished not just for ruining the sacred mood, but also for insulting her youngest brother. Holding her composure, the first princess argues that a royal trial is not finished until the items are evaluated, so Ian's legitimation should not end without ranking everyone fairly. She pushes harder, saying Ian already received special treatment, and that the other heirs are being slighted by the king's obvious favor. Then she says the real danger out loud. If the nobles mistake the king's smile for a sign of succession, Ian could be seen as the chosen heir already. She dismisses Ian's trial as little more than observation, claiming he only brought back an item instead of proving himself in real combat like the others. King Eloin agrees just enough to bait everyone, saying it would be too harsh because proving Ian's worth might actually put the youngest at a disadvantage. That single comment flips the mood, and the other royals suddenly wonder if Ian's cloak is not some perfect answer after all, but maybe just a strange child's relic with little practical value. Sensing an opening, the other heirs kneel beside the first princess and demand a proper ranking, while their allied nobles back them up so Ian will not walk away looking favored. Instead of arguing, the king curtly tells them to stay still and summons the scholar to examine Ian's cloak. The moment the scholar reaches for it, Ian's cloak suddenly expands back to its true size and ancient markings appear across the fabric. The hall explodes when they recognize the crest of the first king and realize Ian brought back one of Keistein's most valuable relics. With the first king's relic revealed, people start declaring Ian the obvious number one, and most of the royal siblings go rigid with disbelief. But the first princess is smiling instead of panicking, and that is when the others realize she probably saw through the king's trick from the start. She immediately twists the reveal to her advantage, arguing that even if Ian's relic has unmatched history, a weak child with no maternal backing cannot safely hold such a dangerous claim to the throne. The royals who followed her lead finally understand they were used, because the king was testing whether they could recognize the first king's relic and read his hidden intent. The first princess openly mocks the others, saying any heir who cannot even recognize an ancient relic has no right to discuss succession. Then she lands her real argument. The cloak may be priceless history, but it is still only a cloak, while she and the others brought weapons and tools that could directly strengthen the kingdom. When the king asks what she really wants, she finally says it plainly and demands that the banned battle of ranking be reopened on the spot. The nobles go cold because the battle of ranking is not a simple contest but the old succession bloodbath where royals once died trying to seize each other's power. Even with the hall shaken, King Eloin accepts immediately and revives the battle of ranking without hesitation. He goes further and officially recognizes Ian as the seventh prince, orders his existence announced to the kingdom and foreign nations, and includes him in the coming struggle for the throne. Most of the court looks at Ian like a doomed child being thrown into a massacre, but Ian himself answers the whole mess with a faint, unreadable smirk. After the ceremony, the fourth prince catches up to the first princess in the corridor and demands to know if she drove events this far on purpose. He warns that the battle of ranking means the royals will start trying to kill each other, and this cannot possibly be a harmless move. The first princess brushes him off and coolly claims she has no intention of killing them, even though her real target is clearly Ian. Inside her own thoughts, she measures the field coldly. The second prince is crippled, the third prince is her biggest obstacle, and if she can kill or maim him, the throne could become hers. Then the second princess quietly offers herself as an ally and asks if the first princess plans to start by eliminating Ian. The first princess promises to handle everything, already planning to use Nathan's newly allied family and Ian's own sword teacher as the perfect card to kill him. Later, Ian returns to his temporary room, and Galen and Nathan gently tell him that his proper assigned quarters will be ready tomorrow. Once they leave, Ian drops onto the bed, finally alone with the pain from the hound fight and the backlash from using faith. Even in that miserable condition, his mind goes straight to the new battle of ranking and the first princess's obvious plan to use it to kill him. Still, the first king's cloak is quietly helping him, and Ian notices a faint recovery effect whenever he keeps it wrapped around his body. More importantly, Ian realizes nobody else knows what changed inside him after the trial, because a new line of faith has formed beside the one already engraved in his heart. Treating it as a reward for defeating the gatekeeper, Ian steadies himself and remembers that the king also granted him special permission for one more item. At the very end, Ian slowly pulls out the small subspace ring, ready to examine the next advantage he carried back from the trial. Alone in his guest room, Ian pulls out the small subspace ring because he is sure the red orb from the dead gatekeeper got absorbed into it. The moment he tries to open the ring, a force zaps his hand away and unseen voices warn that he is not ready to claim everything inside. Ian realizes the voices belong to the first king's relics that the hound swallowed, and his cloak shines as if greeting its missing companions. The relics reject any trick and remind him there is only one proper reward, which puts Ian on edge because he needs more power before the princes turn on him. He thinks through the danger ahead, remembering that his brothers each have monstrous talent, royal swords, and ancient tools, so one lucky win over the second prince will not save him twice. Then the relics offer him a gamble. If he can identify which of them truly want to follow him, they will all remain as his strength. With no hint except luck, Ian studies the choices and weighs what he needs most to survive the coming battle of ranking. He rejects the helmet because some enemies would cut through his whole body anyway, and he weighs the armor and shield as safer answers against direct attacks. In the end, Ian quietly settles on the shoes because mobility relics from the old age were famous for impossible movement techniques. When the relics ask for his choice, Ian lies and says he wants the armor, baiting them into thinking he guessed wrong. At the last second he snatches out the shoes instead, revealing that he was tricking them all along. Ian explains that the cloak's reactions gave him a clue, and the shoes shrink neatly to his size as the relics complain that he is too cunning. He wins the gamble, but before he can test the relic, exhaustion from using faith crushes him and he passes out hugging the shoes. The next morning, palace attendants stare in disbelief as the newly recognized prince eats with perfect royal manners and not a sound. While the maids gush over how handsome he is, Ian's attention snaps to a familiar scented candle in the corner, and his mood turns wary. Seeing the same strange smell here that he noticed in his room, Ian decides he needs to investigate but still does not trust ordinary attendants. The one attendant Ian does trust enough to use arrives next, Karen, carrying the recovery pills Ian asked him to fetch from the royal treasury. Ian needles Karen on purpose by asking if he tasted the medicine and why a nobleman's doing servant work himself. Ian keeps pushing by complaining about dust in the bowl, and Heinley rushes in only to end up taking it away to wash under Ian's orders. Once Heinley is gone, Ian drops the act and quietly asks Karen how the nobles are reacting to his explosive debut. Karen warns that the aristocrats are panicking and rearranging their factions around the battle of ranking because Ian's performance shook the whole court. Ian immediately gives Karen another secret task and hands him the suspicious scented candle to trace where it came from. Karen grumbles at being ordered around, but he still takes the job and boasts he can solve in a week what veteran informants need a year to uncover. As Ian leaves the dining room, a servant announces that his new residence is ready and names the shocking destination, Crystal Palace. Ian freezes because Crystal Palace was King Eloin's own prince residence, a place that all but points at the next successor. Karen uses the shock of the Crystal Palace news to warn that Ian is in real danger now and needs noble backing before the court moves over the second prince's severed arm. Ian shrugs off the pressure and says he should be training. Then Karen reveals Nathan was urgently called away by Marquis Adels without even informing him. That leaves Ian more uneasy, because if the nobles are already moving against him, he needs support from Lavalter or someone else powerful before the second prince affair is used to crush him. At the same time in the Royal First Night Order office, Duke Lavalter reads 2 open letters, one from Ian and one from the second prince, and the room goes cold with his anger. Even Fiacin cannot tell which letter set him off, and Duke Lavalter coldly orders his son to follow instructions from now on. Before moving his forces, Duke Lavalter tears one of the letters to pieces. On the way to his new residence, Ian sorts through the kingdom's power blocks and decides Garcia is the easiest help to get, but far too dangerous to trust fully. He ends up judging Lavalter the safer gamble, because the Duke is fair and may finally stop backing the second prince after this mess. Then the servant brings him to Crystal Palace, and Ian looks up at the elegant glass and crystal residence in open satisfaction. He can hardly believe this place is his, because even the crown prince never received a residence loaded with that much succession symbolism. That calm breaks when the second princess arrives furious and demands to know who ignored her order to put Ian in Opal Palace instead. She tears into the servants for bypassing her authority over palace arrangements, treating Ian's placement here as a direct challenge to her control. Then she turns to Ian with a flawless smile, praising his ceremony performance while smoothing over the insult she is about to make. Without dropping the sweet tone, she orders the servants to take Ian back and move him to the lesser palace she chose for him. Ian steps in front of the servants and quietly asks what right she has to overturn this decision. The second princess answers like she is teaching a child, saying she acts for the queen and warning that whoever made this mistake deserves harsh punishment. Before she can press further, the third prince appears and bluntly says that if anyone should be punished, it would be the queen herself. He calmly reveals that the queen approved this exact arrangement, so the second princess cannot dismiss Ian without defying her own side. Realizing the queen has betrayed her expectations, the second princess bites back her anger and storms off toward the first princess's side of the palace instead. With the path clear, the third prince casually warns Ian not to underestimate the noble factions because they are already hunting for a way to crush him. He specifically tells Ian to rope in Lavalter or at least Garcia, making it obvious he knows the political counterattack is already underway. As he leaves, the third prince remembers hearing that Duke Lavalter personally tore up the second prince's plea for help, which makes Ian's odds suddenly look less hopeless. Once he is gone, a female assassin dressed like the Annex intruder emerges from the shadows and reports Ian's Crystal Palace assignment through a crystal ball. The voice in the crystal ball is the second prince, and he grows even more anxious when he hears that the third prince seems to be backing Ian. The second prince asks desperately about Lavalter's silence, and when the assassin says the Duke moved the First Night Order himself, he convinces himself that his father-in-law is still acting for him. He changes the order on the spot and tells her to stop following the third prince and watch Ian instead, because Ian must be dealt with before founding day. Before she can slip away, Galen snaps out of hiding, grabs the assassin from behind in one ghost-fast move, and catches her with the crystal ball still in her hand. Ian looks at the captured spy and calmly admits he expected someone to be watching him already. Later at the training ground, Ian spots the same suspicious scented candle again and realizes the pattern reaches even here. A physician already confirmed the scent is not harming him now, and Ian suspects Faith and the First King's cloak are protecting him from whatever this is. Even so, he snuffs the candle out and quietly keeps it as evidence for Karen's investigation. With Nathan gone, Ian accepts that Galen will have to train him, because everyone around him is now moving like his death before adulthood is expected. Ian also worries that the coming founding day and the shifting future could pull even more hidden princes into the succession war. Before training begins, a group of royal knights arrives claiming the first princess sent them to prepare Ian for the competition and the battle of ranking. Ian flatly refuses them and says Galen is his chosen teacher, making it clear he does not trust the first princess's sudden kindness at all. The knights push back by belittling Galen and insist that the first princess's personally ordered training would help Ian more. Then a second group enters in blue uniforms and cuts them off, announcing that Duke Lavalter sent the first knight order to help train Ian instead. The first princess quietly orders her escort knight Roydern to provoke the newly recognized seventh prince under the excuse of sword training. She makes her reasoning clear too: Ian's support is still shallow, and if he explodes too easily, the palace can paint him as unstable. Roydern worries this could hurt her reputation, but she brushes that off and hints that the slightest provocation should be enough to set Ian off. That muttered confidence about a drug leaves Roydern uneasy, but he still bows and goes to carry out the order. At the training ground, Roydern politely needles Ian and targets Galen too, hoping the insult will finally make the young prince snap. Before Roydern can corner him, a group of Lavalter's knights cuts in and says Duke Lavalter sent them to teach Ian proper swordsmanship as the minimum fairness in the succession fight. Roydern tries to claim the first princess's knights will handle Ian, but Lavalter's side openly mocks the idea of learning from enemy knights. When Roydern talks down to Ian, Lavalter's men immediately accuse him of disrespecting a prince and warn that both the king and Duke Lavalter will hear about it. Ian does not take the bait at all and flatly says Galen will handle his training, so everyone else can leave. Lavalter's men push back and say their special training would be far better than Galen's, and Ian instantly turns that arrogance against them. He reminds them Duke Lavalter himself acknowledges Galen as one of the third great knights, so insulting Galen in front of Ian sounds like insulting both the Duke and the Prince. The knights panic and ask Galen if he really swore allegiance to Ian, because that single answer changes the whole balance around the seventh prince. Galen finally draws his sword and steps forward, making it clear he will not tolerate anyone disrespecting his lord again. Even the other knights freeze under Galen's pressure, because everyone knows his talent is real no matter what line of origin he came from. Then Ian casually twists the whole standoff by asking for the strongest knight among them to train him. When nobody answers fast enough, Ian dryly suggests they fight each other and let the winner take charge of him. The bait works instantly, and the rival knights start squaring up for a pointless clash right in front of him. Instead of staying for the show, Ian turns to leave with Galen, completely wrecking Roydern's attempt to provoke him. When they call after him, Ian says if he wants the strongest teacher, he might as well go straight to Duke Lavalter because none of these men can compare. He finishes by telling them to report back to the first princess that the knights she sent were all useless. Back in her room, the first princess hears the mission failed and is so angry she nearly crushes the calm mask she usually wears. Roydern insists Ian stayed calm, showed no obvious instability, and even Galen would have noticed if the prince's swordsmanship was flawed. That makes the first princess realize something went wrong with the setup in Ian's room, and she decides to go see her mother herself. Before she can leave, the second princess bursts in with urgent news that the queen is already with Ian. Meanwhile, on the way to the First Knight Order headquarters, Ian is stopped by Karen racing in with a major discovery about the strange candle. Karen pulls Ian aside and reveals the scented candle is a taboo item in Kaistine because it can ruin a person's swordsmanship. He adds that the candle also blurs concentration, causes fatigue, and makes the victim irritable, which hits Ian like a brutal answer from his past. Ian immediately wonders if this is why he could never properly learn swordsmanship before, even though everyone told him he simply lacked talent. Karen explains why no one else noticed. The candle barely works on skilled adults, so among the palace attendants the real target was always Ian alone. Then Karen drops the stranger twist. Someone he knows says the same curse can be turned into a blessing. When Ian presses him, Karen starts bargaining shamelessly for time off before he will explain anything. Ian instantly crushes the bluff by cutting the offer down and threatening to ask Duke Garcia instead. Defeated, Karen admits the lead came from a shady back-alley merchant from the Kingdom of Magicians and from ancient sorcery medicine that became forbidden long ago. According to that story, if someone uses the proper method, the candle can awaken hidden talent instead of suppressing it. The problem is that the wizards who knew how to do it are gone, and the only remaining workaround is an expensive object still floating around the back alley. Karen asks Ian for money to buy it, but Ian flatly says he cannot casually touch royal funds during the succession war and will not leave that kind of record behind. Karen tries to act broke, but Ian casually exposes that he already knows Karen has gambling profits hidden away. As Karen complains, Ian's attention shifts to the necklace the third prince gave him, because it has already been reacting strangely around the candle. That makes Ian suspect the third prince may have known exactly what this curse was and may have handed him the very tool needed to reverse it. Ian decides he needs to test that idea quietly in secret, away from everyone else. For now, he takes the scented candle from Karen and tells him to judge his reward by how useful he proves to be. Ian also says he wants to meet the shady merchant personally, because now he is hunting the person who may have stolen his talent in the first place. In his mind, the suspect list narrows fast to someone high enough to place candles in every palace room he used, with the first princess at the top of it. He then asks Galen about the captured assassin, and Galen reports she wore a royal servant uniform, knew about the candle, and had been assigned to Ian's new palace quarters. That fits Ian's suspicion perfectly and ties the first princess even more tightly to what happened. Galen goes further and says the second prince is almost back in the capital, and his people may try to trap Ian through Lavalter and the nobles for revenge. The report gets worse when Galen reveals the second prince even planted a spy on the first princess and the queen, proving just how deep his reach already runs inside the palace. Ian decides he cannot let the second prince box him in on palace ground, and that makes his meeting with Duke Lavalter even more important. Karen keeps tagging along to see what Ian will do with Duke Lavalter, and Ian lets him follow after taking the scented candle for himself. At the First Night Order headquarters, Lavalter's guards block only Karen and explain they were ordered not to admit Garcia family men. Ian leaves the furious Karen outside with a sweetly innocent excuse and walks in with Galen to meet Duke Lavalter. Duke Lavalter receives Ian with full respect, making it clear the seventh prince is no longer being treated like a stray child. Elsewhere in the royal palace, hostile nobles crowd the king and protest his decision to assign the Crystal Palace to Ian. They argue that the Crystal Palace is too meaningful to hand to a boy who just crippled the second prince and upended the order of succession. King Eloin only smiles and says that is exactly why Ian deserves it, because a child who beat one of his top successors has earned that level of recognition. The nobles realize the king's sudden firmness is dangerous, because if Ian keeps receiving royal backing, their own chosen heirs lose room to move. So the court turns to Marquis Adels, the administrative heavyweight backing the first princess, hoping he can force the king to reconsider. Adels understands they should retreat for now, but with neither Garcia nor Lavalter in the room, he sees this as the one opening he may get. He steps forward and frames his objection as concern for Lavalter's honor, since the duke's family is tied to the now-named second prince. When that still does not move the king, Adels plays his real card and brings up Foundation Day, when foreign envoys and dignitaries will flood the palace in 1 month. He argues that whoever holds the Crystal Palace must handle those guests, so Ian should be tested first on the knowledge and grace expected of that role. Behind the polite wording, Adels is really setting a trap that would bury Ian in non-stop royal education and leave him exposed to every enemy moving against him. Then he sweetens the challenge by promising that if Ian passes, the court will recognize him as owner of the Crystal Palace and overlook his attack on the second prince. King Eloin accepts the proposal on the spot, turning the dispute into an irreversible political bet that will decide whether Ian can truly hold the Crystal Palace. In the Queen's palace, the first princess rushes in furious about Crystal Palace, but the Queen instantly shuts her down and forces her to greet her properly first. After forcing herself through the formal greeting, the first princess demands to know why the Queen handed the heir's palace to the youngest prince. The Queen answers with brutal calm that Ian is the child who cut off her strongest son's arm, so of course she gave the palace to the one with a brighter future. When the princess tries to excuse her brother as careless, the Queen turns even colder and warns that someone chasing the throne cannot afford that kind of weakness. The Queen refuses to revisit the Crystal Palace decision and warns her daughter that one mistake can cost everything if Ian wins the battle of ranking again. Leaving the room with her pride shredded, the first princess swears with savage eyes that she will never let that happen. Outside, Nathan approaches her, and the angry princess quickly tests whether the man rumored to be close to Galen has finally chosen a side. Nathan answers that if she calls, he will come running, quietly signaling that he is willing to work with the first princess. At Lavalter's place, Ian is greeted by Phaeson, the duke's smiling eldest son, who says another high-ranked guest has already come by today. Phaeson claims Duke Lavalter just left on patrol because of bandits near the capital, and Ian immediately smells that excuse as nonsense. Using faith, Ian senses a huge powerful presence hiding in the next room and realizes Lavalter is avoiding him in person. Ian plays along and turns to leave, saying there is no reason to stay if the Duke is not here. That bluff works immediately, and Phaeson stops him because he knows Ian came over the letter about the second prince's life and its price. When Phaeson offers to talk in the Duke's place, Ian coldly asks whether he can swear on his knightly oath that Lavalter will honor what he promises. Ian twists the meaning of his own letter and says the secret is for the sake of Lavalter's only daughter, not just a threat against the family. The hidden Duke cannot stay put after that, and he smashes through the wall to demand whether Ian can take responsibility for those words. Ian stays calm under the Duke's killing pressure and says Lavalter should first think about breaking his daughter's engagement to the second prince. As his first proof, Ian says the second prince has been turning people linked to Lavalter into assassins and using them against him. He backs that accusation with hard evidence: poison, a shattered orb, and a blood-stained Lavalter Knight seal taken from the assassin who targeted him. That evidence makes Lavalter remember missing outside recruits and realize the second prince really could have poisoned his house from the edges. When Lavalter asks for the second secret, Ian refuses to say it until the Duke accepts his condition. Lavalter assumes Ian wants a Duke's backing in the succession war, but Ian instead pushes for an oath before any deal is made. The room freezes when Ian asks if the Duke himself can use his oath, turning a political talk into a deadly personal commitment. Lavalter is actually intrigued enough to accept, but Phaeson urgently steps in to protect his father from risking the family's head on an unknown demand. Phaeson offers his own knightly oath instead, promising that if Ian's request does not betray his loyalty or family honor, he will fulfill it. Once the oath takes hold, Ian reveals his price, and both father and son flinch at the absurdity of it. Ian asks for Phaeson himself as his squire, a demand so outrageous it sounds like he is asking Levalter's heir to become his personal errand knight. Phaeson scrambles to offer other knights instead, but Ian picked him on purpose because he wants someone who can guard him and move through dangerous politics. Ian sweetens the demand by pointing out that an escort knight can move around Garcia's sphere naturally, which is exactly the kind of spy Levalter wants planted there. Only after that hook lands does Levalter demand the truth about his daughter, and Ian finally drops the real bomb about the second prince. Ian says the second prince has a filthy, violent sexual preference, and the revelation hits both Levalters like a physical blow. He warns them to search a hidden room in the far corner of the second prince's palace, because that is where the truth about the fiancé's danger will be waiting. Father and son exchange a silent look and realize that if Ian is right, they have to stop the marriage before Levalter's daughter is handed to a monster. Even so, Levalter pushes back that a vague warning is not enough to trade away his heir, so Ian cuts the term down to 1 year and leaves the final choice to Phaeson. That compromise gives Levalter enough room to accept, especially because he already wants eyes inside Garcia's camp. Bound by his oath, Phaeson formally swears that from this moment on he will follow Ian as the seventh prince. Ian tells him he cannot come immediately because he still has to resign from the First Knight Order, but the deal is done and Ian leaves with a major new piece on the board. Back at Crystal Palace, Ian lights the suspicious scented candle, puts on the third prince's necklace, and keeps the first king's white cloak around himself just in case this is a trap. As the candle burns, the necklace starts glowing while the cloak stays still, confirming that something is reacting but not attacking him outright. Then a strange wave hits Ian, and he trembles as if an empty part of his soul is finally being filled and his body is waking up. Whatever the candle was meant to give him finishes its job and disappears the moment Ian accepts the result. Before he can test the change further, Heinley barges in exhausted with a stack of books from the king. Heinley explains that the nobles want to test whether Ian deserves to own Crystal Palace, so now he has to study for a qualification exam. Ian's mood sours fast, and when Heinley starts acting like a teacher again, Ian coldly puts him to work cleaning under the bed instead. Once Heinley storms off for cleaning tools, Ian sits with the insult of the test and starts thinking that if they want him examined, he should get something back for passing. A servant then brings a letter from Karen saying the merchant meeting is arranged for tonight, and Ian is pleased that part of his plan is moving. Ian reads the letter at once, confirms the merchant wants to see him tonight, and smiles at Karen's clean work. Before he can act on that, another servant arrives with a royal summons, so Ian burns Karen's letter and heads for the main palace instead. Ian arrives at the royal conference room, a place he never used to be allowed into, and realizes he is being called into real power now. The moment he steps inside, the room falls silent under the announcement of the new star of Kaistine, and every noble eye turns toward him. King Eloin tells Ian they can proceed now and reveals that the real topic is choosing a teacher for the education and exam tied to Crystal Palace. The king explains that the nobles push this agenda as a matter of proper qualifications, but he will let Ian decide among the many people competing to teach him. Ian instantly flips the whole setup by saying the teachers can be judged one by one, but if he is being forced to take a test for his own palace, he wants a reward for passing it. In the royal audience hall, Ian coolly argues that Crystal Palace is already his, so if the court insists on a test, he deserves a proper reward for taking it. Ian presses the trap even harder, saying the king would only be testing the master of a palace the king already gave him, and the nobles immediately realize that argument makes their objections sound disloyal. Before the nobles can recover, Ian turns straight to King Eloin and asks if he agrees, turning the whole room into a quiet stare-down between father and son. Amused, the king says he will create a reason for the test and pulls off a jeweled dragon ring for everyone to see. King Eloin declares the wager. If Ian passes, he gets the ring, but if he fails, he must give up Crystal Palace. Ian instantly recognizes the ring as the seal of the guardian dragon, the same treasure that protected the first princess in his previous life, and he realizes its authority is impressive but useless to him right now. The nobles panic and protest that the ring is too important to risk, which only confirms how valuable it is. Then Ian shocks the room by refusing the ring outright and asking for something else instead. Ian asked for the barren northern royal land near Duke Levalter's territory, choosing Helgaia instead of a treasure everyone else would have grabbed instantly. King Eloin has to ask what land Ian even means, and a chamberlain quietly identifies it as Helgaia, a large but barren stretch beside the forest of monsters. To the king, Helgaia is nothing but cursed wasteland, so he assumes Ian is just grabbing the first territory he can call his own. The nobles quickly approve the idea, praising Helgaia as a suitable little territory for the newly acknowledged seventh prince while privately enjoying what they think is his mistake. The king accepts the new terms. If Ian passes, Helgaia is his, and if he fails, Crystal Palace is gone. Ian accepts at once, because he knows Helgaia hides something important that Adele stole in his previous life, and this time he means to claim it first. King Eloin locks in the bargain and orders Ian to face the test in 1 month at the grand banquet, a deadline that leaves him little time before the coming succession fight. With business finished, Ian bows out cleanly and leaves the hall without arguing any further. Once Ian is gone, the nobles assume the king must be disappointed that the boy rejected such a loaded favor for a useless patch of land. Instead, King Eloin suddenly bursts out laughing, delighted that someone finally dared come at him so boldly. The king privately admits he likes Ian's nerve, even if he still plans to investigate Helgaia because the boy asked for it too confidently to be random. Then King Eloin turns cold again and warns the nobles that if he has put royal land on the line for Ian's challenge, they should be staking their own valuables too. Pressed by the king, the nobles scramble to add family treasures, troops, and jewelry to the wager, turning Ian's test into a much larger game. Among the great nobles, Marquis Adele stays calm and quietly decides the test must be crushed with full force. Adele orders his side to prepare thoroughly and warns that the youngest prince is not someone they can dismiss as just a child anymore. When the king directly asks what Adele will risk, the Marquis smoothly offers his family's famous summer villa if Ian passes. Outside the main palace, Galen greets Ian and worries that provoking the nobles has just made the coming test much more dangerous. Ian tells him not to worry, because this is a test he already survived once in his past life and he trusts his own knowledge completely. Inwardly, Ian recalls that he already endured an even harsher version of this exam under brutal pressure, so the nobles' tricks do not scare him. Galen still warns that the examiner will be Marquis Adel's eldest son, a notorious genius from the Treasury Department, so the test will not be simple. But Ian's real concern is elsewhere, because he needs to leave the castle tonight to meet a backstreet merchant tied to Karen's arrangements. Galen says he already informed the royal attendants, but formal permission for a prince to leave will take time they do not have. With the merchant refusing to wait past tonight, Ian decides the clean option is gone and starts thinking about sneaking out instead. Galen immediately objects, knowing that if a newly recognized prince is caught sneaking out, it could become another political problem. Before they can settle it, a familiar voice cuts in and says Ian seems to be in a difficult situation. Ian looks up in surprise and finds the third prince waiting there, handsome and relaxed like he has arrived at exactly the right moment. At the same time in Ruby Palace, the second prince returns and immediately asks about the thing he ordered. The attendants bring in a craftsman carrying a huge iron prosthetic arm, a magic tool meant to replace the arm Ian cut off. But the replacement is not ready for real use, and the second prince already knows he will need Duke Lavalter's level of skill to make it work. When he asks where Lavalter is, the attendants report that the first night order is already moving, and the prince takes that as perfect preparation for revenge. Laughing darkly, the second prince orders Duke Lavalter brought to him at once, already savoring the revenge he plans to take on Ian. Ian is startled to find the third prince waiting for him right outside the heavily guarded main palace, smiling like he belongs anywhere he wants. The third prince cheerfully offers to sneak Ian out of the castle, but Ian refuses to trust that kindness without knowing what he wants. When Ian demands a real reason, the third prince cheerfully says he wants to help his cute little brother and flatly excludes the other princes from that affection. Ian reluctantly agrees to accept the help, expecting some kind of pass, but the third prince reacts like Ian has completely misunderstood the plan. The third prince leads Ian and Galen deep into a deserted thicket at the edge of the royal castle, and Ian immediately wonders if he just walked into an assassination attempt. Instead of attacking, the third prince parts the bushes and proudly reveals his secret route out of the palace, a tiny hidden dog hole. Ian is dumbfounded, and Galen instantly points out the real problem. Ian might fit, but Galen's broad frame definitely will not. The third prince smoothly suggests that this means only he and Ian should go, which makes Ian even more suspicious that Galen was the obstacle he wanted to remove. Just as Ian weighs whether this prince can be trusted at all, the faith inside his body stirs warmly toward the third prince like it recognizes someone precious. That strange reaction tips the balance, and Ian tells Galen he will go with the third prince tonight after all. Ian calms Galen by saying this has to be done tonight, and he quietly relies on his sword, floating cloak, and new shoes if the trip turns dangerous. Before leaving, Ian orders Galen to return to the Crystal Palace and check on Nathan, because Nathan's long silence inside the palace already feels wrong. The third prince casually says Nathan is probably at the first princess's palace, and with that small lead, Ian finally ducks into the hidden tunnel. Ian crawls out expecting the other side of the wall, but the hidden route spits him into a slum several kilometers away from the royal castle. The dog hole vanishes right behind them, and Ian's shock turns into pure killing intent because this now looks exactly like a trap. The third prince tells Ian to step close again, and the hidden opening instantly reappears in the wall. The third prince explains this is an ancient royal-only backdoor tied to bloodline, and Ian immediately realizes how insanely useful this secret route could be. Ian is still reeling over the absurdity of ancient kings making a royal dog hole when a whistle blows and a mob suddenly charges and shouting for the blue-haired thief. The pursuers accuse the third prince of robbing a gambling house and stealing auction goods, and Ian can only stare because his guide has clearly been causing chaos out here. The third prince breezily claims he was only out getting fresh air, as if that explains why half the underworld wants him dead. Ian decides this mess might at least show him the famous sword genius in action, but the ambush gets nastier when crossbows suddenly appear from the windows. A bolt streaks straight for Ian's head, and his white cloak moves on its own to snatch the shot out of the air. Ian instantly understands that the first king's cloak has revealed another hidden effect, an arrow-blocking defense he never knew it had. With ranged attacks neutralized, Ian launches himself upward using the first king's shoes and starts fighting through the air. He sweeps past the windows and cuts apart bows and crossbows instead of people, turning the ambush's high ground into useless scrap. The gang quickly realizes they cannot pin down a boy who can fly and shrug off arrows, and their attack starts collapsing into panic. While Ian strips the mob of its weapons with brutal efficiency, the third prince watches closely and realizes Ian is hiding far more than the palace saw. The ambushers finally break and run, leaving the alley to two princes who have both been measuring each other's hidden strength the whole time. Ian decides he has seen enough and bluntly says he would be much safer alone than walking around this district with the third prince. Before Ian leaves, the third prince gives one serious warning. The one-armed second prince has gone to the First Night Order looking for revenge. After Ian disappears into the alleys, strange smoke rises behind the third prince, and his hidden shadow servant reports that some of the attackers were not local thugs at all. The third prince casually guesses outside forces are using this mess to keep him in check, then decides to follow Ian anyway because his youngest brother keeps uncovering things too valuable to ignore. When the shadow servant offers to kill Ian now, the third prince's warmth vanishes and he coldly orders his people never to touch his little brother. Just as the third prince moves to pursue Ian, a masked knight steps in to block him on behalf of the second prince. The knight delivers the second prince's threat, demanding to know why the third prince keeps helping that serf boy and warning that Lavalter's side is about to move openly. The third prince laughs right in his face, points out how desperate they have become over Ian, and asks whether this lone messenger really thinks he will leave alive. A silent scream cuts through the alley, signaling that the third prince has already answered the threat with violence. Elsewhere in the back alleys, Ian follows the path marked by Karen's letter and is impressed that the strange paper keeps guiding him exactly where he needs to go. The unusual paper reminds Ian of advanced goods from the Kingdom of Magicians, which makes Karen's connections feel even more suspicious. The route ends at a shabby place called Black Rose Tavern, and Ian goes inside without hesitation. Inside the tavern, Ian finds only rough mercenary types and a bartender, so he skips small talk and puts Karen's letter on the table instead. The bartender recognizes the letter at once and quietly leads Ian down into the basement. In the underground wine cellar, the bartender presses a hidden mechanism and reveals a secret passage beyond the wall. The setup turns ugly the moment Ian enters. Karen is tied to a chair, and the bartender whips a dagger to his throat. Across from the hostage sits a hostile woman, and the same strange feeling Ian sensed from the third prince suddenly pulses from her too. The woman orders Ian to drop his weapons if he wants to save Karen, openly calling him filthy Kai Stein blood. Karen desperately begs for help, but Ian only flashes a cold smile and says Karen's life has nothing to do with him. Instead of bargaining for the hostage, Ian cuts straight to the real issue and tells the stunned woman they should discuss their own business first. In the hidden room beneath Black Rose Tavern, Karen shouts for help, but Ian stays ice cold even with a blade at Karen's neck. An unseen woman sneers that Ian is a true Kai Stein and orders her man to kill him instead of using Karen as leverage. The bartender lunges in from off-panel, and Ian's white cloak suddenly swells outward to block the attack on its own. The cloak traps the attacker off-panel, and Ian finishes the fight by hurling his massive iron sword into the man's head as Karen watches in shock. Then the woman rushes him, and as Ian activates Faith he suddenly senses the same kind of power he once felt from the third prince. Faith warns Ian that the woman carries a fragment of the seven virtues, another power once subordinate to the first king's line. The woman suddenly freezes just short of him, realizing in panic that she physically cannot attack Ian. Ian takes the opening and knocks her down before she can understand what is happening. After cutting Karen free, Ian refuses to explain his power and quietly realizes the seven virtues may be unable to turn on each other. Ian gets straight back to business and tells the woman off-panel to finish the original deal if she wants anything from him. When the woman gives in, Ian makes Karen open the suspicious box for him instead of touching it himself. Inside is a necklace like the one from the third prince, but with a different gem and a price so outrageous Ian has to bluff through it. The woman explains that someone with talent can read it by touching the necklace's gem, which gives Ian exactly what he needs to test it. Ian asks about the scented candles, and the woman off-panel admits they are even rarer than the necklace and come through Secret Kingdom of Magicians channels. That answer confirms Ian's suspicion, so he drops the necklace deal and demands the source of the candle shipments instead. When she refuses to expose the supply route, Ian pivots again and demands the names of the buyers, especially the most recent ones. Ian's expression turns deadly serious because he is finally hunting the people who ruined his swordsmanship and denied him his rightful place. Cornered at sword point, the woman suddenly reveals her real trap. Poison gas has already filled the room. Karen starts choking almost at once, and the woman off-panel boasts that only she already took the antidote. But Ian stays perfectly fine and calmly pulls out the other necklace, shocking the woman when she realizes he already has one. Ian reveals that he already tested the necklace and stole her detoxification talent, which is why her poison cannot touch him. Desperate, the bound woman makes a sharp alarm call to summon her men from upstairs. A second later the basement door explodes open, and her bloodied subordinates come crashing down in a heap. Galen steps through the wreckage, proving Ian was never really alone. Ian smugly explains that he signaled Galen in advance, and the woman realizes this meeting was a trap from the start. With Galen holding her, Ian presses the real demand again and warns that he can tear apart her entire network if she lies. At last she gives Ian a lead. The second prince bought the scented candles through an agent, along with other notable buyers. Ian immediately orders Galen to trace every branch of the smuggling line and gather proof he can use later. Ian takes the necklace as compensation and forces the woman to hand over an antidote as well. Once Karen drinks the antidote, Ian dryly informs him that surviving today has put him deep in Ian's debt. Before leaving, Ian leans in and baits the woman with a lie, telling her to come find him if she wants answers about her sealed power. Elsewhere, the one-armed second prince fumes in the first night order drawing room after Duke Lavolter ignores his summons and leaves him waiting. When he tries to march inside himself, the guards bluntly stop him and call him an outsider, making the insult even worse. The prince asks for Fiason instead, only to hear that Fiason is busy leading training and still will not see him. Humiliated and suspicious, the second prince returns to the drawing room and decides he may have to move personally against Ian with the sword of domination. Then the king's chamberlain arrives with a sudden summons. Lavolter is with his majesty, the nobles are gathering, and the second prince must return to the palace with Ian at once. At the audience room entrance, the second prince is forced to wait again because the king ordered both princes to enter together. Servants report that Ian is nowhere in Crystal Palace, and the second prince takes it as another deliberate insult. The truth is that Ian slipped back through his own hidden royal passage, left Karen behind on purpose, and took a slow walk once he heard the second prince was waiting. Ian finally arrives with Fiason guiding him, then needles the second prince with a fake apology about being late because he was admiring the palace. The second prince is even more shaken when he sees Fiason personally escorting Ian after refusing to see him at all. Ian coolly invites his brother inside, twisting the insult back on him and enjoying the fact that Fiason's presence speaks for itself. But the moment they enter, the second prince feels the room's mood is wrong because the audience hall looks less like ceremony and more like a trial. King Eloin calls on Duke Lavolter to speak now that both princes are present, and the second prince still foolishly assumes this is about avenging his severed arm. Instead, Lavolter coldly asks the king to break his daughter's engagement to the second prince on the spot. The second prince erupts in panic, but Lavolter's eyes make it clear this is not a negotiation anymore. Then Fiason brings in a covered tray, and the second prince knows at a glance that whatever is under it came from his own palace. When the cloth is removed, the court is shown bloody pieces of a dead woman recovered from the second prince's residence. Fiason adds that the search uncovered a hidden torture basement and blood-soaked tools, destroying the prince's first attempts to brush it off as a misunderstanding. The dragged-in chamberlain breaks next and blurts out that the second prince secretly imprisoned servants, tortured them, and buried the dead in the palace grounds. With the hall in uproar, Lavolter says he can no longer leave such a beast as his daughter's fiancé. King Eloin does not dismiss the charges, but he warns that this evidence alone is still not enough to casually tear up a royal marriage pact. Lavolter answers by cashing in an old personal promise from the king and revealing that his daughter herself wants the engagement ended. He pushes further and argues that the promise was to marry his daughter into the king's bloodline, not necessarily to this specific prince. That possibility sends the nobles into a frenzy as they wonder which Prince Lavolter might back instead in the succession war. Trying to box the duke in, the king pointedly suggests other princes outside the main succession race instead. Then Lavolter drops the real bomb and formally asks for the seventh prince, Ian, to be paired with his daughter instead. The court explodes at once because Lavolter backing Ian would completely reshape the balance of power. And as the political shock spreads, Duke Garcia burns with anger, instantly reading Lavolter's request as an open challenge. The audience hall goes tense when Duke Garcia and Duke Lavolter stop treating their clash like a joke and openly glare at each other over Ian. The nobles grow even more nervous because these two enemy dukes never stand on the same issue unless something huge is at stake. While everyone else panics, Ian is actually smiling, and King Eloin notices that he seems to enjoy watching the power struggle unfold. The one-armed second prince finally explodes, protesting that the king is stealing both Lavolter and his fiancée from him. His faction jumps in to defend the engagement, but one cold look from the king shuts the room back down. Before the king can settle the match, Ian politely steps in and points out that this is still his engagement too. King Eloin asks if Ian is refusing the engagement, and the second prince tries to interrupt until the king cruelly mocks him for losing his hand. Ian says he is not rejecting Lavolter's daughter herself, but marrying anyone right now would make no sense because a prince in the ranking war could die at any time. That blunt logic catches Lavolter off guard, because Ian is calling himself the dangerous marriage partner, not insulting the duke's daughter. Ian doubles down and says that as a Kaistine prince, he will not hide from the battle of ranking just to protect a future engagement. Then he makes his real move and asks the king to delay choosing his fiancée until after the battle of ranking is over. The nobles start nodding along, because Ian's request sounds reasonable and also protects Lavolter's daughter from being tied to a prince who might die soon. Garcia immediately sees the trap. By postponing the marriage, Ian can keep both dukes competing to support him without promising himself to either one yet. King Eloin accepts Ian's proposal and, in the same breath, strips the second prince of his palace and his acting position as first in line. The king leaves him only one last chance, making it clear that if the prince wants everything back, he will have to seize it through the battle of ranking. The sentence is sealed when the king formally annuls the second prince's engagement to Lavalter's daughter and orders him taken away for investigation. Ian bows with a bright smile, while Garcia and Lavalter keep shooting murderous looks at each other over who will ultimately claim him. Once outside the palace, Ian walks off refreshed, and Karen hurries after him trying to understand what just happened inside. Ian needles Karen by pointing out that he never seemed very attached to the Garcia family, even though Karen is suddenly nervous about being isolated from them now. Ian brushes the issue aside for later, but Karen can already feel that Garcia and Lavalter may start a brutal support war around this prince. Then the escorted second prince lunges close enough to spit out a threat, furious that Ian has driven him this far. Ian answers with a cool jab, asking if the second prince plans to win openly this time or send another assassin from the shadows again. When the second prince realizes Ian knows about the assassin, Ian twists the knife and lies that the first princess was the one who revealed his secret. That fake confession is enough to poison their alliance, and Ian watches the second prince get dragged away knowing the royal siblings will start stabbing each other in the back. Back at Crystal Palace, Ian is pleasantly surprised to find Nathan waiting outside for him. Galen quietly lets Ian know that Nathan seems to have chosen him, while Nathan adds that the second prince's factions are already looking for Ian, and Karen listens with growing tension. Nathan reminds Ian that things will get busy fast, and Ian dryly accepts that as part of having a swordsmanship teacher like him. A knot cuts off the moment, and the first batch of arrogant young tutors sent by the nobles files into Crystal Palace to start preparing Ian for the test. One of those tutors, Maiden of the Orlan family, comes in with a secret order from his side: make the seventh prince fail by feeding him bad knowledge and breaking his spirit. Maiden feels confident because he assumes Ian is just an ignorant child from low birth who can be manipulated at will. But Maiden gets rattled when his turn comes absurdly fast, because the tutors before him are being thrown out one after another. The reason is waiting at the door. Galen is physically kicking out the last failed tutor while the man begs for one more chance. Even after seeing that, Maiden convinces himself the others just handled Ian badly, and he walks in planning to charm him first and control him later. Instead of a tired little boy, Maiden finds Ian sitting with tea like a composed royal, guarded by stern knights and completely in control of the room. Ian cuts through Maiden's attempt to introduce his pedigree and bluntly says background does not matter here, only whether he can actually teach. Maiden starts with easy royal history, expecting to guide the lesson, and Ian instantly corrects him on the very first battle. The lesson turns brutal when Ian names the battle correctly, cites alternate histories, and exposes Maiden's version as outdated nonsense. Maiden scrambles through other topics, but every subject gets shut down the same way as Ian tears apart his facts one after another. After only minutes, Ian closes the book and dismisses him, saying a teacher who cannot teach is worse than studying alone. Galen throws Maiden out just like the others, and Ian finally exhales after another useless tutor is gone. Ian realizes the nobles are only sending trash they can afford to lose, and none of them are remotely useful for surviving the fight ahead with his royal siblings. Karen is left staring at Ian in disbelief, because there is no way a boy from that annex should know this much. Ian casually claims he read the books in the Garcia household, and neither Karen nor Nathan fully buys how simple that explanation sounds. When Ian asks how many tutors are left, Galen says only 4 real teachers remain, plus etiquette instructors, and Nathan warns that one of them comes from his own family. Ian simply orders them all brought in, ready to clean house again. Elsewhere, the nobles backing the first princess start panicking because their scheme to make Ian fail has collapsed, and a lot of their money and assets are already riding on his defeat. Marquis Adels listens with a dark expression, but what really gnaws at him is that Ian somehow asked for a northern territory Adels secretly wants for himself. Some of the nobles are even starting to admire Ian's knowledge, which only irritates Adels more because he does not care how talented the boy is if the boy remains an obstacle. When someone proposes assassination or poison, Adels rejects it as too obvious while all eyes are fixed on Ian's upcoming test. Adels decides on a last resort instead. If Ian cannot be removed quietly, he will be made to fail in a way that looks legitimate. Several days later, a new visitor arrives at Crystal Palace, and even Galen notes that this one is different from the noble children sent before. Galen reveals that the newcomer is a prominent scholar sent jointly by Marquis Adels and the king himself. When Ian hears the scholar is from Gratunias, his eyes light up instead of darkening, because the expert he has been waiting for has finally arrived. At the king's command, the famously hard-to-meet grand scholar arrives to assess Ian, and Karen immediately looks nervous just seeing him. The old scholar starts cold, criticizing Ian for sending away gifted noble students who were supposed to teach him. Ian stays polite, and quietly orders Karen to serve the special tea he prepared for exactly this visitor. Karen expects the cheap, strange-smelling tea to offend the grand scholar's famously picky tongue. Instead, the grand scholar lights up when Ian identifies it as rare Mount Elrin tea and offers to serve it with milk. Even after enjoying his favorite tea, the grand scholar bluntly says he still will not help Ian and plans to leave the teaching to his disciples. Ian smoothly shifts the conversation and asks the old man to inspect the textbooks he chose for himself. The Grand Scholar freezes when he spots the rare out-of-print book Scholar Aldrin's theory of pedagogy among Ian's reading. Ian calmly explains the book's argument that knowledge should be shared, and the Grand Scholar realizes the boy truly understood it. Ian privately enjoys the payoff, because Aldrin is the Grand Scholar's own hidden pen name, and he had Karen and Nathan scramble to obtain the book in advance. After reviewing Ian's studies, the Grand Scholar gets angry for a different reason. The teachers sent to Ian were far below what his level deserved. With the old man finally on his side, Ian brings up a rumor about low-born scholars and carefully guides the talk where he wanted it all along. The Grand Scholar confirms that talented outsiders do exist at Gratunias, and Ian immediately asks to be introduced to those overlooked oddballs. Ian locks onto the chance because he knows those eccentric scholars can become a huge force if someone wealthy claims them first. The Grand Scholar agrees to arrange the introduction, and Ian casually shifts topics just as a second visitor is announced. Nathan hurriedly hides the stolen book when Orlando Adelas, Nathan's older brother and Ian's test inspector, enters the room. Orlando delivers the new condition of Ian's Crystal Palace test. In 1 month at Opal Palace, he must receive an envoy as the king's representative. Then Orlando makes the trap obvious. The royal family and Ministry of Finance will give Ian no money, no servants, and no help at all for the banquet. Ian sees the insult for what it is, but instead of panicking, he calmly decides to move first. To Karen's horror, Ian announces he is going to pay Duke Garcia a visit and borrow money, though he hints he has no intention of playing by their rules. Thanks to the king's permission to leave during the test period, Ian quickly reaches Duke Garcia's residence in the capital. Duke Garcia welcomes Ian warmly at first, but when Ian asks for banquet funds, the Duke refuses unless Ian promises not to side with Lavalter. Ian immediately understands the price of Garcia's help and recognizes the Duke is trying to force him to cut Lavalter loose. When Ian turns to leave, Duke Garcia tries one more push by claiming Lavalter is busy in the north and too honorable and strapped for cash to help anyway. Ian coolly reveals he never planned to rely on either Duke for money in the first place, because he can make funds another way and only wanted a noble negotiator. Before leaving, Ian drops a baited farewell, saying he had hoped to do something significant for the Garcia family, and the Duke is left wondering what exactly he meant. Back at the castle, Karen guesses his father had reasons for refusing, and Ian makes it clear he already understands that much. Karen desperately offers to scrape together money through gambling, but Ian brushes it off and starts studying a map and list of nobles instead. Ian narrows the problem down to one need. He has to find someone with real resources who will not betray him first. Just then, Galen announces an unexpected guest, Countess Arya, from one of the richest families in the kingdom. The moment Ian hears her name, his faith hums again, telling him this visit is tied to the same strange power he noticed before. The story briefly shifts to Duke Garcia's study, where his eldest son Ulrich points out that the Duke's refusal to help Ian was deliberate, not personal. Garcia explains the real danger. Once his money starts covering royal events, King Eloin will keep pulling at the family's wealth through Ian. Even so, Garcia admits Ian is proving far more valuable than he expected, and that makes the decision sting. Father and son head to the palace to formally state they will not support Ian this time. There, Count Bandas smugly greets Garcia and taunts that Ian already chose Lavalter, so Crystal Palace will naturally fall to the first princess instead. Bandas keeps needling him, sneering that rootless Ian came crawling to Garcia and was wisely rejected. That mocking push works a little too well, and Garcia suddenly changes his mind on the spot. Now irritated, Garcia decides he will help Ian after all, just to make sure the prince learns he cannot stand independent of Garcia. Back in Ian's room, the announced guest finally enters as a middle-aged Countess Arya, and Ian immediately senses the supposed countess is an imposter. Ian clears the room at once, sending Galen and a protesting Karen outside so he can confront her alone. As soon as they are alone, Ian bluntly tells the countess to stop pretending and show her real face. To force the issue, Ian threatens to keep the mysterious power he took from her instead of returning it with the scented candle matter. Cornered, the woman rips away the fake face and reveals the beautiful young merchant Ian met in the slums. Ian presses her about how she entered the royal castle, and she admits the disguise is made from human skin so it passes inspection better than magic tools. Ian instantly calls that murder, and she hastily blurts out that she only borrowed the skin from someone already dead. Ian skips the moral shock and zeroes in on the useful part. With that disguise, she can infiltrate the palace almost at will. When Ian asks who she really is to the Arya family, she finally gives the shocking answer that she is Countess Arya herself. That claim changes everything for Ian, because a powerful Arya alliance could solve his funding problem without Garcia. Looking closer at her bare face, Ian also notices she strongly resembles Line, the tactician tied to Gerard's side. Then Ian makes his move with a shamelessly blunt proposal. If he gives her stolen power back, she should lend him money forever, interest-free, or better yet for free. Inside Crystal Palace, Countess Rhys Arya flatly refuses when Ian asks her to lend him money. Ian keeps smiling, but Rhys is desperate because he still holds the power she needs for her revenge. Rhys cannot openly fund the seventh prince anyway, because her public ties to the first princess would expose her secret support for the third prince. Ian suddenly offers to forget the loan and return her power if she answers just one question. Reese assumes he wants faction secrets, but Ian asks instead what her connection is to Line. When she pretends not to know that name, Ian presses harder and asks about Adria of Intellect, the destroyed Great Ducal House. That name instantly snaps something in Reese, and she lunges at Ian with a hidden dagger. Outside the door, Karen tries to eavesdrop because he cannot figure out why a first princess ally is meeting Ian in secret. Galen catches him first and smacks him for forgetting a servant's place. Karen tries to argue that a servant needs to know his master's business, but Nathan shuts that down with a broom to the head. Then the mood shifts fast when Crystal Palace servants suddenly start packing to leave. The Chamberlain explains that all support and wages for Crystal Palace were cut off because Ian's test has begun. Karen realizes the Queen's inner court is using its authority to starve Ian's palace before the test even starts. The servants' wages alone come to 10 gold, and Karen reluctantly tells them to wait until dinner while he speaks to Ian first. His bad feeling is right, because one bill after another piles in from the kitchen, gardens, and magic tool staff. Karen wants to run, but Ian had already warned that if he disappears, Karen will be the one left holding everything. When Garcia family visitors arrive, Karen expects one thing and gets an even bigger surprise. Ulrich tosses him Garcia's highest level family card, the one that can draw unlimited money. But the card is not for Karen at all. Duke Garcia wants Ian to taste Garcia's power and become dependent on it. There is also a condition: Garcia will only help when Ian is truly desperate, never before. Karen rushes back to Ian with the card, thrilled that the money crisis is solved at last. Ian kills that excitement in one line and says he does not need Garcia's card anymore. Ian says he already found a better sponsor, and Karen is stunned to see Countess Reese Aria sitting behind him with tear-swollen eyes. Then Ian moves straight to his next plan and orders preparations to serve the Western envoy dragon meat himself. At the same time, Nathan slips away from Crystal Palace after delaying as long as he can. Galen stops him once, but Nathan smoothly claims he is only stepping out for air and gets waved through. Nathan heads straight to the First Princess's Lily Palace, where she and her faction are already waiting for his report. Nathan tells them Crystal Palace is in confusion, and that Ian failed to get money from Duke Garcia. Her faction celebrates, convinced the 7th prince will soon give up Crystal Palace and leave it open for the First Princess. The First Princess asks for more, and Nathan adds that Ulrich told Karen to be ready to abandon Ian at any time. Nathan also reports that Ian seems ready to head out onto the royal road, likely to chase money by other means. Confident Ian cannot meet the envoy's standards, the faction starts planning the reception as if Crystal Palace is already theirs. When dragon meat comes up, they scoff at the idea and settle for serving wyvern meat instead. After the report, Marquis Adelas asks what Nathan needs next to tighten his hold on Ian. Nathan asks to borrow one of the treasures the first king once gave their family, saying it will help him earn the 7th prince's trust. Back in Ian's room, Karen stares at the thick purchase list and nearly chokes on how expensive this dragon plan really is. Karen tries to drag the conversation back to the test and the unpaid palace, but Ian barely treats that as the real problem anymore. Ian calmly says the money issue is already handled, because Reese accepted an indefinite interest-free loan with no conditions. That only makes Karen more alarmed, because to him this looks exactly like a trap from an enemy noble house. A few minutes earlier, Reese lunged with a hidden dagger, but Ian's white cloak snapped around her arm and weapon before the blade could reach him. Ian points out that her reaction is far too intense for simple outrage, and Reese realizes she has been losing control of her emotions. Ian figures out that his faith is stirring the 7th virtue inside Reese, as if his power outranks hers. Instead of threatening her as a traitor, Ian says he is Line's lord and finally names the truth she cannot ignore. He reveals that Line is really Royn, the only surviving son of the fallen Adria family. Reese tries to deny it, but Ian calmly adds that Royn survived after nearly dying and is now with Gerard's mercenary corps. The moment Gerard's name lands, Ian knows he has found the crack in her denial. To prove it, Ian shows her Gerard's potion bottle engraved with the Adria family's turtle and twin snake heads insignia. Reese still tries to defend herself by saying Ian could have killed Royn and stolen the proof. Ian coolly twists the knife and says if she prefers, he can claim Gerard betrayed Royn and handed everything over to save himself. When Ian turns to leave and dismisses her as the daughter of a ruined traitor house, Reese finally breaks. In a trembling voice, she asks the one thing that matters now, whether her little brother Royn is truly alive. Ian swears on his faith that Royn lives, and the power inside him reacts, as if sealing the truth. That oath shakes Reese more than any threat, because part of her knows she wants to believe him. Ian offers the deal plainly: help him now, and he will let her meet Royn again. He tightens the hook by saying Royn is hiding so well that only Ian can reach him now. When Reese asks why, Ian reveals that Gerard and Royn have already sworn loyalty to him. And even in that emotional moment, Ian still circles back to the real point and asks her to lend him money for free. Now in the present, Karen keeps warning that Reese must be setting a trap, but Ian is already too far ahead to care. Ian tells Karen to follow the list and feed the hyenas circling Crystal Palace, because he is ready to turn their pressure back on them. Karen still cannot believe Reese can really cover a cost this insane, but Ian already knows the hidden reason she can. The real reason Reese can fund Ian is that the Arya house was built to hide Audria's surviving wealth, knowledge, materials, and people after the ducal family fell. So Reese tells Ian not to worry about the money and focus only on passing his test. A few weeks later, the day of the final inspection arrives, and Ian's rivals come expecting to watch Crystal Palace fail. Instead, the first thing they see is a completely transformed Crystal Palace, and the shock hits immediately. The renewed grounds make the upset worse, with a real flower garden and a new greenhouse standing where Crystal Palace once had almost nothing. The guards are dressed in top-grade armor, expensive enough that even aristocrats recognize master-level work. Even the servants look different, wearing stylish uniforms so refined the nobles suspect a famous designer made them. Then they notice the servants themselves look healthy and well-fed, not like overworked palace staff at all. A servant quietly reveals Ian's new policy: better pay, proper days off, and meat for those who work hard. That revelation only makes the nobles grind their teeth harder, because their spies never reported any of this. They scramble for an explanation and suspect Garcia, but Duke Garcia's own angry face suggests this was not his move either. Then Ian appears at the open Crystal Palace entrance, smiling at the crowd that came to watch him fail. With perfect calm, Ian welcomes them inside and turns their inspection into his own moment of victory. Inside Crystal Palace, Ian coolly invites the nobles in, and their nerves spike the moment they realize his palace no longer looks neglected at all. The deeper they walk, the more the nobles are stunned by rare ceramics and famous paintings that should be almost impossible to gather in one place. Merchant nobles rush up to Ian and ask how he got priceless Arn province pottery, and Ian casually says he bought everything with money he made selling valuable goods. Their confusion only grows, because the collection is rich enough to tempt other royals, and Ian quietly enjoys knowing he paid for it with information Countess Arya valued more than treasure. When the nobles recognize Madame Arya's famous work on Ian and even on the servants outside, they are even more shaken that a prince who never leaves the palace somehow reached the kingdom's hardest designer to book. Ian needles them for acting like they planted spies on him, and before anyone can recover, the king, queen, and royal family arrive to inspect the transformed Crystal Palace. Seeing the once abandoned palace restored, King Eloin openly says his expectations for Ian are rising, which makes the hostile nobles grit their teeth. The test begins with Ian seated alone in the middle of the hall, while the nobles whisper that passing all 10 subjects should be impossible, even for a clever child. Orlando Adelas steps forward as examiner and announces the first subject, accounting, clearly confident the specially prepared problems will stop Ian cold. The accounting questions are brutal tax calculations that would give even adult lords a headache, but Ian reads them like familiar work. Less than 15 minutes later, Ian puts his answer sheet down and calmly declares he is finished. The hall erupts in disbelief, and Orlando's confidence starts slipping when he realizes every single answer is correct. With the Grand Scholar watching too closely for any lie, Orlando has no room to cheat and is forced to announce that Ian passed the first test. Orlando tries to regain control by calling for a break before the next test, since the exam was supposed to stretch over days, not collapse in minutes. Ian immediately rejects the delay and tells Orlando to bring all 9 remaining subjects at once because dragging this out is just a waste of time. The royal family scoffs at Ian's arrogance, but Orlando sees a chance to make him slip and eagerly accepts. The next subject is philosophy, built to crush anyone who has not memorized mountains of ancient and modern thought, yet Ian starts writing without a pause. Because Garcia's scholars drilled these theories into him in his previous life, Ian tears through philosophy too and lands another perfect score. Then the same thing keeps happening again and again, as Ian blazes through subject after subject until 8 tests are already finished. Even the swordsmanship test fails to stop him, leaving Orlando stunned that a child raised like a serf can identify obscure regional styles just by watching nightly movement. As the impossible streak continues, the queen's face turns colder, the other royals grow grim, and the king's tiny smile keeps deepening. By the time only one subject remains, Orlando is desperate, because if Ian clears this last hurdle, Crystal Palace becomes his by right. Still, Orlando clings to one last trap and unveils the observation test, saying the palace owner must personally judge gifts from foreign envoys. Under the cloth is Lady of the Black Pearl, and Orlando asks Ian to decide whether the famous masterpiece is genuine or forged. After examining the painting with unusual care, Ian answers that it is genuine. Orlando instantly springs the trap, declares the work a forgery, and says Ian has failed the final test. The nobles are thrown off because the copy is so flawless they also thought it was real, and even King Eloin is disgusted that a forgery ever reached his castle. Accepting the result as a matter of royal luck, King Eloin rises and starts to announce that Ian is stripped of ownership of Crystal Palace. Ian cuts the king off mid-declaration and firmly says the test is not over because he passed. The banquet hall ripples with disbelief, because Ian is not just challenging Orlando now, he is openly pushing back against the king's verdict. Keeping his composure, Orlando points out a hidden mark in the lady's dress and explains that it matches the signature trick used by the famous forger Florence. He doubles down by saying he personally verified it with Florence himself, making the court think Ian is just refusing to accept defeat. Ian answers by walking straight up to the painting, ignoring Orlando's alarm and the court's confusion. Then Ian grabs the nearby candle flame and sets the painting on fire in front of the entire royal court. The room explodes in panic, because even a forgery by Florence would still be worth a fortune, and now the prince looks completely unhinged. But Ian stays perfectly firm and says he passed because there are no forgeries in Keistein's royal castle, only genuine works. That logic lands at once. Ian is protecting royal honor by refusing to let a fake exist in the castle at all, even if it means burning the scandal away. The third prince suddenly laughs and admits the youngest is impressive, even if his move was reckless. King Eloin also bursts out laughing and says Ian at least earned a different reward for entertaining him, though he still starts to uphold the original loss of Crystal Palace. Then the flames die down, and the whole hall freezes when another painting appears hidden behind the burning forgery. With the real Lady of the Black Pearl now exposed behind the fake, Ian repeats that he passed because the genuine Gardio von Leverbaum masterpiece was there all along. Ian calmly repeats that he passed the final test and that the painting is a real work by Gardio von Leverbaum. When the burned-over forgery gives way, the hall erupts because the elegant noblewoman painting hides a scandalously nude version underneath. The nobles are horrified that such an indecent image could be tied to the famously refined Leverbaum, but Ian knows they are missing the truth about the artist. Ian understands what really happened. The famous forger Florence had actually been Leverbaum's disciple and painted over his teacher's shameful work to protect his honor. Instead of explaining all that, Ian throws out a bolder claim and says he once met Leverbaum in person. He spins a believable story that the wandering painter came looking for angelic and demonic models, reached Ian's village, and drunkenly confessed this painting as a lifelong regret. Orlando grits his teeth and says he will verify it, but the mood in the room has already shifted against him. Watching the upset nobles, King Eloin privately admits the test was absurd from the start, and that he never truly expected Ian to pass. The king had accepted the test only to satisfy political pressure, and to measure Ian's talent and persistence, not because he planned to hand over Crystal Palace. Then the king laughs and publicly declares that Ian Keistein has passed the test after all. Some nobles immediately protest about the last painting, but the king shuts them down by calling the whole challenge nonsense in the first place. He twists their own argument back on them and warns that if fairness matters so much, every other heir should take the same brutal exam too. That threat lands hard enough that even the third prince visibly hates the idea of repeating Ian's test. Once the king hints that he could also question who deserves to stay in Crystal Palace at all, the nobles instantly back down and apologize. Galen quietly beams with pride as the whole scheme to block Ian finally collapses. Marquis Adelas glares at his youngest son, and Nathan can only stew in frustration because he really did exactly what he was told. Around the hall, the nobles whisper that Ian owning Crystal Palace changes everything, and now their only hope is that he fails when the imperial envoys arrive. Ian can feel the royal sibling's eyes change as his victory turns him from a cute little brother into a real rival. King Eloin moves on from the test and announces that he will now honor his promise to Ian. The king grants Ian the northern royal territory he asked for, and Ian bows in thanks while quietly celebrating the people and assets hidden there. King Eloin sweetens the deal by promising to support the territory's development with tax exemptions and migration privileges, which makes the prize even more valuable. Ian is thrilled because this reward finally gives him the base he needs to prepare for the succession struggle and the battle of ranking ahead. The king immediately warns him not to get comfortable, because hosting the imperial envoys could decide the balance of power across the continent. The noble sees that opening and politely asks permission to help Ian, clearly trying to keep their hands in Crystal Palace affairs. King Eloin coldly refuses and makes it clear that the responsibility is his and the job belongs to the seventh prince alone. The nobles submit, reminded all at once that the smiling king in front of them once seized the throne through bloodshed. As they prepare to leave with forced congratulations, the king suddenly stops them and reminds everyone about the wagers they owe Ian. One after another, the nobles grimly hand over what they bet, from soldiers and cavalry to family treasures and huge stores of supplies. Marquis Adelas takes the cruelest loss of all, grimly surrendering his family's prized summer villa to Ian. Ian cheerfully says he hopes to visit the Adelas territory soon, turning the villa handover into an extra little sting. King Eloin adds that he will send Ian a separate personal gift, and Ian instantly starts wondering what useful card the king might be giving him next. With the test finally over and the court leaving Crystal Palace, Ian feels that the pieces he needs are starting to come together. After the crowd thins out, Phaeson arrives, bows to Ian, and says the king finally accepted his resignation so he can now serve at Ian's side. Ian gladly accepts him, but Nathan immediately blows up because he hates the idea of Phaeson being assigned here too. Ian casually explains that he settled this with Lavalta while Nathan was away, and from now on Phaeson will be one of his knights. Phaeson leans in and warns Ian that Nathan is probably the first princess's spy and worse, a rotten pain to deal with. Nathan snaps back that he can hear every word, and the two knights instantly fall into open bickering in front of Ian. When Ian wonders why their hostility is this bad, Galen quietly explains that he, Nathan, and Phaeson all came up through the same training camp together. Then Duke Garcia approaches Ian, apologizes in his own way for being late, and sharply blames Karen with his eyes for failing to make Ian use the Duke's card. Ian smoothly says he already had a better sponsor, then hints that if Duke Garcia wants his cooperation, he should offer a true favor with no strings attached. The Duke is caught off guard when Ian bluntly defines that favor as a huge sum with no conditions, no interest, and no deadline. Realizing he still needs Ian's help regarding Countess Aria, Duke Garcia swallows the insult and offers unconditional support for the envoy reception and the ingredient hunt. Just as Duke Garcia tries to lock in his position with Ian, Marquis Adelas cuts in with a polished smile and says he wants to help too. Back in Crystal Palace after the test, Duke Garcia openly mocks Marquis Adelas for suddenly claiming he wants to help Ian. Adelas smoothly argues that yesterday's enemy can become today's friend, pretending this is just neighbors helping neighbors. He adds that his son already serves Ian, so there is supposedly no reason he cannot support the new prince too. Ian answers with a bright smile, but he immediately asks the real question: what exactly does Adelas want in return? Adelas finally shows his hand and asks for development rights to a northern coal mine called Balaran. Ian's eyes harden at once because he knows Balaran is hiding future historical ruins, rare herbs, and minerals that could become vital war supplies. Adelas sweetens the trap by offering workers, facilities, and transport, making it sound like Ian can earn money without lifting a finger. Ian sees through it immediately and realizes Adelas wants to swallow the richest part of the territory while pretending to help. Even so, Ian calmly agrees, which makes Garcia think the boy has lost his mind. Then Ian flips the whole deal and says Adelas can buy those rights as a friendship fee instead. Ian calmly explains that since he still does not know which nobles are worth trusting, he will auction off the rights to support his territory and handle the envoy reception to whoever offers the most. The nobles go stiff because Ian has turned their attempt to control him into a bidding war on his terms. To force their hands, Ian casually reveals that reliable information says his land contains ancient ruins and special minerals. That public reveal instantly exposes why Adelas wanted Balaran so badly, and the whole hall erupts. One noble shouts an offer of 1,000 gold, and the scramble to buy Ian's favor begins on the spot. The bids jump higher and higher until Crystal Palace looks less like a court and more like a loud marketplace. Ian keeps smiling and tells Adelas he can join the bidding too, but only 2 supporters will be accepted. He immediately reserves one of those slots for Duke Garcia, calling him a precious benefactor and tugging at the Duke's wavering loyalty. Garcia had been tempted to pull away because of Lavalter and Countess Aria, but Ian's trust makes him hesitate to abandon the boy. Before Garcia can answer, Karen rushes through the noisy hall, pale-faced, and urgently tells Ian they found the dragon he mentioned. Karen whispers the real disaster: that dragon is already attacking Ian's territory. Elsewhere in a deserted palace garden, the first princess corners Countess Aria and accuses her of running the plan by helping Ian. Aria does not panic and insists she acted for the first princess's sake, not against her. To prove it, Aria presents a spy-linked item and reveals that the second prince planted a spy on the first princess. Aria adds that Ian caught the spy first, traded the lead to her, and that the second prince may even be spying on the queen too. Those words hit harder because the first princess remembers Nathan already warning that the second prince does not truly trust her. Nathan's warning was blunt: the second prince is gathering information on her, and may be planning to stab her in the back first. He also claimed Ian wants to ally with the first princess because he fears the second prince's revenge after cutting off his arm. The proposed proof of that alliance was steep. If she can steal the sword of domination from the second prince, Ian will treat it as a token of trust. She knows that price is outrageous because her rotten brother never lets that sword out of his hands. That suspicion pushes her to visit the second prince's annex in person and test him with her own eyes. The second prince greets her with a bright smile, and she smiles back just as sweetly while silently deciding she will betray him first if even a little of this is true. In her mind, the plan sharpens fast: steal the sword of domination, sabotage the Western envoy's reception, and drag Ian into disaster. She is not aiming for Ian alone either, because in her private smile she also plans to throw her brother into the abyss with him. After the Crystal Palace test, King Eloin changes his routine and now sets aside time morning and evening to hear reports on each successor. A palace report tells King Eloin that the second prince is still trying to contact nobles from confinement instead of giving up. King Eloin treats that as expected, saying the second prince would naturally try to rebuild after his faction was weakened. The next report says the alliance between the second prince and the first princess may be collapsing into open hostility. King Eloin only chuckles that they are foolish, because there was never room for more than one claimant to the throne anyway. Next comes the first princess. She is buying up all the wyvern and dragon meat on the market to sabotage Ian's envoy reception. The king refuses to interfere, deciding that if Ian passed the test, he should solve that problem himself. The reports continue as the third prince gathers knights, the fourth prince gathers scholars, and the wider race to impress the envoy heats up. Even the unsupported second princess is making her move by quietly winning over palace servants and workers. When the chamberlain worries about her reaching into the main palace staff, the king allows it and calls that her way of survival. The king knows why everyone is circling the envoy event so hard. Once the outsiders arrive, a major chance tied to the throne will open. Then the room shifts the moment the chamberlain starts Ian's report, because that is the news King Eloin always wants most. Ian apparently plans to entertain the Western envoy with a swordsmanship competition, and the king immediately approves of the idea. The next report is even bolder. Ian is preparing to hunt Banquet meat himself. Rumors say he aimed for a wyvern, but the chamberlain adds that Ian was actually trying to catch a dragon. The king is startled enough to ask whether Ian intends to join the hunt personally, because even a lesser dragon is dangerous. Still, the king talks himself into expecting only a lesser dragon, dangerous but manageable enough to impress the envoy. That assumption breaks when the king's escort knight rushes in with urgent news that Ian has already crossed the castle and headed for Helgaia. The king initially brushes the alarm aside, assuming Ian just went out to hunt the lesser dragon he had already heard about. Then the messenger blurts out the real scale of it. Ian is not after a lesser dragon at all, but something in the Earth Dragon class. For once, King Eloin is completely caught off guard, because even he never imagined Ian would aim that high. Ian rushes toward Helgaia after hearing a fire-breathing dragon is attacking his new territory, and he already knows this crisis was never part of his old life. Nathan confirms it is at least an Earth Dragon, which means ordinary hunters avoid it, and one blast of breath can burn people alive. Ian still insists on going himself because Helgaia is his land. He needs the dragon dealt with for the succession war, and he also needs dragon meat for the coming Imperial envoy. Nathan worries their speed is too slow, but the huge expedition around Ian shows he came prepared for a full dragon hunt. Ian's real confidence comes from the strange scholars he brought with him, especially the inventor Walter and his unfinished anti-dragon weapon. Walter beams when Ian personally asks for his help, thrilled that his dragon killer ballista will finally get a real test instead of being mocked as a useless invention. Ian quietly decides he has to win Walter over before this genius defects to the kingdom of magicians like he did in the future. Even with Nathan, Phaeson, and Galen beside him, Nathan bluntly warns that dragon hunting still looks suicidal if the weapons fail. Ian only answers that everyone will understand once they reach Helgaia, hinting he has already prepared another hidden card there. The timetable is brutal, so Ian leaves banquet preparations to Karen and Duke Garcia and focuses everything on catching the dragon before the envoy arrives. After days on the road, Ian's party reaches Helgaia's border and finds a village burned into a nightmare of ash and still burning ruins. The knights want to rush after the dragon, but Ian orders everyone to search for survivors first because a lord's duty starts with his people. His troops spread through the ruins and start pulling out the wounded, turning the dragon hunt into an emergency rescue. Then the healers report something deeply wrong. Medicine and divine power do not close the dragon's wounds, and even the fire on the houses refuses to go out. Nathan realizes this is no ordinary earth dragon attack and grimly warns the beast may be celestial dragon class or even higher. At the Beastwood's border, a hidden team from the Kingdom of Magicians panics after learning their dragon test subject has escaped into Helgaia. The wizards blame a rushed handoff tied to Keistein's third prince and a replacement mage who broke down under non-stop overtime. Even so, they decide the dragon must be retrieved alive no matter the cost because it is key to a bigger plan for conquest. As the pursuit begins, the Beastwoods itself starts to stir, as if the forest has noticed the dragon is gone. Meanwhile in Helgaia, Captain Chris and the last defenders huddle behind bulwarks as the dragon's fire melts their cover and burns soldiers to ash. The defenders fire back, but even direct hits bounce off the dragon's body and Chris is horrified when arrows cannot even pierce its eyes. The count of surviving troops drops to barely 200, and the news gets worse when Chris learns Helgaia's acting lord has already been taken away. Chris finally orders the remaining residents evacuated, even though retreat might cost him his head if the new prince sees the territory abandoned. The dragon notices the cluster of humans and gleefully opens its maw for a finishing blast before the evacuation can begin. Hidden nearby, foreign wizards from the Kingdom of Magicians watch the slaughter and calmly talk about reclaiming the dragon and even taking Helgaia for themselves once the defenders are gone. Just before the dragon wipes out the last defenders, a new voice cuts across the battlefield with one sharp order: fire. A giant harpoon slams into the dragon's side with a deafening crash and knocks the monster straight out of the sky. The hidden wizards go rigid because a dragon this powerful should never have been knocked down by a single hit. Then they spot Keistein's royal lion flag and a red-haired, golden-eyed child directing the attack, and suddenly the prince matters even more than the weapon. As the dragon crashes, Ian exhales in relief because his oversized gamble of hauling the ballistae all this way just saved Helgaia in time. The centurion rushes in with a strange warning that some people are already saying Ian must not catch that dragon. Ian has no time to chase that mystery because the wounded dragon roars and starts fighting again instead of dying. Walter, absurdly thrilled, starts analyzing the dragon's hide instead of panicking, already thinking about how to improve his weapon. Ian snaps Walter back to the real problem and orders the next shot loaded before the dragon can recover. When the dragon tries to spread its wings and take back to the sky, Ian immediately sends Nathan to stop it before the hunt becomes impossible. Nathan answers with his oath, flashing across the battlefield so fast he seems to vanish. He reaches the dragon in an instant, jumps onto its body, and shreds the thin wing membranes to keep it grounded. Walter is dazzled by Nathan's performance, but Ian stays cold-eyed because crippling the wings still does not mean they can kill or capture the monster. The second ballista finally comes ready, and Ian orders a killing shot aimed at the dragon's neck. But the dragon senses the killing shot, its vital areas glow red with fury, and the second giant bolt ricochets off instead of piercing its hide. Then the dragon fixes its eyes on Ian himself, recognizing the real threat behind the attack. The soldiers think it wants the ballistae and scramble to move them, but the dragon ignores the weapons and charges straight for Ian. Galen sees it first, triggers his oath, and throws himself alone into the dragon's path to keep Ian from being crushed. Against all expectation, Galen slams into the dragon and actually bounces the giant beast backward. Ian catches a strange flash around Galen like a brief glowing thread, but it vanishes so fast he cannot tell what he just saw. Knowing they need something stronger, Ian demands another option and Walter admits he has one last prototype, a ridiculously expensive chain snare round. Walter hesitates over the money, and Ian cuts him off with a flat promise to fund the research as long as the dragon gets caught now. Before the prototype can be ready, the dragon unleashes a terrifying roar that sends a wave through the battlefield and freezes bodies in place with dragon fear. Ian feels his body go numb, and even the oath-powered knights can only resist partially as their movements slow and their strength drops. Phaeson plants himself in front of Ian with his iron wall oath and blocks the dragon's attack even while his own body trembles under the fear. The defense cannot hold forever, and under the dragon's relentless tail blows Phaeson finally loses the shield. The dragon instantly wraps Ian and Phaeson in its tail and inhales for a point-blank blast, choosing fire over brute force to finish them both. Ian asks for the prototype one last time, but Walter can only beg for a minute they clearly do not have. Ian's face surges, but he knows his speed alone cannot protect everyone from a blast this wide. Then a new phrase rises inside him, resonating with the virtue power he once took from Countess Arya: "Be humble. All things shall be silent before me." A silent wave bursts from Ian and wipes out the dragon's fire before it can erupt, leaving only black smoke and stunned faces everywhere. Ian does not waste the miracle, and immediately gives the firing order the instant the dragon is left open. Walter's prototype hits, bursts apart, and sprays countless iron chains that cinch the dragon down in a brutal steel snare. Watching from afar, the Kingdom of Magicians operatives are shaken all over again because Kai Stein used an anti-dragon weapon they never expected and somehow even nullified dragon breath. Now the Kingdom of Magicians operatives fear something even worse. If Ian investigates the dragon, Kai Stein could uncover their whole operation. Back at the battlefield, the knights rush to Ian, and he calmly brushes off the danger while giving Phaeson credit for saving him. With the dragon restrained, Nathan jokingly asks if they should butcher it on the spot, but Ian orders the wounded treated first and the dragon kept alive for fresh banquet meat. Ian also decides to compensate and settle the surviving residents, partly from responsibility and partly because winning Helgaya's loyalty starts right now. Just as the battlefield settles, several travel-worn strangers approach Ian, praising the capture and trying to start a conversation about the dragon. Ian catches the tiny rune letters hidden on the stranger's skin and immediately realizes these merchants are fakes tied to the Kingdom of Magicians. The strangers keep up the act by opening their packs, calling themselves herb merchants, and offering medicine for the wounded first. Once the helpful act is in place, the strangers finally reveal their goal and ask Ian to sell them the captured dragon. They press harder, claiming the dragon carries miasma and evil energy, and warning Ian that he will be cursed if he kills it himself. Ian's expression turns cold as he sees through the lie and realizes these strangers walked up to steal the dragon back. Ian studies the supposed merchants around the dragon and immediately catches the biggest lie. Their exposed rune tattoos mark them as wizards, not traitors. Their story sounds even worse to Ian because dragons do not naturally spread miasma the way these men claim. But the blood and saliva really are eating into the ground, and that contradiction tells Ian this dragon is hiding a deeper secret. The fake merchants dramatically warn everyone not to breathe it in, and Ian plays along instead of exposing them too early. Ian tests them by saying he needs the dragon meat, and the men eagerly promise a secret medicine that can remove the supposed miasma if given time. That answer gives Ian the clue he wanted, and he realizes their trick needs time to set up. He suddenly claims the dragon must go straight to the capital for the king, which visibly rattles the disguised wizards. When a few of them start to move their hands for magic, Ian instantly changes tone and warmly offers them lodging so the trap stays hidden. Inside, Ian clicks his tongue because those hand signs confirm they are dangerous battle wizards, not simple scammers. He judges them to be at least 3-star wizards, strong enough to wipe out the crowded wounded area with wide area magic if he fights carelessly. So Ian settles on a cleaner plan. Let them think they are safe, build the stage, and strike later on his terms. Before he moves, Galen arrives with news that Helgaya's deputy lord has regained consciousness and wants to meet Ian. Ian notices that strange thread of light around Galen again, but with no time to understand it, he leaves the merchants behind and follows him. On the way, Nathan corners Ian with sharp curiosity, already sure he only delayed departure because those men are dangerous. Ian quietly tells Nathan the truth: those so-called merchants are the dragon's owners. Nathan's face turns murderous, and his hand jumps toward his sword, but Ian stops him before he blows the cover. Ian warns Nathan and Galen that the enemy are 3-star or higher wizards, and both knights go grim at once. He gives the order for tonight. They will eliminate the wizards, and only one captive needs to stay alive to talk. As Helgaia starts pulling itself together, Ian's soldiers stabilize the wounded even though the territory still lies broken around them. Seeing children left without families, Ian orders Helgaia's acting Lord Albert to build an orphanage once aid from the capital arrives. The acting Lord Albert bows deeply in gratitude, proving he is one of the few local nobles who did not run. When Ian asks what Albert really wanted, Albert keeps glancing toward the merchant group instead of talking about paperwork. Ian answers the unspoken question bluntly, and tells Albert those men are enemies who likely controlled the dragon. Then Ian walks right back to the enemy with a sunny smile and starts treating them like honored guests. Albert even brings out liquor and helps sell the act, making the wizards look like benefactors instead of suspects. Ian casually probes their origin by pointing out their unusual complexion and asking if they came from across the continent. The wizards dodge the question with a smooth lie about being from the eastern part of the kingdom, where people tan more easily. They try to steer the talk back to the dragon, clearly desperate to get close to it before Ian changes his mind again. Ian dangles bait by saying he might sell them the dragon instead, since rebuilding Helgaia will cost a fortune and he only needs a piece of meat. The disguised wizards instantly bite and promise any price if they can bite. Ian cuts them off again and says business can wait until the territory is cleaned up, unless these helpful merchants want to assist first. Trying not to lose their chance, the wizards agree to help and claim their magical tools can handle the dangerous climbing and repair work. The moment Ian points out the damage, the fake merchants finally start using real magic under the cover of tool talk. Ruined buildings surge back into shape, melted walls crumble away, and the ground itself starts rebuilding under the wizard's power. Watching the repairs, Ian almost admires how useful wizards are when he is the one making them work. The problem for the wizards is that magic drains both mana and stamina, and they are already starting to pant. Ian acts innocently concerned and asks if using those tools is really supposed to look this exhausting. Forced to keep the disguise, they lie that their tools run on the user's stamina, and Ian sweetly tells them to take it easy. But when they insist on hurrying so they can buy the dragon, Ian immediately points them toward even more damaged ground. The wizards grit their teeth because they cannot reach the dragon without first getting past the knights guarding it. Galen especially makes them nervous, and the group decides it is safer to keep pretending until they can break the dragon free. Their hidden goal grows even nastier as they decide that once the dragon moves, they might kidnap Ian too because they sense something unusual about him. Instead of getting closer to their plan, they spend the whole day being worked half to death by Ian's endless reconstruction orders. Then Ian casually mentions he already sent word to Lavalter for reinforcements, and that lands like a disaster on the wizards. Now they know they are racing the arrival of Duke Lavalter's forces, so they have to finish before stronger enemies close the net. Rather than surrender the initiative, the wizards quietly judge that the dragon may already be controllable from this distance. Fiason sees how drained they are and quietly asks Ian whether it is time to strike. Ian agrees and plans to let them finish restoring the plaza before the knights move in. But just before the attack begins, Ian catches a far more urgent threat: faint lines gathering across the area in a hidden magic pattern. He realizes the wizards have been building an explosion-type magic circle right under everyone while pretending to help. With the circle nearly complete, and the whole area in danger, Ian tenses to call the knights and hit first. Then a voice cuts straight into Ian's mind and calmly asks if he wants help. The voice offers a deal on the spot: hand over that dragon, and it will help him. Ian follows the voice to a nearby alley and finds a stranger standing there, human at first glance but wrong in a way he recognizes instantly. In the last beat, Ian understands what he is looking at: that stranger is a dragon. While the Helgaia cleanup continues, a strange voice suddenly speaks straight into Ian's mind and offers a deal: hand over the captured dragon, and it will help him. Ian quickly realizes this is high-level telepathy, and his sharpened senses point to a long red-haired man whose energy feels even fiercer than the dragon they already caught. Ian answers in thought instead of panicking, asking what kind of help the stranger can give. The unseen speaker only repeats one condition: Ian must hand over the dragon alive and undamaged. That demand annoys Ian immediately, because they came here for the dragon in the first place, and he has no intention of giving up the prize. Ian refuses the offer and says they can stop the threat without outside help. The stranger warns him that the hidden explosion circle will kill everyone, but Ian calmly points out that the core has not been installed yet, so it is still breakable. Ian reveals he has been stalling the wizard leader on purpose, because the most skilled caster usually handles the core and the center is always the weak point to target. And beneath all that logic, Ian has an extremely practical reason to reject the deal: he still wants dragon meat to entertain the envo. The telepathy cuts off, but Ian's heart races as he realizes a second dragon is here, and this one may be a legendary class that can take human form. Even so, Ian pushes the mystery aside, deciding that if a real dragon wanted the captive badly enough, it could have taken it by force already. Ian checks in with Nathan and Fiason, and they confirm the wizards' bodies were searched thoroughly but no hidden chest stones were found. That result worries Ian, because he was specifically afraid of self-destruct wizards who can kill even powerful knights by stabbing their own chests. He reminds the knights that rune engravings and finger seals are still enough to trigger magic, so every captured wizard must be restrained completely. Nathan and Fiason answer with a little rivalry, but both make it clear they are ready to shut the wizards down fast. Ian decides Galen can keep handling the dragon, then turns to Albert and gives the real order: split the wizards apart and hit them before they can regroup. Following Ian's plan, Albert starts peeling the disguised wizards away one by one under the excuse of reconstruction work. As soon as one wizard is isolated, Nathan and Fiason rush him together and drop him before he can cast. Ian's precautions kick in immediately, and the fallen wizard is gagged, stripped of tools, and bound so tightly he cannot speak or move his fingers. The quiet sweep keeps working, and soon more than half the disguised wizards are down before the rest realize what's happening. Then Ian notices the pattern change. The remaining wizards have finally sensed something wrong and are starting to gather together. He stops the piecemeal trap on the spot and orders everyone to surround the building before the wizards can finish whatever they are planning. Inside that building, the wizard leader Giovanni is alarmed when his men report they have lost contact with the scattered workers. His men confirm the giant explosion circle is still unfinished because the core has not been installed, and the deputy lord has kept interrupting the keycaster. That unfinished circle was meant to blast away a full kilometer of Helgaia, so Giovanni starts wondering whether the prince has somehow seen through them. To salvage the mission, one wizard proposes using the magic planted in the dragon's heart instead. Giovanni thinks through the two spells hidden there. One drives the dragon mad, and the other can make it self-destruct in a catastrophic magical blast. If they trigger that second spell, Helgaia could vanish and the shock would stir the beastwoods into attacking Kaistein's rear. He hates damaging such a valuable dragon, but the wizards remind him their real mission is to cripple Kaistein, and taking the seventh prince down with them would still count as success. Giovanni finally agrees and tells them to prepare the dragon plan without letting Ian notice. But before the wizards can act, the whole lodging explodes and caves in around them. Outside, Walter proudly claims the blast as his tiny special bomb, and Ian is genuinely impressed that something so small can blow apart a whole building. Ian immediately promises Walter generous research funding, already thinking this weapon will be useful again later. Fiason thinks they could have stormed the place instead, but Ian refuses to gamble with his people's lives against enemy wizards. That answer catches Fiason off guard, because Ian sounds less like a reckless prince and more like a lord protecting his own soldiers. Then the surviving wizards crawl out of the wreckage, and Giovanni comes out angry enough to drop the merchant act. Giovanni accuses Ian of repaying kindness with betrayal, and Ian coolly answers that the fake merchants never even had money to buy the dragon in the first place. Giovanni only smirks back, because he still has one last way to turn the whole battlefield upside down. A massive roar erupts across Helgaia, and the chained dragon suddenly goes berserk under magical control. The beast's scales start burning and melting through the steel chains, turning the captured dragon back into an immediate disaster. The knights instinctively move for the dragon, but Ian shouts them back toward Giovanni, realizing the wizard is the one controlling it. That call is exactly right, and Giovanni tries to escape the moment the knights understand what he is doing. Nathan lunges first, but Giovanni vanishes instantly with teleportation and shocks everyone who only knew that magic from books. Ian understands what that means at once. This is not a common enemy, but a wizard strong enough to use apex-level movement magic. While the others freeze and search for the next teleport, Ian reads Giovanni's trick and starts moving before anyone else. Giovanni teleports behind Ian to snatch the prince as a hostage, but Ian whips around and cuts his arm off first. The knights rush in as Giovanni screams, and Ian spots a small object flying away with the severed arm. Ian grabs that object immediately, realizing it is the key to solving the dragon problem. Giovanni teleports again before they can finish him, now furious and one-armed, with murder replacing every trace of restraint. He pours everything into ultimate flame magic with his remaining hand and declares he will kill the king's heir for his homeland. Ian and the knights react at once, but the teleporting wizard still moves faster than they can stop. Even with faith active, Ian can feel this attack is beyond what he can block, and the power he used before is already gone. Then, right before the killing blow lands, an unseen newcomer casually grabs Giovanni by the shoulder and wipes the spell out in an instant. The red-haired stranger quietly says that's it, and the battlefield goes dead still under the crushing bloodlust of something no human could mistake for ordinary. Just as Giovanni is about to kill Ian, a red-haired man suddenly appears behind him and says that is enough. Giovanni panics when his flame spell vanishes, unable to understand why his magic suddenly stopped working. When Giovanni tries to cast again, the red-haired man casually reverses the spell and burns him alive with his own fire. Giovanni drops as a charred lump, and the red-haired man wipes his hands like he just touched something filthy. Ian's knights jump in front of him anyway, because the stranger's killing intent feels even more dangerous than Giovanni's. The red-haired man is amused that they can even stand before him, but his mocking tone only makes the threat feel worse. Ian reads the situation fast and orders his men to lower their swords, because if this man wanted them dead, they would already be dead. The stranger seems pleased by Ian's judgment, and suddenly reaches toward him with magic gathering in his hand. The knights trigger their oath in panic, but the attack flies past Ian and slams into the dragon, charging him from behind. After dropping the dragon again, the man coolly says they should deal with that kidnapped mutated idiot first. Ian realizes the stranger probably stayed hidden because of the control device Ian stole from Giovanni. When the dragon gets up again, Ian coolly tells the stranger to stop it first and threatens to press one of the control device's buttons himself. Annoyed but cornered, the red-haired man goes to subdue the dragon for real. Elsewhere in the same ruined area, Walter stares at Giovanni's burned body in disbelief because the wizard is somehow still alive. Giovanni begs for death, but Ian has already decided he must be kept alive and interrogated about the kingdom of magicians. Ian's thoughts turn grim as he realizes a hidden high-level wizard operation and dragon control magic could mean a deeper threat to the kingdom. A heavy crash interrupts everything when the red-haired man returns dragging the unconscious dragon by its tail. Galen still tries to block him, but Ian steps out again because he is sure the man would have attacked already if that was his goal. The man thanks Ian for helping recover the dragon and offers any reward he wants, as long as Ian spares the dragon's life. Ian answers with a dry reminder that he came here for dragon meat, not treasure or grand promises. When the stranger calls that despicable, Ian pulls out the control device and turns the negotiation around. Ian points out the obvious weakness. This thing can control lesser dragons, and the stranger clearly dislikes getting near it. Ian even mocks the idea of continent conquest from a dragon who let humans capture one of his own, and the stranger finally admits he needed information from that dragon. Instead of explaining neatly, the stranger wakes the dragon by blasting its head, proving both his power and his terrible patience. The dragon starts to rage at Ian again, then freezes in terror when he recognizes the red-haired man as Yahello. Yahello shuts him up and demands answers, and the frightened dragon says traitor dragons were working with humans and are the reason he ended up like this. Yahello reveals that dragons above the celestial class are hiding across the kingdom in human form, especially around the kingdom of magicians, and some may already be interfering in Kaistine. That warning hits Ian hard, because if hidden forces reach the royal family, this could be tied to the succession struggle and other suspicious kingdom of magicians items he has already seen. Ian presses on and asks who Yahello really is if he came to save a dragon that is not even from his own clan. The captive dragon erupts in outrage and starts to proclaim Yahello's greatness, but Yahello cuts him off like his identity is not worth explaining. Yahello offers Ian a sword made from his own tooth instead, but Ian stubbornly circles back to dragon meat again. After a long locked stare into Ian's golden eyes, Yahello abruptly gives in and tells him to take the other dragon if he wants. The terrified dragon begs not to be discarded, but Yahello coldly makes it clear he would kill him himself if he keeps whining. Yahello's mood shifts when he studies Ian's golden eyes and mutters that he never expected to see that color again. Desperate to survive, the captive dragon falls at Ian's feet and offers a formal pledge instead of becoming meat. Ian still does not let him off easily, and Yahello cruelly adds that dragons like this are tasty enough that even other dragons eat them. Ian tests the boundary by asking for the tail, and when he learns it will not grow back, he realizes he can still bring the envoy a prized dragon cut without killing the whole creature. Ian pushes the deal further and demands teeth and a real favor as well, making the dragon pay dearly for surviving. Cornered by both Ian and Yahello, the dragon swears that he will answer Ian's call once whenever Ian truly needs help. The dragon then hands over a beautiful jewel he calls half of his dragon heart as an extra payment. Yahello casually tells Ian to cook or eat it however he likes, and only then does Ian finally count the negotiation as a real success. Ian's men can barely process that their prince just bargained face-to-face with dragons, though Galen cannot help looking impressed. Galen snaps the group back to reality by warning Ian that if they do not leave now, they will miss the envoy reception. As Ian prepares to go, Yahello stops him just long enough to ask his name. Ian gives his full name, and Yahello answers with a strange smile that he will remember him, if Ian survives that long. Yahello steps off the cliff and transforms back into a magnificent red dragon in midair. Staring up at the soaring dragon, Ian urgently shouts for his name at the last possible second. Only Ian hears the dragon's final answer in his ear, and the real shock is the full name, Yahello Kaistine. Ian stares after the departing dragon, stunned that Yahello called himself Yahello Kaistine before vanishing. That surname hits Ian hard, because Kaistine belongs to royalty, and he immediately wonders if the dragon is tied to the founding royal line. Ian runs through everything he knows about royal history and still cannot place the name Yahello, which only makes the mystery worse. He even suspects Yahello might be a distant ancestor, and the thought makes their blunt conversation feel suddenly reckless. But Ian cannot shake one contradiction. If Yahello really recognized his bloodline, why did he save him and still act like a stranger? Ian decides he will have to dig into this later, but Nathan cuts in with a teasing reminder that the envoy will reach the capital first if they linger. Back in command mode, Ian tells Albert he must return to the capital immediately instead of staying to greet the envoy here. Ian points out the captured wizards as the real priority, because the king needs to hear that the kingdom of magicians was behind the Helgaia disaster. Giovanni is kept under especially heavy restraint with Walter's chain, and Hyacinth stays close to make sure the burned wizard cannot escape. Ian quietly calculates that exposing the wizards, the dragon incident, and the unrest in Beastwoods could win his territory far more royal support. He also realizes Albert has handled the territory better than expected, so he leaves him in charge without looking for another deputy. With time running out, Ian orders the group to ride hard for the capital before the envoy reception slips from his hands. Elsewhere, Marquis Adela studies an illegal telegram about wizards, a dragon escape, an attack on the prince, and captives, but the chopped-up report barely makes sense. Even without a clean report, the Marquis decides one thing is clear: if Ian is bringing back dragon meat, he has to be stopped. Orlando smugly assures his father that Ian will never make it back before the banquet ends, because he has already arranged a trap to delay him. The Marquis still refuses to trust luck alone and orders troops deployed, making it clear Ian must be blocked no matter what. Orlando makes a snide jab at Nathan, and the father and son share a cold laugh over the plan to stop Ian. Back on the road, Ian's party races through Bandella's territory, and Nathan points ahead to the bridge that should reconnect them to the royal road. Nathan adds that the Crystal Palace has already been told to prepare the cooking, so if they keep moving fast enough the reception can still be salvaged. That hope dies the moment they reach the river and see the bridge collapsed into the torrent below. Nathan immediately realizes this should have been the untouchable safe route near Adela's land, which makes the collapse feel a lot less accidental. Fiason proposes a detour through Lavalter territory, and quickly sends word to a nearby family stable with a backup plan. He explains that Lavalter has an improved top bloodline called the Blue King, horses fast enough to cut the delay dramatically even with a detour. Ian's face darkens, because he knows something the others do not: these prized horses will mysteriously die the moment they leave Lavalter territory. Unable to reveal that future knowledge, Ian simply shuts the idea down and tells Fiason not to bring them. The soldiers misread his refusal as a young prince cracking under pressure and scramble to comfort him with talk of the king rewarding the wizard capture instead. Ian stays composed on the outside, but inside he is grinding his teeth because missing this reception would cost him far more than his pride. He remembers the hidden stakes. In the other timeline, the first princess used this very envoy meeting to secure support for a joint war with the Empire against Balhera. Ian wanted that diplomatic opening for himself, both to block his rivals and to gain access to the Empire's trade routes. He rides down toward the riverbank to inspect the torrent, and the knights rush after him thinking he is desperate enough to try something suicidal. When they beg him not to jump, Ian blinks at them and flatly says he was never planning to dive into the water. Then Ian calmly reveals he has a better way, and that answer leaves the men around him frozen in uneasy silence. At Opal Palace, the banquet hall is already packed because the first princess moved the envoy reception forward to steal Ian's chance. The first princess personally serves an elegant wyvern dish, hoping it can cover her failure to secure real dragon meat for the envoy. The guest praises the wyvern politely, but the first princess can read the tiny disappointment on his face right away. That tiny disappointment stings, because the first princess knows she let Ian's dragon meat gamble get inside her head and ruin her usual judgment. Before the first princess can recover, her sister arrives smiling with servants and offers her own supposed dragon meat in front of the whole hall. The rival dish fails instantly when the guest identifies it as drake instead of dragon, and the first princess watches the public embarrassment with tired recognition. Openly unimpressed now, the foreign guest moves to leave for the king instead, and the first princess can only watch the chance slipping away. The first princess goes tense as the banquet starts to collapse around her, still trying to salvage something before the king gets involved. Then a war alarm suddenly screams through Opal Palace, shattering the banquet in an instant. Royal knights draw swords and shout for protection formations, treating the palace as if it is under direct attack. The nobles and princesses rush outside in confusion, only to stop cold when they see a giant dragon descending on Opal Palace. The envoy can barely choke out dragon, and the shock gets worse when everyone spots a rider on its back. At the broken bridge, Ian says he has a better way and activates the promised Kenhil's dragon left on his shoulder. A huge shadow drops from the sky as the injured earth dragon answers the call almost immediately. The dragon grandly asks who Ian wants him to fight, only for Ian to dryly remind him he still owes that promised tail. When the dragon offers his tail right there, Ian stops him and asks for something much worse for the dragon's pride: delivery service. The dragon wants to refuse, but Kenhil's warning about never shaming Dragakind leaves him no way out. Ian immediately piles on more demands and tells the dragon to carry the wagon and gallon too. Before the dragon can leave, Ian also volunteers Nathan and Fiason for the ride, horrifying both knights. The dragon scoops them all up and rockets toward the capital, grumbling that he is not a carriage. Mid-flight, Ian casually climbs onto the dragon's head and asks what Kenhil told him before leaving. The dragon refuses to repeat Kenhil's words, so Ian changes tactics and asks for his name instead. Cornered by Ian's persistence, the dragon finally gives his name as Rio Banzame. Rio desperately tries to talk Ian out of eating the tail, admitting that losing it would hurt, weaken him, and ruin his balance. Rio reveals why dragon flesh is dangerous. It extends life and grants power, but most humans turn bloodthirsty and die soon after. Hearing that, Ian smiles like he just found a better idea and asks if Rio wants to trade the tail for something else. Ian offers a tempting substitute deal off-panel, and Rio eagerly accepts even though he knows this child is trouble. Rio takes off even faster after the bargain, and the brutal speed leaves Nathan and Fiason completely passed out. When the dragon reaches the royal castle, the entire place erupts in panic at the sight of a giant dragon overhead. The panic shifts when people notice a red-haired child sitting on the dragon's head and recognize Ian. Some nobles instantly tie the scene to the legend of Keistein's founder who once made a pledge with the dragon. The first princess turns from shock to calculation, silently pushing for a move against Ian before his dragon entrance changes the whole succession fight. The first princess silently signals the second princess to use her archer knight and turn the dragon panic into a chance to kill Ian. Antaniel draws his bow under oath, preparing to shoot at the dragon and send Ian falling with it. Before the arrow can fly, the royal guards announce King Eloin's arrival and the whole courtyard is forced to pause. The king is still trying to understand the dragon overhead when groaning voices from its grasp reveal Ian's half-dead knights. Once Eloin realizes Ian brought them back alive, he orders the guards to rescue them instead of attacking. Then Ian drops from the dragon himself, sending the whole courtyard into a fresh wave of horror. Instead of splattering on the stone, Ian lands neatly on one knee and coolly reports that he tried to bring it back fresh. Behind Ian, Rio spreads his wings and descends after him, making the live dragon itself the true delivery. Later in Opal Palace, Eloin watches the packed reception hall and realizes Ian has turned a stolen chance into a stunning show of power. The Manhwa, who wanted dragon meat so badly, nearly collapses just from seeing the real creature roar in front of him. Eloin looks at Ian with renewed hunger for a worthy heir, wondering just how far this son can go. Ian finally unveils the first dish and flatly announces that it is dragon cuisine. Everyone stares into the clear soup in disbelief, because after seeing that dragon alive, no one can tell whether Ian is insane or brilliant. Ian politely urges the envoy to eat, while the envoy's hand shakes too hard to even hold the spoon properly. Ian apologizes with a straight face, saying Cantum only accepts truly fresh dragon meat, so he specially airlifted one in. Too terrified to complain now, the envoy hurriedly insists he is grateful and finally takes a bite. A brief flashback reveals Ian bought time earlier by promising the king and envoy that he would finish the dragon dishes by dinner. When people question how dragon meat could be prepared so fast, Ian casually says the dragon himself explained it needs no curing. Back in the present, the envoy swallows the clear soup and jolts at the taste he has never experienced before. He admits the soup is delicious, fresh, and strangely energizing, which instantly convinces the whole room that Ian may have served real dragon cuisine. Only the palace chefs are sweating for a different reason, because they know that first course was not dragon meat at all. Ian then heads to the Opal Palace back garden, where Rio is being pampered under guard while the real main course is prepared. Instead of being butchered, Rio is happily soaking his feet in hot water like royalty, and asking for an even bigger bath. The watching chefs and knights finally realize with horror that the broth for dinner is literally dragon foot bath water. Ian explains the appetizer was even worse for the Empire, because it was made from dragon saliva boiled into a gourmet broth. Rio even helped by breathing fire into the pot, which deepened the flavor enough for the fake dragon course to pass perfectly. Ian assures the worried knights that the taste matters more than the ugly truth, and the dish is good enough to fool anyone who craves dragon. The knights refuse Ian's offer to taste it themselves, still too sick and grossed out from the flight and the cooking method. When Rio notices pieces of skin were removed from his feet, Ian casually says he needed solid ingredients too. Ian carries the second course back into the banquet hall and presents it grandly as dragon knuckle bone soup. The dish sounds exotic and convincing, but Ian knows the soup is really just a polished fraud made from Rio's footbath broth and soaked toe scraps. The first princess watches in growing alarm, because even the spies she sent to investigate Ian's cooking never came back. Ian pushes the bowls toward nobles and rival siblings alike, turning the dragon feast into a public test none of them can dodge. Ian's royal rivals all react in their own way, but the common shock is that the weak youngest prince just pulled off something none of them expected. Once they finally taste it, even Ian's hostile siblings cannot hide that the soup is far better than they expected. The nobles start whispering in amazement, and the envoy empties his bowl, openly satisfied with the meal and the spectacle. The envoy admits he came expecting only bad rumors about Ian, but now he sees a prince who can stand in front of a dragon. With the dragon show and the meal behind them, the envoy finally turns to Ian and says it is time to get down to real business. At the banquet, Ian abruptly says it is time to talk business, and the whole hall snaps to attention. Ian points out that the envoy did not come only to celebrate his legitimation, and the imperial guest confirms there is another purpose. The rival heirs instantly assume Ian is cutting into the hidden northern expedition issue, and their expressions turn cold. Because everyone knows the expedition against Byra could decide the succession through land and military command, they suspect Ian is aiming straight for that prize. The heirs shoot accusing looks at Duke Lavalter and Duke Garcia, wondering if those powerful backers secretly fed Ian the envoy's real agenda. Their confusion deepens when the dukes look genuinely clueless, which only makes Ian feel more dangerous. Just as the tension sharpens, King Eloin cuts in and says this is not the place for such talk, trying to move it to a private meeting later. But the envoy says he is interested and wants to hear Ian out right there, leaving the older heirs looking trapped. Then Ian swerves the whole conversation by asking if the envoy actually came over the Labadam village incident. The hall is thrown off balance because Labadam is only a border village, not the Byra campaign everyone was bracing for. The envoy confirms it, explaining that every villager in Labadum vanished and Cantum wants a joint investigation with Kai Stein. The envoy adds with a crafty smile that he expected to ask the princess who controls that area, and Ian watches closely because that is the opening he wanted. Ian immediately asks for the post himself, saying that if the envoy liked his reception, he wants to take the Labadum job. That choice stuns the room, because everyone thought the real prize was command of the Northern Expedition. When people press him, Ian plays the earnest prince and says he cannot ignore suffering farmers while a major military campaign should go to his older siblings. Most nobles laugh him off as naive, convinced he just gave up the one mission that could win land and real power. But Ian already knows the Labadum investigation will become the true pivot of the Northern Expedition and a much bigger continental controversy. Because they think he just removed himself from the real contest, nobles suddenly praise Ian and loudly recommend him for the joint investigation team. Even the rival heirs quickly agree, happy to push Ian toward what they think is a harmless side mission. Ian keeps his face perfectly respectful and bows to leave the decision to the king, while Eloin watches him as if he knows this choice is not as simple as it looks. King Eloin gives Ian one last chance to back out, asking if he truly will not regret passing on the bigger path. Ian answers without hesitation that he is content to serve as an investigator, and that larger matters should go to his older siblings. King Eloin turns to the Cantum envoy for approval, and the envoy agrees at once, still pleased by Ian's reception and dragon feast. With that, King Eloin officially names Ian the head of the joint investigation team for Labadum. Ian accepts the appointment with a quiet smile, but the other heirs barely care because they are still watching the envoy for any word about the Northern Expedition. When the envoy finally turns to the Northern Expedition, he shocks the hall by talking about the Empire's flower searching for a fiancé instead. To make it worse for the other heirs, the envoy openly suggests Ian as a candidate because he is still unmarried. King Eloin smoothly blocks the move, saying an imperial engagement is too important to settle on the spot and can be discussed later. The envoy keeps pressing for a definite time, making the whole banquet slide awkwardly into public engagement talks around Ian. Ian breaks the awkward public marriage talk by abruptly offering the hall more food, and the nobles jump at the excuse to move on. The envoy is the first to raise his hand, making it clear he likes Ian far more than the others expected. Later, away from the public banquet, the first princess cannot shake the feeling that Ian still knows something she does not. Her faction has already checked the Labadum matter, but Ian's recent streak is strong enough that she feels reckless lowering her guard now. Orlando Adelas approaches and assures her he has verified everything several times, trying to calm her down. Even so, the princess says Ian is growing too fast, and if they leave him alone much longer, beating him may become impossible. Because Ian is under too much attention now, she knows poison or assassination would be too risky. Orlando offers a cleaner weapon instead, move up the battle of ranking and use the royal duel system to break Ian legally. He reminds her that the battle of ranking is the hidden reversal card of the succession contest, where one fight can swing someone from first to last. The princess hesitates because she had planned to save that card for later, after Ian built up even more assets worth taking. Orlando presses the danger harder, warning that after the envoy's interest in Ian, waiting too long could cost them both the Northern Expedition and a link to the Cantum imperial marriage. He adds one more advantage. Ian cannot back down from the battle of ranking without losing face as a man. Then Orlando brings up Nathan, saying that since he stays close to Ian, he can move on his own if things turn dangerous. Her mood visibly improves because Nathan is secretly meant to become her fiancé, tying him tightly to her side. Orlando flatters that secret bond, insisting Nathan may seem carefree but would never betray the woman he is supposed to marry. Behind that smile, Orlando hides his own resentment that the princess always looked toward Nathan instead of him. Still, Orlando decides it does not matter as long as Nathan's marriage, title, and future all keep him useful to their side. Interested now, the first princess orders Orlando to have Nathan exploit Ian's weakness and wait for the right moment. If the moment demands it, the first princess even authorizes Nathan to draw his sword against Ian. While the banquet is still going, Duke Garcia walks up to Ian and coolly congratulates him on becoming the true owner of Crystal Palace. Garcia immediately turns the mood sharp and tells Ian that now he has proven himself, the real succession competition starts in earnest. Ian understands the upside and danger at once. Owning Crystal Palace puts him ahead, but it also means he can no longer stay half-hidden under Garcia protection. Garcia offers his help, saying Ian cannot survive the competition alone now that every prince and princess must prove themselves in real missions. Ian knows Garcia is right because the competition is not just swordplay like the battle of ranking, but a series of missions where noble backing can decide who rises and who fails. Garcia presses harder, boasting that unlike Lavalter, tied down at the northern front, the Garcia family can move troops and resources freely whenever Ian needs them. But Ian notices Garcia is skipping the usual sweet talk, which means this approach is not a favor but a warning. Garcia drops the real ultimatum and reminds Ian that if Ian will not use Garcia as his support, Garcia can always back a different successor instead. Ian reads it for what it is: choose Garcia's side now, or watch the second Duke strengthen one of his rivals. Garcia also reveals what pushed him to this point by bringing up Countess Risaria, making it clear he has been digging into Ian's hidden connections. That instantly puts Ian on edge, because if Garcia uncovers who Aria really is, he would never leave the last thread of the ruined Adria family alive. Ian quietly steels himself and thinks that once he takes the throne, restoring Adria will be one of his first acts, so he cannot let Garcia interfere now. So instead of accepting or refusing outright, Ian gives Garcia a smooth, delaying answer and says he will send his thoughts through Karen soon. Garcia accepts the dodge with a thin smile, but warns Ian to decide quickly or he may end up married off to the Empire instead. Ian barely has time to process that strange threat before Count Marty from Kentum calls to him from behind. The envoy chats cheerfully for appearances, then lowers his voice and asks Ian if he has thought about marrying Kentum's youngest princess. The room goes tense around them because the nobles realize the envoy is seriously trying to tie Ian to Kentum by marriage, not making a joke. Count Marty is fully serious because he came with imperial authority to find a husband for the cherished youngest princess, and Ian now looks like the perfect choice. In Marty's eyes, Ian is not just a prince but a legendary warrior fit for Kentum, because he handled dragon blood, dragon flesh, and even won a dragon's pledge. Ian finally understands Garcia's threat, because an imperial engagement would look prestigious but would also wreck his chance to inherit the throne. Since any heir who ties himself to a foreign power gets heavily restrained by the king, Ian knows this marriage would function as a golden cage, not a reward. So Ian politely refuses on the spot, saying the matter is beyond his authority, and he will follow his father's will instead. At the same time, Ian flashes that answer toward Garcia as a challenge, fully aware the Duke will not sit quietly after this. After the reception ends, King Eloin gathers all the successors and formally confirms that Ian is qualified to own Crystal Palace. The other successors tense up immediately, because they know the next royal announcement will officially drag Ian into the competition they wanted to keep him out of. King Eloin announces that now every successor has claimed a palace, the competition begins, and Crystal Palace will come with the special reward he promised. He explains the rules clearly. Each round has a shared theme and a separate personal mission, and a successor cannot afford to ignore either one. When Ian opens his edict, he sees the first competition theme is land and his own mission is to investigate the Cantum border and solve the village problem. Ian is startled because the assignment lines up perfectly with the investigation team job he already secured, making this a very profitable opening for him. The king gives everyone only 3 days to prepare, then leaves, and the heirs immediately start trying to read each other's missions. When the second princess presses him to reveal his mission, Ian snaps the edict shut and mocks the older royals for trying to cheat before the contest even starts. Ian walks out without giving them anything, because he already has a good idea what missions the others were assigned anyway. As soon as he exits the palace area, Ian catches Karen and moves straight into preparation mode. Ian first checks on the dragon remains left at Crystal Palace, and Karen confirms the dragon itself is gone but its teeth and claws were secured. Ian briefly remembers how the dragon left satisfied after enjoying absurdly luxurious royal treatment, and even promised to come again if called. Without wasting the chance, Ian orders Karen to turn the dragon's teeth and claws into weapons and armor, and to give Walter full budget support for his work. Then Ian refuses to throw out the remaining dragon dishes and instead decides to feed them to his own knights and soldiers. The people with Ian freeze at the idea, because he is calmly treating dragon meat like a military supply instead of a royal delicacy. Fiason cautiously asks whether Ian is really fine focusing on the investigation mission when the bigger northern expedition still hangs over the competition. Ian shrugs off the expedition concern, because he is already expecting his brothers and sisters to demand a battle of ranking first and try to knock him out before the missions really begin. He knows the logic too well. If they can injure or cripple him early, he could fail the competition before his mission ever has time to help him. That means long-term preparation is not enough, and Ian needs a fast way to build power before his enemies move. So he decides to visit the king with the captured wizards from Halgaia and trade them in for useful resources from the royal treasury. Just as Ian is about to head for the main palace, a handsome prince with glasses steps into his path and asks to speak privately. The glasses-wearing prince reveals himself as the fourth prince and calmly offers Ian an alliance on the spot.